Is now over as Team D and Black Mamba get ready to go out the gates here. Now, sorry, we've seen these teams a lot in MOTHERLOAD throughout Cup play, so we're going to be expecting exactly what we see here, the Mass Shroud coming up from the Rogues as they get near that kind of middle gazebo or hut area. Now, whether they line of sight at all, or whether they line of sight or pull everything inside or outside, we'll see in just a moment here, but expect definitely a fairly large pull off the bat.
Yeah, we saw MOTHERLOAD one time yesterday with these affixes, and I think we saw Method and A doing a slightly larger pull with 4 Peacekeepers plus a lot of trash, and it looked a little bit like a slower of a pull, but because of the massive amount of trash percentage that those Peacekeepers give, it actually ended up putting them just slightly ahead in the long run. So I want to see if either of these teams can pull that big pull off.
Yeah, a bit of chunk damage to Baby Pig there on Team D side, but they have committed their bloodlust. Both teams have indeed, as Black Mamba is now 5% on the board. Wong moving in, making sure to kite some of the Peacekeepers into the area here. Now, we did mention that these affixes are particularly dangerous for tanks. Not only is Necrotic stacking that healing taken, healing done debuff, but on top of it, Raging. 100% increased damage for these trash mobs, sub 30%. But sorry, it's not really just the tank. There's so much splash and residual damage on the group that they have to watch out for.
And there's so many particular things that we have to talk about. Not only those thugs charge stuns that Jack was talking about earlier, but the ice spritzers from the refreshment vendor are particularly dangerous, especially in that Raging affix. Just that ticking damage, you can see it going on to the healer there on the side of Black Mamba. That's a lot of damage. It needs to be interrupted, especially in Raging. And there's just also residual things, the hired assassins as well. If they get any of their flechettes off on the group, it could be a full team wipe.
Yeah, Toxic Blade, he's going to be interrupted. Not to mention, of course, you have the grease guns going on for the mech jockeys, and that'll just hit any random member within melee range. But finally, we have the first Reaping proc here for Team D as they group everything nicely, moving out of those Shadow Smashes, getting a Shockwave in there from Long, and making sure that he controls some of those stacks. Black Mamba still doesn't proc their first Reaping Wave, taking a long time with this Adult Thug that not only is in rage, but has his own Inhale Vapor buff as well, further increasing his damage by 50%. So Team D starting to run away with this a bit.
Yeah, one thing I actually want to point out here on Team D, I don't think we ever saw them run this comp at all in the regular season. If I'm not mistaken, they always ran double Rogue and then either the DK or the Monk. We've never seen them run one of all 3 DPS classes before, so that's something interesting from them. I don't think we've ever seen that before.
Not just interesting, but it's working. It's doing work for them. I mean, look at the DK's damage. That is what contributed to downing that massive pull well before Black Mamba right now. I mean, of course, the double Rogue Windwalker, not to be undersold by any means, but if you can make the Unholy DK work, especially in these really trash-rich, trash-heavy dungeons, MOTHERLOAD being probably at the very top of that list, then it's going to do work for you, and you're going to boost ahead as 33% for Team D right now, getting ready to get a couple more of those mech jockeys within those Peacekeepers, double dipping down on that trash percentage count and looking to proc their second Reaping as Black Mamba is only now dealing with their first Reaping wave.
Yeah, they're definitely a very large amount behind, and this is kind of what Team D needs to get back into to make that lower bracket run. We were talking about it. They got 2 dungeons in on stage yesterday, and neither of them went clean at all for them. And both of those were just very, very dangerous runs where they were very sloppy the entire time. So really all it takes to get comfortable on stage is one clean run where your strategy goes perfectly and you're like, oh, okay, that was easy. We can just keep doing that now.
With the danger of this dungeon for the 2 tanks, it is Long versus Wong here. Black Mamba now 30%, starting to backpedal a bit and kite here. You got to pay attention to those necrotic stacks on the tanks right now. Hanks unfortunately did get clipped by one of the Shadow Smashes for Black Mamba. 20% decreased max HP for 1 minute. Could be particularly dangerous because of all that splash damage that we had mentioned earlier. Triple Peacekeeper menacingly chasing Long over here on the left side as they look to proc their second Reaping, sitting at 38% right now. Long getting quite low here for Black Mamba. 25 stacks immediately. Heroic leaps out to make sure he can reset that 10-second timer.
Yeah, I think that was a Raging Adult Thug, just smacked him in the face there for a lot of damage. Not to mention, you said he had about 30 necrotic stacks. They're just these trash pulls are incredibly dangerous, mainly for the tanks. That's why we see them both in this dungeon and in yesterday's MOTHERLOAD run. The tanks are going to be kiting in circles almost the entire time, just making sure they don't get hit by any of these melees.
Thug life Zyro, but Wong here actually did technically die. He did proc his Bonzombies Bargain trinket. You can see the debuff on that player frame. Not going to have that available again for 6 minutes in this very front-loaded trash dungeon where a lot of the danger lies for these tanks. Now, where of course in that tyrannical environment, but even in that non-fortified, these can certainly pack a punch, especially with that enraging. Team D 52% now. Not only are they grabbing their second Reaping, but as we've seen a lot of other top teams do, combining it with as much trash as can be handled by the group here, doing excellent job of that, and will actually be straight proccing your third Reaping wave with that. So well constructed by them. Black Mamba still sitting at 34%.
Yeah, so many times when we're talking about the trash in this particular section of the dungeon, we just keep going on about Peacekeepers. They double dip the trash percentage, and they're able to just abuse the Peacekeepers. They pull their second Reaping wave, and they're instantly going to proc their third Reaping wave off of that Unholy DK AoE damage.
Finally, the second reaping comes in here for Black Mamba. Once again, trying to combine it with some things as they run over to a couple of mech jockeys. You can see that Ring of Peace did go down to make sure that they separate the mech jockeys so that they run to their respective peacekeepers and get in them. It is possible to misplay that and actually miss some percentage by having the mech jockey go to either go to the incorrect peacekeeper or just not go to a peacekeeper at all. So doing well there for them, but 63% 14D as they handle their third reaping wave on top of the last pull before the coin-operated crowd pummeler, the first boss of the dungeon.
Yeah, and more than likely we're going to see them go back and pull a little bit more trash before they go into the boss. They want to make sure they're fully abusing that unholy DK, funneling the AoE into single target. So we'll probably see them finish this trash pack off with that third reaping wave that's almost all dead by now, just one lost soul left from one of the peacekeepers. And then they're going to go ahead and pull a little bit more trash, proc their fourth reaping wave, and then move into the boss.
Bit of scary moment there for Long as he was just jumping away desperately for dear health. Could not get above 20% HP for the life of him. Just trying to heal him through those necrotic, but they did finally manage to stabilize as they down their last peacekeeper here in a moment. Black Mamba, of course, 44% on the board right now for trash. Neither team having dealt with the first boss, and I don't expect them really to do so until the mid to high 80s%, as is the more traditional routing, at least for this dungeon right now. But they're, Zyre, just looking around, every time we look over a Team D screen right now, we see some kind of massive amount of trash plus a reaping wave, as we see right now, huge pull coming in from Team D. And Black Mamba, you look over, they're just kind of trying to finish one or two mobs off at a time before they start their next pull. Team D not wasting any time getting on the rest of those trash mobs.
Yeah, and we're seeing exactly what Cyrus was talking about, like when we were talking about the Western versus Eastern teams. The Eastern teams kind of made safer strategies, and that's what Black Mamba's definitely doing. And they looked fine doing that yesterday. The problem we were all talking about is they were just up against Method EU, and you had to really go balls to the wall to beat Method EU. And I mean, honestly, Team D, this looks like what I want to see from Team D. These are aggressive pulls. They always have peacekeepers. They always have some sort of reaping pack. They're playing really well right now.
And I think a big talking point, we're probably going to talk about it at the desk after. I'm sure Cyrus is going to be on this as well. The Unholy DK, I think, is doing absolute work for Team D right now, allowing to just get these pulls in that they need to proc these reaping so fast and so ahead of Black Mamba, who's only just now sitting on the cusp of the third reaping wave, while Team D is about to pop their fourth, and I'll expect them to either probably just pull it straight into the boss.
Yeah, more than likely. And the thing I like about this as well is a lot of their reaping is going to be outside of the boss room. It's going to have to travel to the boss. So, if they do it perfectly, what should happen is they should get that AoE to DPS for the Unholy DK when the boss gets its first damage taken increase, which would be fantastic single target damage for the Unholy DK. I want to see them do as much damage as they can to the boss here with that AoE.
Yeah, a bit of chunking damage here for Black Mamba right now is some random charges going off from some of the thugs. Of course, with that Inhale Vapor debuff, you only have so many interrupts going around right now. Well shockwave there from Wong on the side of Black Mamba to make sure some of those Grave Bowls don't get off. Now, we do know those do 25% max health damage on random members of the team, and with the amount of splash damage already present in the dungeon, you want to mitigate that as much as possible. As the Typhoon goes down and the Ursul's Vortex comes up, but we do have a cheat death proc there for Shin, one of the two rogues. Not going to have that available again for 6 seconds as Team D is already down 1/4 HP on the crowd pump. Yeah,
that was a great first burn phase, especially if you remember, it's on Tyrannical. This boss has a massive amount of HP, has even higher HP because of that. Because of this boss, has that damage taken increase, so it's, actually doubled the health of most bosses. We did see Yusheng actually got hit by one of those smash debuffs, so he is doing lower damage and healing right now, but, that's kind of a small thing, right? That's a small mistake from them.
Yeah, small mistake for them. It was actually just the health one, so he can do the clean damage well, but is kind of in danger maybe of getting Gibbs should they get too many buffs in the pummler or miss one of the kicks. But showing their European prowess here, kicking those foot bombs quite well into the boss and moving away from the gold piles. You don't want the gold uptake into the boss. He will get a permanent 10% damage increase buff for the rest of the fight, stacking indefinitely should you remain within that coin area. Black Mamba now 69% on the board for trash and looking to desperately proc their fourth reaping wave to try and catch up to Team D here, who is just looking so good right now. 38% for coin-operated crowd pummeler, and they should be able to finish it within the next 1 to 2 burn phases, maybe even just 1 at this rate.
Yeah, it looks like the next burn phase is probably going to be the end of it, because, they've been in this boss fight for maybe about 2 minutes now. Their cooldowns should be coming back up. Their monk will be able to touch a death, touch a karma, etc. So they should be able to finish off or get it incredibly low in this next burn phase. And I kind of, I'm looking over at Black Mamba, and the way they're running their strategy kind of reminds me of what teams were doing the first and second week of the Cup. They were just kind of slowly moving through their trash in waiting to pull the first boss when they had their Bloodlust up for a second time.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of what we were talking about at the desk earlier. You know, all these teams kept innovating and pushing, and it seems like they just sat in some of the old strategies that teams did over the course of the cups and tried to just, you know, min-max that to the best. And certainly not all of those are optimal, but a bit of disaster here for Black Mamba as Hanks does fall. They immediately get the battle res up and not going to have that available, actually just for a few seconds. So fortunately, we'll have another one available to them. But Shin sitting quite low, does not have the cheat death that he procced earlier. This Thug is just doing so much work on them. And finally, they down it to proc their 4th Reaping. At the same time, Team D, though, finishing off the first boss and getting ready to move on to what will last, likely be their last mass trash pull before Azeroth.
Yeah, and you know, they might be a little bit faster. Their Bloodlust comes up in about 20 seconds. We did see Method do not use their Bloodlust for this pull, and we also saw, I believe it was Buffalo Nerf Rogue use their Bloodlust for this pull yesterday, so we'll have to see if they're able to pull it off. Method and they did it perfectly with that Unholy DK, so, you know, Team D, you kind of want to compare yourself to the higher echelon teams in the tournament. They should be able to pull this off well.
Yeah, Yushan getting a bit of that aggro, unfortunately dipping down to 7%, and Long having 35 stacks of Necrotic, almost unhealable, starts to run out of the group and getting ready to reset those as the Sappers barrage in and make sure to try to hit him, but he's just sitting safely back away from those hits for the Enraging, but so much damage coming in with some of the uncontrolled Earth Spikes in the back doing huge amounts of damage. Baby Pig taking some of that splash residual, and Long finally getting his trinket procced and going down. Fortunately, they have the checkpoint right behind them, so he's able to res and try to mitigate some of the disaster that's about to happen. Fortunately, Zyra, they only had 1 or 2 mobs left, so no other casualties for them.
Yeah, just a couple of raging rock lances going through for them there, which, you know, took out Long there. But the thing was, you know, like you mentioned, they had the res point. They only had to, you know, commit a couple deaths there. It wasn't as clean as Method and A, but they're able to pull it off without too many major hiccups there.
Tank, which is not long for this world as they go up the hill right now. Mass stealth coming up, 98% on the board. Of course, we'll expect to see them kill Trash at about the time Azeroth is dying, or just right after he dies, to make sure that they can skip not only the final Reaping wave, but all of the trash leading up to Fluxflame, of course, the 3rd boss. But first, let's focus here on Azeroth. This is a very long fight on this tyrannical setting, Zyro.
Yeah, and I think all the danger of this fight is definitely very front-loaded. So this is kind of a safer strategy, their Bloodlust strategy they're using here. They're Bloodlusting at the start of this fight while all 4 of these Earth Ragers are active. Of course, the Earth Ragers are kind of the main mechanic of the fight that provides a lot of danger to this all-melee comp. They fixate random DPS players in the group, and should they melee them, they'll leave a physical bleed debuff, not to mention a stack of Necrotic, because the dungeon is in that Necrotic affix.
Yeah, and you know, really well controlled by them, as you were explaining that, just watching Team D here. They perfectly rotated ROP, Typhoon, and Ursula's Vortex to not only try to kind of help the melee out, but keep them as localized under the boss as possible so that they can efficiently and effectively cleave Azeroth down during the time that they're killing the ads. They've now entered the snooze phase, if you will, the imaginary phase 2 of Azeroth, 60% on the boss right now, and they've already dealt with pretty much all of their trash already, so the rest will just be to single target the boss down and only deal with and cleave the one ad that comes up periodically on the fight about every 30 seconds or so. Black Mamba having down the first boss now, 1 death on the board for them only from Hanks earlier, are getting ready to do the similar large pull that we just saw Team D do, albeit a bit sloppy.
Yeah, and once again, they still don't have their Bloodlust. They're still using that Cup 1 strategy of using their Bloodlust on the boss, on the Tyrannical boss, mind you, which kind of makes a little bit of sense. But then they're doing this mass AoE pull right after, which, as we just saw, is incredibly dangerous. If everything gets into that Raging Affix and you aren't able to deal with it cleanly, your tank's going to go down.
It's not just that, but you have to get interrupts on those Rock Lances. Those do immense amounts of damage. Now, you can, of course, Spell Reflect them on the Warrior, but you can only do so once every 25 seconds. We can see Wong jumping around in circles here, making sure that he's not getting clipped by too much damage, as a lot of the Enraging spell effects seem to come up on those trash mobs in the back. Wong sub 40% here, but doesn't care, charges back in to make sure to keep all those mobs together, and they actually pull that off quite cleanly, but I also think they pulled less trash. They're only at 90% right now, Zyro, so they're probably going to finish off some stuff later as they actually pull it now. So they kind of did the 1 pull in 2 pulls because they did not have access to the Bloodlust.
Yeah, and we see that Team D has pulled that 1 Stone Fury into the boss with them there, so they're going to have to make sure they cleave that down. Make sure they kill the boss first so that they can then proc the Reaping Wave out of combat and be able to mount up in that, you know, GCD barely 1 second of time that they're able to mount up at before Reaping spawns.
Yeah, exactly. So Azeroth now 4%, or about to, there we go, 4% on the board right now, and Stone Fury at about 40% or so. So Azeroth should be falling first, and Stone Fury following suit right after as they interrupt that last tectonic barrier. You could already see the team kind of pre-moving towards the minecart minefield over on the side. Hopefully no disaster for them stepping on any of those mines as the Stone Fury is about to fall here, and they will immediately jump in and get started to run past not only the Reaping that has spawned behind them in aggro, but also Rixa Fluxflame's trash.
Yeah, and something I liked about MOTHERLOAD's strategy yesterday, every single time we've seen a team pull off this strategy here, they've always let a couple of Reaping Mobs through, 1 or 2 Risen Souls. MOTHERLOAD had none, which was really impressive. I don't think I've ever seen that happen before. So we'll have to see if Team D can actually pull that off. It's not really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, but...
It slows you down.
Yeah, a little bit.
Sometimes they do snap to you, though, so it is a bit inevitable. At times you have to have a little bit of luck associated with it, but unfortunately no luck coming in for them as a lot of this I'm losing my wording here, Zyra. A lot of the trash coming in for them, and it looks like a huge full wipe coming in for them, unless, actually, Ab's dead. They can't get a battle res on anybody. Maw going down as well, Yusheng going down, and Long going down too. Full team wipe here for Team D, and I mean, I lost my wording there. What I wanted to say was the last wave of Reaping was already coming on top of that. I can't remember the word Reaping, and we've said it a million times this season, but they were so slow to move to the trash that by the time they finished all of the trash leading up to Rix of Fluxflame, the Reaping was already there, and it has a huge range of aggro, and you can't just shadow meld everything off if they are in line of sight of you for some of them. So they were too slow there.
So here's the interesting thing. Their shadow melds are on cooldown now for another 2 minutes here. They either have to go around the side. Now you can do this. This is absolutely possible. You can have both of your rogues run around the side, sap 2 of the mobs. Your healer can then run by after your tank pulls all the mobs to the left side. So they can pull this off. But it looks like they're just going to go for it again and hope that their healers come. Maybe get a battle res on the healer or something.
What I'm thinking is they're going to have either Ab go down first, Baby Pig's going to battle res, Yusheng's going to go first, they're going to battle res him. There has to be some form of battle res play, and Ab indeed sitting in that oil on the side that does immense amounts of damage, and hopefully will get the battle res active as Long tries to hold off the rest of the trash, and it looks like we do have the battle res icon up on Ab right now, so it was successful. They're waiting for everything to de-aggro to make sure they don't make the same mistake again. That's quite close.
That was really close,
but Ab successfully takes the battle res, and they make the best of a very bad situation here as there are 12 deaths on the board. That's an extra 60 seconds worth of death that will allow Black Mamba to kind of catch up. Now, Black Mamba, of course, has their own 1 death on the board, but that's a big advantage in Black Mamba's court right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think they're just so far ahead at this point that as long as they're clean on these last 2 bosses, they should still win this match. But, you know, we keep going back to that one, I keep going back, I guess, to that one thing where you want to have a clean map on stage. It gives you so much confidence moving forward in the tournament, and this is going to stick with them, right? They were clean up into a certain point, and then they made a mistake on their skip, and it cost them a lot more deaths after that. They can't dwell on that. They have to look at what they did properly in this map and think about that moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, you're absolutely right. It's certainly not the footing you want to start the day off on I mean, one of them was, of course, an intended second full wipe because they had to make do for the first full wipe that they had there, but 12 deaths on the board. Hopefully it doesn't phase them too much further right now as they have finally officially dealt with all of the trash, got rid of that Reaping, and are at 67% on Rix of Fluxflame, the 3rd boss of the dungeon. Black Mamba has now downed Azeroth. They're taking a little minecart trip down the area. They're at 97% trash. We've seen this typically as well. Another strategy is to just kind of finish up the remainder of the trash here in the R&D wing just at the beginning and then kind of skip everything at the end. But that makes you even more prone to having some of those Reaping mobs leak through, Zyro.
Yeah, and they also have to deal with some of this trash down here that, well, a lot of people don't really know about. Most of it you can just interrupt or stun to deal with the mechanics, but they're probably going to have to deal with the Reaping that spawns from this trash wave at the very least here. Yeah,
Last Alchemist there. That should be their 100% in just a moment. It's about to go down here. Hopefully they get their 100% and calculated. Probably they do indeed, and that means that the Reaping wave is spawning. Most of it is spawned before Azeroth for them, but the couple of mobs they killed there will likely leak to them as they get their Shadow Melds up. Hopefully they can pull it off for their sake, but Rix of Fluxflame is now down to the last 1/3 of HP for Team D, so Black Mamba has quite the hill to climb, even with those bonus 55 seconds that Team D just handed them on a silver platter.
Yeah, I mean, this 70% on a Tyrannical boss is nothing to laugh at. This is probably about a minute and a half of time that Team D is ahead of Black Mamba, and I don't think you're really going to make that up in terms of single target DPS. That Unholy DK isn't that big of a crux for them, and it is only replaced by an Outlaw Rogue, which isn't as high, as a Windwalker Monk in single target damage, -5 rolls. But Team D is still significantly ahead to the point where those 12 deaths shouldn't really matter.
Shouldn't matter too much, but we've seen a lot of oopsie daisies on the last boss, especially, and having to do one of those bosses, a DPS down or anything of the sort, would be detrimental. But both teams do have 1 battle res on the board, about to get their second one in about 40 seconds, 45 seconds or so. So they have a bit of a safety net should things go wrong. A lot of damage coming in on Long there, as we do know Rix of Fluxflame deals that pure fire damage, which you just can't shield block through. So a lot of attention needed for the tank, spamming that Ignore Pain as well, as finally the Shroud comes up here for Team D, heading up the hill, ignoring all of this trash and making sure to get right up to Mogul Raz Dunk, the final boss of the dungeon. Black Mamba is actually moving to the Rixa pretty quickly, though. They're halfway through now.
Yeah, they definitely caught up a little bit there, but, not too much. They were 70% behind when they started the boss, and they're probably maybe, I want to say 60-65% behind when Team D killed the boss. Now, they were able to use their cooldowns at the start of the boss, I believe, so that would probably make up most of the difference there.
Most of the difference, indeed, 43% for them. But Mogul Raznak has already been pulled here on the big screen for Team D, looking to get as quickly as possible to that second phase. I'm not even sure they're going to actually have Bloodlust up for the second phase, depending on how quickly they move through this first phase. Getting to some of these safe spots, quote-unquote, so to speak, spots that you can very easily dodge whatever combination of column and row area denial are thrown at you from those Boomba bots on the side. Moving around for this Gatling gun, making sure you're not getting clipped in the front, and trying to get to that 50% mark to get those two mobs down as quick as possible before hopefully their Bloodlust comes up. 90 seconds is a long time.
We've questioned Bloodlust timings in Motherlode, especially on Tyrannicals, so many times, and I think every single time that we've been wrong about it. I'm pretty sure the Bloodlust will come up at least at the end of the second phase for them.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think it'll just barely come up maybe like right after the intermission phase, which would be perfect timing. Perfect, sort of. But we do see Black Mamba is going to down Rix of Fluxflame, like we mentioned, a little bit over a minute and a half behind Team D, so that death differential isn't quite big enough for them to come back in this.
Indeed. I mean, both teams will have the Bloodlust available, as you mentioned, Zyro, for Phase 2. That's typically the highest DPS net gain that we see from using Bloodlust, and timing it, of course, with those 2-minute cooldowns likely coming up after that transition phase for these two teams, for whichever may be available for these classes here. Mogul Raznak at 53%, about to transition here for Team D, as Black Mamba hurries on up the hill with the Shroud and tries to get started as quickly as possible. They have that 55 seconds on the board bonus, but at this point, I just don't think it's going to be enough.
And their tank had to pull to the side for an extra death for them, which Team D didn't have to do in their skips. So
no, he night elf.
He did night elf. Okay, yeah, he was scaring me for a second there. I'm sorry, but we do see they did pop their Bloodlust on the pole instead of saving it for the second phase, which is kind of weird because Rix of Fluxflame is a little bit over 2 minutes. They might not have their cooldowns up for that.
That could be a pot play as well. Who knows? Potion timings may have just come up for them, or they may have not been able to pre-pod, and is the only time, whatever it may be, they decided it is best for their DPS purposes that they pop it off the bat here as Mogul Raznak rapidly declines in health for Black Mamba, reaching 80% and about to finish transition here for Team D. They have their Bloodlust available. They have their cooldowns available. So we're going to expect Mogul Raznak to absolutely melt here for Team D in just a moment.
Yep, and I mean, this is kind of one of those things where we're going to have to sit here and slow look at Black Mamba's timer kind of fall out. They're going to have 55 seconds after Team D finishes the dungeon, and they're kind of going to have to hope for Team D to have some catastrophic failure, rather, in the second phase here. And that's going to have to come in the form of them just deciding that they wanted to die in stand-up mechanics, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's, a lot of the boo-boos that we see are usually during transition or just after transition, so this is the kind of golden moment where there could be a bit of a mistake from Team D, but no such mistake comes up right now as they're halfway through their Bloodlust, and Mogul Raznak is dying quickly here, 30% for Team D right now as they dodge the probably penultimate Gatling gun on their side. Mogul Raznak about to go to the transition phase here for Black Mamba, but yeah, this is looking like a Team D game for me, Zyro.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, Ab kind of running out for that last rocket there. If I were Team D at this point in the tournament, you don't know where the other team is, right? They cannot see what's going on the monitor. One rocket is not going to wipe your team. I would be in there pushing. We know that's the last rocket they're going to get. I would be in melee pushing for as much damage as possible as the healer there. I don't know if I like this safe play from them. That might just be like a mentality thing for them.
I mean, they just probably don't want to take any risk. We talked about it with Sours on the desk earlier. These teams are used to playing very safe. And finally, Mogul Raznak does go down for Team D. And we still have 55 seconds, about 50 seconds now left on the board for Black Mamba as they try to finish up their transition phase. But they're not even done that. Maybe they would have had a bit of a glimmer of a chance should they have just started this 55-second timer going into Phase 2. But I think that's going to be all she wrote, Zyro.
Yep, there's no Bloodlust up for them. They might have their cooldowns up. I don't believe that they had their cooldowns up at the start of the fight. But it's just going to be too little too late for them. They were kind of able to claw their way back into this one with some mess-ups from Team D, but with 25 seconds left on the board, it looks like they're not going to be able to finish this one off.
Not going to be able to finish this one off, which means that Team D will be taking the first match here in a second, and as we'll discuss in a bit, they're going to be looking forward to, or maybe not looking forward to, the second game in Waycrest Manor. We're just eking out the last few seconds here. 5 seconds left on the board until Black Mamba has officially lost the first game in this elimination series, and there it is right now. Team D taking like in the first game, you can see the sigh of relief on their face. Waycrest Manor, we start for Game 2 here between Team D and Black Mamba. Now, I was just about to say, typically you see one of two pulls come in. They either skip these Soul Essences, save them for later, likely even going up past Gorok Tool, or on the side of Team D, they pull them along with spawning one of the lieutenants, the mobs upstairs, and you're going to expect a pretty substantial pull right off the get-go here for Team D with the Bloodlust as well, but they did not combine it with the Triad boss, something that Black Mamba has actually done along with Trash and with the boss at the start, but there's explosive spawning ever. This is a dangerous pull in here from Black Mamba.
This is a hefty pull. Like you mentioned, this is Essences plus the spawn, the Witch spawn, plus both of the two Toad spawns on the side of the boss room is going to come out to a lot of percentage, and maybe it's kind of one of a safer pull. We like to see teams use their Bloodlust on the boss in this dungeon. This is a 5-boss dungeon, and it's tyrannical, so making sure you get that extra damage done on the boss is, it's usually what we like to see teams do, but, Team D are the pioneers of the Waycrest strat. I'm sure it's for a reason.
Yeah, let's see exactly what they come up with here as their Bloodlust does finally fade off just as they pull the Triad boss here. Starting, of course, with Sister Selena, the first phase of her with her aura decreasing all healing done by 50%, and then moving on, of course, to Malady and Briar after that before they recycle for the second phase of each subsequent Witch. Black Mamba now 4% on the board for the trash they pulled on the side of the rooms, and they have well stabilized after that quite dangerous pull. Team D 13% on the board, but a fair bit behind on the boss.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they are definitely behind, but they do have that extra 9% trash percentage they got from using their Bloodlust, so we'll have to see if they're able to catch up a little bit on this boss. They are on the second second of the 6 phases, if you will, of the bosses, while Black Mamba is just now finishing off the third, so they're not really that far behind. Now, when we're looking at this boss, I think the most dangerous part of the encounter is going to be going from the third boss, Sister Briar, back into the second phase of the first boss, Sister Selena, because if you have any of those Thorns debuffs on you, going into that healing debuff aura, you're in trouble.
What is going on here? Is Team D having a bit of struggles with the healing right now? They did proc one of the Rogue's Cheat Death over on Mog. He won't have that available again for those 6 minutes, as we always let you know for the Cheat Deaths. And even Yushang just dipped so low before getting back onto Briar. They're actually sub 10%, so almost out there too. Huge hit coming in Baby Pig there from those Jagged Tettles, making sure to heal those over 90%, else that bleed will sustain, very similar to the Grievous Affix effect. Black Mamba here has finally downed Selena, and they're moving on to Milady, getting ready to down her before trying to finish off Briar and moving on to try and catch up on some of the trash that Team D is ahead on.
Yeah, and I mean, they're very consistently staying 1 boss behind with their Bloodlust timing and their usage of pulling all that trash at the start. So they're definitely ahead so far at this point in the dungeon, and they're also, going to be aiding that by pulling those side trash packs that they missed earlier into the boss here.
Into the boss, indeed, to come the Toads right now. Now, those Toads do a Blighted Lick that does a tremendous amount of damage on the tank, so you want to make sure you kill those quickly. As Long actually dips quite low, and the damage comes in and finishes him off right now, but they get the Battlers up immediately. You'll need to taunt the boss before anybody else succumbs to too much damage and flops right over. The melee barely stabilizing here as Ab is just pumping out as much healing as he can, trying to stabilize the disastrous situation, but they do manage to recover as they now start on Sister Briar, the final sister of the tryout here. Black Mamba has improved and not improved, but rather killed the boss and moved on into the very dangerous hallway filled with captains and, of course, the lieutenants that they will need to down. A lot of tank damage in that hall.
Yeah, that was an incredibly dangerous portion of the fight. Ab had to get that battle res off ASAP, but the problem was he had that stacking damage taken debuff from not moving because he had to cast the battle res. So even though he got the battle res off, he was at sub 20%, 15% getting the battle res off.
Kudos to him. That was very dangerous, and that was an excellent recovery for Team D right now. That stealth immediately past all of the dangerous trash that Black Mamba is having a bit of struggle with on the side right now. Straight into the courtyard and doing a mass pull into the courtyard. Need to keep an eye on those explosives. Well handled there by Baby Pig on the side. As Long having a bit of trouble again because he died. He already procced his trinket, not going to have that available for 6 minutes, as we always let you know. So Long is very vulnerable here right now. Needs to make sure that he keeps himself nice and stable. Baby Pig taking a chunk of damage right now. 15% on the board, 9%. It just barely hanging on as Ab is dividing his attention between Baby Pig and Long right now, trying to keep them both alive. None of these mobs are dying. Explosives are spawning left and right now, and Mog doesn't have his cheat test, starts dipping low as well. Huge amounts of instability here for Team D as Black Mamba starts cleaning up the rest of their trash. Long barely hanging on for dear life.
And on top of that, they also spawned their first Reaping Wave, so this is incredibly dangerous. They just barely got that last Witch down as the Reaping Wave started running in here. This could have been terrible. I mean, they still have no cooldowns left up from while the Reaping is coming in, so this is not over just yet.
No, and we can see the crowd control coming in immediately. We saw the Typhoon into Ursula's Vortex combo from Ab, followed by a Shockwave from Long, just to make sure to minimize the amount of splash damage on the group and, of course, on the tank themselves, getting those Dispels in every 8 seconds on those Reaping Soul stacks from the Risen Souls. And it looks like they have finally pulled it off. 27% on the board, dealt with their first Reaping Wave, and a huge sigh of relief comes over them. We can hear them behind us right now on at the play area. Black Mamba has procced their first Reaping Wave and is taking it right into the courtyard.
Yeah, that was we can talk all day about how dangerous that pull was. They had to interrupt so many different things, Ascension Rituals, Soul Fetishes. There were so many things that they had to make sure didn't get off there, and I believe some of them had to go off because their tank was dropping incredibly low and on top of the rogues.
That was just not a yikes. That was a Christ for me, Zyra there. But 23% for Black Mamba right now as they do their massive pull in the hallway. I see the Tree of Life has come up from Envy's right now. A lot of damage coming in on Saturn as well. Just can't get past that. 50% dips down sub 10 as well. He does have a couple of poisons on him as well. Shin does as well. Shin gets some poison too, and Envy's just getting the dispels that he can on them, but he needs to focus his dispels on Wong so he cannot dedicate to get those poisons off of those two players right now.
The Team D just kind of finishing up some of the trash they pulled from the hallway here. They did deal with all of the maggots pretty effectively. It's kind of the most dangerous part of this hallway here. Each of those maggots will do a spit debuff on players. You can see them on the ground here, about 7 or 8 of them. And they're pretty dangerous for a lot of players. They do random spit targets on everyone in the group, and if you get hit by 3 or 4 of them at the same time, you're in pretty big danger. Honestly, it's one of the most dangerous parts of the dungeon.
And it really just tanks a lot of healer attention into those players, which is, as we'll see in Rawl's Hall just a bit later, that coming up. A Team D big pull here with their second Reaping Wave on top of the Soulbound Goliath in this tyrannical setting, plus Matron Brindle. That's a huge amount of tank damage coming into the group, not to mention the splash damage from the Grave Bolts going out in every which direction, which could also affect Wong himself. So hopefully a bit of luck for them there, as Wong has procced his Cheat Death Trinket with the big pull that was quite unstable coming in on the side of Black Mamba that I just mentioned earlier. They have managed to stabilize it, but at the cost of some defensives and safety nets.
Yeah, this is really weird. They're still doing the exact same strategy that's kind of built for Unholy DK, but they're doing it without an Unholy DK. This boss would definitely be like 10 to 15% lower if they had the Unholy DK for that exponential AoE. This has to be a safety thing for explosives. I don't quite think it's the best thing to do. It's not nearly as aggressive as I'd like to see them play.
I mean, these are pretty substantial pulls. I can understand the fear of explosives, and just relying only on one rogue might not be enough for them. We have seen some of the other teams yesterday pull that off with only one rogue and still have that Unholy DK. But, you know, I think a lot of it will show, will they be able to do the same large pulls that they're used to doing in the Raw Hall without that Unholy DK? I think you and I are both going to say no on that one, but we'll see exactly how it ends up.
And it's the same as the Motherload here. Black Mamba is just playing safe. That second Reaping Wave that we saw Team D pull into the boss, they're just killing it without the boss. They're just playing. Yeah, they're killing it. Well, they killed like half of it. They must have been waiting for some of it.
They heard you.
Well, look how low they are. This is not safe for them at all. Their tank dropped incredibly low as well as one of the rogues.
No, not safe at all. They use that ROP well there to make sure they bump a lot of those Risen Soul cast of the Grave Bolts in the back. Torment Soul is going off left and right now, 43%, and Soulbound Goliath is finally engaged for them. They do manage to stabilize. Mana's looking okay, I want to say, for both healers coming into this. They're about 70% with that second Reaping pack on top of it. But I see what you're saying, Zyra. Oh, Wong actually going down here, though. A proc coming up from Hanks as well, and they do not have a battle res available. This is going to be a full team wipe. At this point, I would just get out of dodge and try to reset the Goliath, but it doesn't matter because Matron Brindle is in there anyway. You could see her light blue glow. That means she has the stacks of Soul Fetish from one of the Thorn Shaper, one of the witches in the area, doing 50% increased damage and having 50% increased haste. Just a huge dangerous mob, almost as dangerous as the tyrannical boss beside her. So just grievous area here from Black Mamba as they have a full team wipe and have to restart that Team D nice and stable, 20% on Goliath.
Yeah, we were talking about how Black Mamba's maybe playing too safe, and that was definitely not safe at all. Soul Fetish Matron Brindle, that is probably more dangerous than the boss, actually.
That's a new one.
Yeah, that's, you know, I mean, they have to deal with a still Soul Fetish Matron Brindle.
Yeah, and Wong is just getting trucked. Everything is going wrong for them right now, but they can't do anything about it, Zyro. This is not a debuff that this is not a buff rather that wears off. It's indefinite on the mobs, and the only way to get it off is dispels, purges, you know, Arcane Torrent from Blood Elves. They have none of these tools available in this comp right now, so they just have to eat the damage to the face. And you could see how dangerous and how just scared they are if they didn't try to pull it again with Soulbound Goliath. They're just dealing with it on its own and then going on to the boss.
Yeah, that must have been, you know, now thinking about it, looking back, they must have been trying, they knew one of the mobs that they pulled had Soul Fetish on it. That must have been why they waited to pull the Reaping to the boss, and unfortunately, they didn't wait long enough. that should never go on Matron Brindle. That was just a huge mistake out of them, and it's probably going to cost them this map. They're one full boss behind Team D right now.
And speaking of Team D, they're not doing the maggot strat that they did before that we've seen in the previous time. They actually go right inside of Rawl's room and pull the entirety of the trash on top of the boss, but without the third reaping wave that they would have formed in their previous strategy. This is exactly the strategy that came out of, if I'm not mistaken, Abrakeydabra yesterday. They did not do the maggot pull either, so a similar strategy to what we saw yesterday coming out of that team, as Rawl is already at 88% and everything is well tended to and cleaved down. The Banquet Steward on the side there casting that dinner bell. Not anything too much of a concern because he's not in that melee range. Don't have to interrupt really, but as long as they're in melee range and you get that huge light brown swirly, you want to make sure to interrupt the dinner bell, else you will get silenced for a substantial amount of time.
Yeah, it really wouldn't surprise me to see them pull even more trash into this boss, maybe with Bloodlust, just so that they can get that third reaping wave and AoE other things down. Just keeping with the efficiency here, making sure they're always cleaving things down instead of going straight single target, and they did pop the Bloodlust on the boss here.
Yeah, just as you said it, actually it lit up. That's why I was pointing to it, but Bloodlust has been popped here for Team D right now. I'm not sure where they're going to find their remainder of 5% trash. They probably do want to proc that third reaping wave, as you mentioned, Zyra, 56%. Now, I do see a couple of, if I'm not mistaken, there's there's Gorestein Piglet on the side, and they had probably some of the kitchen left over with the Maggot and the Soul Charmer in there as well, so that should be enough to put them over, but I'm kind of shocked they didn't do that with the presence of Bloodlust. Rather, they just kind of Bloodlusted on the boss and one or two mobs on the side.
I mean, it could have been a cooldown thing, right? Maybe their tank didn't have his cooldowns up, maybe the rogues didn't have their Blade Flurries available. We do see one of the rogues running off to the bottom left there to pull some of those maggots as they run into the room right now. They are probably going to end up proccing their third reaping wave here, which is really good. Like, Rawl the Gluttonous on a single target tyrannical encounter, you're not doing anything on this boss. This boss is not dangerous at all. You shouldn't ever die to this. The only thing that's really dangerous are going to be those maggot debuffs that you see going all over the place right now, and maybe some of those casts from the Rune Weaver.
The boss is literally not going anywhere. He is stationed into the ground there. You can't move him around the room, so it is a very, very long and quite tedious encounter. Certainly no dangerous amount of damage output for the tank. The only dangerous thing, Zyra, that Zyra hinted to, rather, are those kind of goop piles on the ground. Those can actually pack quite a punch if you sit in them, but if you're sitting in them, your monitor is probably not on, and you should turn it on. Rawl the Gluttonous now 21% for Team D, and still have not procced their third Reaping Wave, but we do have that Rune Weaver right beside Long that deals a tremendous amount of damage themselves as well. You can see Long kind of chunking down to 50% every once in a while.
And we see these teams are neck and neck on these bosses, of course, with the one caveat that Team D is one full boss ahead right now. And that Rune Weaver will definitely proc the third Reaping Wave for Team D. But the thing I don't like about the strategy, not running an Unholy DK, is they can't really pull that third Reaping Wave into something else as well. It's not really very efficient. They could definitely keep AoEing with their comp, but it's just not really taking advantage of the Unholy DK that they don't have here.
Yeah, I was just gritting my teeth there because Wong's just getting sub like 5% health there. They kept Soulbound Goliath a bit too long and his stacks reached too high. Wanted to make the healer's life a bit easier there, but mana no problem for them as they finally pop their Stiffness Pod and head right down the hall through all of the Magas. A common pull that we saw yesterday and we expected really to see from most of these teams coming in straight around the corner, line of sighting everything, including any explosives that spawn on the side, and making sure to cleave everything down as Team D has combined that same pull with their third Reaping Wave. So a bit of a backwards approach to their original strat right now, but still a pretty substantial dangerous pull as explosives are going off in the corner. Yushan getting quite low as well. Ab doing what he can to stabilize the group, but this team really has to pay attention to those explosives.
Yeah, we saw a similar pull coming out from Fourty K where they pulled the entire hallway and LOS in that same corner. Team D's taking that pull and adding the third Reaping Wave to it, doing a massive amount of AoE damage here, and they're proving me wrong. They're doing it without the Unholy DK. It might be better with an Unholy DK, but they're still doing it incredibly well, and that's kind of all that matters right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're giving it to you, X, right now. Team D, 67% on the board. Yushan dipping quite low again. Now, of course, as you mentioned earlier, Zyro, you can't control where these spits go, and there's just so many Megas present in the group. You can see a couple of those debuffs. Actually, a debuff on every single member of the group right now. Huge amounts of healing needed from Ab. You can just see that healing per second HPS on the meters right now. Zyro, you don't seem very happy with this pull right now.
No, actually, I love this. The cool thing about what they can do here is if they do this very properly, they can proc their fourth Reaping Wave if they kill this all at the exact same time, and they can Shadow Meld it. They can run down the stairs and they can Shadow Meld it without having to deal with the fourth Reaping Wave. This is a brand new strategy. I mean, we haven't seen Waycrest Manor too much from any of the teams in this tournament, but this shows that they're still innovating. They're still doing good strategies.
The only time you see this pulled is at the end of the dungeon, should you go with a strategy that doesn't complete the remaining percentage that you need for the fifth wave of Reaping after Gorok Tool. But you can see just why a lot of these teams don't pull this, as the team chunks down, Mog procs his cheat death as well, and everybody line of sights around the corner to make sure to get rid of those explosives so they can focus all of their damage into the survivalists and the marksmen by line of sighting these ranged mobs mobs will follow them around the corner if they cannot see their target. Mog just taking so much damage, so much of that splash damage in the group, and finally they're about to proc perfectly with the last mob at 80%, and I think, Zara, you're going to be right. They're going to, you can already see it, they're rushing towards the kitchen area to get rid of and skip that 4th reaping.
Yeah, that's an awesome strategy. I mean, it shows how prepared they are. This is what I want to see from Team D. This is exactly what we're talking about. They're the pioneers of this Waycrest Manor strategy, and Zara's mentioned it. You have to have a completely different strategy for teaming to make it work, and it looks like they've got a really cool one.
Yeah, and it looks like they're also going for a strategy to finish the remaining 100% with Gorak Tool and those Gloom Horrors at the bottom rather than backtracking after that boss, which is why they're pulling the rest of this trash here to get to the mid to high 80s% worth of count before going downstairs to the Lord and Lady Waycrest encounter. Black Mamba, of course, doing the more regular pull that we're used to seeing. They've already procced their 3rd Reaping Wave and are dealing with the full trash pull in Rawl's room plus Rawl himself.
They did just let a Soul Fetish cast through on this last captain here, which can be incredibly dangerous.
Very badly.
That is a tank damage mob. They need to be incredibly careful not to pull the mini-boss here, because if they pull the mini-boss with this mob still having Soul Fetish, it will then go to the mini-boss, and there's no way you're tanking that.
We saw exactly what happened with the last mini-boss that had the Soul Fetish buff on the side of Black Mamba. The tank flopped right over, and speaking of flopping right over, Wong goes down again on Black Mamba. Battle Rest comes up, and Envy's finally just barely survives, sub 10%, but goes down with an explosive on the side. There's no way to get him up. Saturn goes down as well, and it looks like there's going to be a full team wipe yet again on the side of Black Mamba right now. Wong follows suit, and Hanks will be the final to fall on their side. 17 deaths on the board. This is Team D's game to win at this point.
And I mean, this is not as incredibly dangerous a pull as one would really think here. The only thing you really have to look out for are the Soul Volley casts from the Soul Charmers here. As long as you're making sure you're getting those interrupts and nothing else, you should be fine if you can deal with the explosive orbs. But there's just a massive amount of tank damage on top of that, so as long as he's getting pumped full of heals, they should be totally fine.
They should be totally fine. Ab just going to the side here, making sure that Virulent Plague does not splash onto the rest of the group, else it will reinfect anybody that it touches. But 91% trash on the board. I believe that's enough for the Gloom Horrors at the end stretch of this dungeon right now. Lord Waycrest has had his first refill of Siphon Life from Lady Waycrest. Once she reaches that 10% mark, we know Phase 2 starts. Black Mamba getting right back into it, though. Rawl has been re-engaged, 95% on the board. But another death going down from Shin right now with the Rune Breather has popped, and we have another explosive go off for them. And this is an absolute disaster. Spits going off left and right. Envy's goes down, and Saturn goes down again, and this is going to be another full team wipe, Zyro.
You got to wonder what's going on here, because all they did was just pull Raw with maybe a couple of extra mobs from the kitchen, which is a pretty typical pull for most teams. You don't see a wipe to that ever.
It was straight up just one Rune Weaver.
I mean, I don't know how you go down there. No, they did also have the maggots as well from the room. We don't see their nameplates, for unfortunately they're too small for these settings, but they did go down, which is really uncharacteristic of most of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, at this level of competition at the LAN final, you're not expecting to see a 22 death Waycrest Manor, so everything is not certainly going right here for Black Mamba right now, but they're still going at it, and they get right back in there against Rawl. Team D looking nice and pretty as they enter Phase 2 of the Lord and Lady Waycrest encounter.
And I was pretty sure that the horrors on this teaming ethics only give about 8% mob count, and they did have that one marked sister left on the side for that 1% that they were missing, so they were able to pull that in, cleave it down with the boss just solo as well. And I mean, that was also a pretty safe play from them, because if I'm not mistaken, the last mob they had pulled also had that Soul Fetish debuff, and of course Soul Fetish can't transfer to bosses whenever the mob dies. So it was good that they saved the Marked Sister to pull that after that Soul Fetish was gone and dealt with.
And speaking of safe play here, we can see that they're opting to try and just kill Lord Waycrest as quickly as possible, as opposed to cleaving him down efficiently with Lady Waycrest. At the same time, they want to make sure the tank is not under too much danger, because you do have 3 stacks of increased damage buff on Lord Waycrest by the end of the fight because of those siphons. Now, Rawl at 75% for Black Mamba. They are light years behind Team D at this point, and Team D would have to wipe several times for them to even give a chance to Black Mamba, as Lady Waycrest is reaching her last 2% worth of health. They're going to likely... Now, once again, Zara, these teams don't know where the other team is right now, so likely they're still going to have a very aggressive strat where they pull all the Gloom Horrors with Gorak Tool.
Yep, and I mean, they're definitely... We've seen that from all the teams that have done Waycrest Manor so far and gotten to the point where they're pulling Gorak Tool. It's just kind of the strategy that we see the teams do, especially on Tyrannical. The Gloom Horrors really are only super dangerous in that fortified aspect. So seeing this strategy is pretty typical for a Tyrannical setting. I think the first time I ever saw this done, it was done by your co-tank, Fim. Call it the Fim Clap strategy, if you will.
The old Fim Clap strategy, an absolute classic as of this year. But going down to Gorak Tool, they actually managed to skip and shroud past all of the Gloom Horrors, so they will be dealing with them as a mass pull after Gorak Tool. So once again, a safer, not as efficient strat, but certainly safer, because there's a huge amount of tank damage that comes out of those Gloom Horrors.
Yeah, this is definitely a safe thing. They have their Bloodlust up in about 50 seconds here, so what they're probably planning on doing is killing Gorak Tool and just using that Bloodlust to deal with the Gloom Horror pull very safely and efficiently, making sure they don't have any deaths. And this is really going to be a huge confidence booster for them. A one-death dungeon with pretty much no mistakes, just that one tank death earlier in the Courtyard. That's definitely going to help them out moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to help them out, but I mean, their time needs to be better. Everything needs to be more aggressive compared to not only Method EU, but most of the other teams actually that we saw yesterday do Waycrest Manor. So I know they're going to be watching that. They know what the time those teams had. It's the exact same dungeon that they're performing here, albeit a bit slower in some areas. 14 seconds left on that Bloodlust cooldown. Team D getting ready to likely pull the Horrors with it downstairs, at least if they want to get the more aggressive, efficient cleave strategy down. Rawl finally entering these single digits of percent here for Black Mamba as they get ready to head downstairs.
I mean, you can really see what we were talking about earlier, how Rawl is just kind of this big chunk of HP on Tyrannical. You're really not doing much if you're only single targeting down, which unfortunately Black Mamba has been doing. It's not efficient. It's not good for a speedrunning strategy. We've seen Team D pull AoE pulls. We've seen them pull trash into the Lord and Lady Waycrest, and we've also seen them just almost chunk all of Gorak Tool down here.
Chunk all of Gorak Tool, and I mean, on the flip side, Gorak Tool has chunked them substantially on the side of Black Mamba, who have headed downstairs. They are just at the doorway of the basement, where, of course, you'll find Matron Alma, one of the other mini-bosses that most teams don't pull, that we actually did see. I believe Abrakeydabra did a fairly aggressive strat down here yesterday where they tried to spell Reflect the Decaying Touch, and, it was a bit costly and time didn't work out for them, but finally the Bloodlust does get off for Team D. It does finish up there as Gorak Tool hits 5%, and they're going to have to turn around and kill the Gloom Horrors in just a second.
Yeah, I mean, the Gorak Tool goes down. They do the more inefficient strategy of using a Bloodlust on single target, and they might just very cleanly cleave the Horrors down here, or they might just go somewhere else and kill other trash. They have the entire dungeon open to them at this point, but the most efficient trash here is going to be these Gloom Horrors. All they got to do is finish these off, and they have their count for the dungeon.
All they got to do, but these hurt.
They do.
I mean, we're in a Tyrannical setting, but these do a fair bit of damage, and there's, I believe, 7 of them. No, actually, no, 9 of them in this teaming setting, so a lot of babysitting likely needed for the explosives as well. But excellent CC coming down, crowd control from the team right now. We see the Ursul's Vortex into the Ring of Peace prevention on the healer. Finally, we'll have some leg sweeps and shockwaves coming in from long. But here they go. The last of the Gloom Horrors are being finished up here, and Team D with a very commanding win in their second game, finishing up the series 2-0. At the desk right now, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, definitely the overall of at least expected favorites right here with a large aggressive pull right here at the start. Now they have to manage the health of these mobs very well, especially the Matron that has a substantially higher amount of HP over the other mobs. Don't want to over bolster her, especially because of that War Cry. As a result, Bloodlust has been popped on the side of Buff War.
Yeah, we've seen some huge pulls here at the very start, as we can see both teams actually pulling huge, but we see the maggot cast actually going through for Buff Warner Rogue, and 2 DPS actually dropped very low. They did not die though, and we didn't have a cheat death proc either, so good on them. Nothing really happened here. They did finish off the pull here on Buff Warner Rogue's side. Didn't really bolster anything too high either, so good job by them. They also both popped their Bloodlust on the first pull, and we see Buff Warner Rogue just pulling both of those maggot packs as well.
Yeah, they have to be careful with these takes. I mean, their explosive damage is quite high, not to mention getting those bolstering increased damage stacks on top of it, especially if it pulses at the wrong time with the Quaking coming in too. Could be quite a bit of work for Loda here, but Lazarus does go down and immediately releases. Of course, they are at the beginning of the dungeon, so the checkpoint is there by default, but that's 5 seconds on the board for them, something they really didn't want or didn't need to have. Buff War rushing downstairs over to the Mass Trash as Fullscreen is dealing with the pack that Buff War just skipped on the left side of the screen.
Yeah, Fullscreen playing a little bit slower here. They're doing they need 3 pulls here in total, while Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue can do everything a little bit faster here as they're already onto the mask pull here. Now, Fullscreen, at least, if they don't have a lot of practice, it's better for them to pull a little bit slower, making sure they don't do anything wrong, especially when it's bolstering. You can't just go in and pull whatever you want. You definitely need to figure out what has the most HP, what do we have to focus beforehand. So Fullscreen playing a little bit slower, but maybe it pays off for them later on, because we've seen teams definitely make some mistakes in this dungeon. And we've seen even Rastadurs die at the very end. We saw Azeroth die. They almost had a full team wipe on the last boss. So things can definitely go wrong in this dungeon, especially with bolstering.
They can go wrong at absolutely any turn. Both teams doing an excellent job there, Nagura, of managing that mask and getting interrupts on the Dark Omen, constantly making sure to interrupt any of the cast and stun lock it as well. So really nice to see as Buff Warrior has procced their first Reaping Wave. They're dealing with the remainder, with the start of it as the remainder of it joins them in the middle area. Liaxa has, of course, been pulled, making sure to game that Spell Reflect as much as possible from Buff Warrior, chunking her in damage. Now, Ching needs to have a lot of attention here from Loda. Huge amounts of Reaping stacks coming in, get those Dispels every 8 seconds as Fullscreened getting ready to start on Liaxa. Just having a bit of a think on the boss, waiting for that first Reaping pack to join them before they engage.
Yeah, Ching actually dropping very low there. It might have been a Blood Bolt going through. Now, this is a fortified setting, so the Blood Bolt's, of course, doing a little bit less damage than if it was Tyrannical, but you still want to interrupt them as much as you can, and you want to Spell Reflect them, of course, as well. But because all of those teams are pulling the Reaping Wave on top of the boss, if you have any of the Grave Balls going on a tank, for example, and just consuming the Spell Reflect, and then a Blood Bolt goes through, then it's going to be a lot of damage on the tank as well, even though you still have the magic reduction, of course, from the Spell Reflect. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue are about to down the boss here, while Fullscreen is a little bit behind. They just pulled the boss there on 70% now.
Final Spell Reflect finishing off Liaxa there, and unfortunately Moritos over on the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue did actually get hit by one of the green swirlies from the death of the Lost Soul, which decreases your healing and damage done by 10% for 30 seconds stacking. So lost them just a bit more time on the boss there than needed in terms of damage output. Elder Liaxa indeed at halfway through her health bar, just about to hit 50% here for Fullscreened, was well dealt with their first round of Reaping. Buff Warrior, aggressive pull here in the room. Now, Nagura, this is definitely the room that you and I kind of, cringe, for lack of a better term, about when it comes to bolstering in here.
Oh, most definitely. Not only are there a bunch of very difficult mobs, but you also have very different kinds of HP. Those living rods that you can see actually have the most amount of HP out of everybody, and the rest of the mobs are way more dangerous, though, than the living rods. So you kind of want to focus the other mobs, but if you do so, then the living rods will get bolstered. Now, we also see Ching actually proccing his Bomsamdi's bargain, which I do believe happened on the boss before.
Yeah, when you mentioned that he dipped quite low, he actually probably died there.
Yeah,
straight up, but it was his trinket that saved him, so he's not going to have that available for, by the looks of it, about 4 minutes or so. So certainly not for Cragmore, at least not for the rest of this room right now. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue spreading out for that Quaking right now, pulling one of the maggots, and a quadruple Disease Lasher pull. They need to be babysat here, make sure that none of those Decaying Mines get out now. They do have a bit of a safety net with Lazarus. He's able to dispel one of those every 8 seconds, should it get out, as it is a disease, and Loda cannot dispel those diseases. But the Lashers should be well assigned, as you can see the various raid markers on top of their nameplates or beside their nameplates, so that the players know what to kick and when to kick it. Feral Bloodswarmer has been pulled in as well. Screech was not interrupted because they need all the interrupts for the Lashers right now. Brought into the pack and kited around very well in the pack to make sure that it's cleaved down effectively.
Yeah, so we've talked about those mobs that are just so dangerous in this area, and one of them is the Bloodswarmer. We just saw it go down here in this floor. You definitely don't want to have two Bloodswarmers on top of each other, because the Bloodswarmer fixer just does so much damage, especially on fortified, and if there's two different ones that need to focus, then you just run out of stuns and interrupts to make sure the damage is reduced. And then you also have all those other mobs and the bolstering that you have to deal with. That's why we see the pulse being a little bit slower here compared to when we had Tyrannical in the cups before, just because fortified makes this whole room a lot harder, and bolstering, of course.
Yeah, you gotta play it safe right now. Buff Warrior proccing their second Reaping Wave and wasting no time as they run in and grab another pack containing one Blood Swarmer, one of the Lashers, and of course there is a Maggot in there as well, so we want to make sure to either interrupt before you get that frontal off or just avoid the frontal altogether with good communication. The Quaking does pulse there for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, as Fullscreen has still keeps working rather away on Kragmaw's room as well. 31%. They're starting to fall a bit more behind. I mean, we saw this from them yesterday, Nagura. They moved just a bit slower. You know, it was kind of expected from them. They said they didn't get the practice time in, so slow and steady for them, and they're kind of banking on Buff Warrior having maybe a bit of a hiccup.
Yeah, most definitely. And even if we look at Fullscreen, and people might be looking at this, comparing Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue speed to Fullscreen, and say, oh, Fullscreen is doing everything so much slower. But they're still, of course, a lot faster than you could just, like, if you run into a dungeon with a pug, you can't pull as Fullscreen does, right? They're still fast, and they're still doing their best as they can with the limited amount of practice that they had. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, of course, just having a little bit more time and just being a team that has been playing through all the cups together, so they're a little bit more versatile and they're just doing better here. But they're not that far behind at this point. They're 52% buff for Nerf Rogue versus 40% full screen side. Of course, they still need to proc their reaping on their side. And buff for Nerf Rogue is going to be done with the trash in this room very soon.
Very soon indeed, and they're looking to proc their third reaping. Now, they've left 2 of the Blood Swarmers available on the outside of Kragmaw. We just kind of saw the screen swoop through there from one of our observers. They are indeed on the side there. Now, a lot of different strategies. They could be saving it for either individually, they could be saving it for the Guardian Skeleton pack, or they could just straight up crowd control them during the encounter and then deal with them at the end of the Kragmaw encounter, which is very scary because if they break out by accident during one of the tantrums, that is going to be absolutely disastrous. Definitely the most dangerous mob in this area. 58% right now, about to hit 60. There it is, third reaping wave, and they get started on Kragmaw right away.
Yeah, one more thing to notice that usually we see teams play DK here in this dungeon, but because of bolstering, DK is just not something you really want to run here because DK has this huge AoE burst, and it's the most useful if you can pull trash on top of a boss. And of course, when you have bolstering, that's not something you can do. This is why we see teams run the usual comp with the double Rogue and the Monk, but buff Nerf Rogue have their reaping wave on top of Kragmaw here. And again, it is a fortified setting, so Kragmaw should not be a problem for them, but if you have some bad quaking timings overlapping with something like the Tantrum, then it can still cause problems for Loda.
Yeah, certainly can cause a lot of problems right now, but they will deal with the Reaping Wave, finishing it off there. And, I really like this positioning. It's very tight, very well practiced. Everyone's stacked right behind the boss to bait these charges directly into that ribcage on the side. Make sure that there's minimal movement for the boss, and they can easily stomp the ticks on the ground. Those can get out of hand crazy fast on this encounter, especially during Tantrum as the team finally does branch out. We can see that there is indeed crowd control on the 2 Swarmers on the side. One is paralyzed and one is hibernated from Loda. The team rejoins in the middle right now. There's one tick on the side. Somebody, oh, there we go. Burritos grabs it indeed, and they look to reposition quickly.
Yeah, so one thing to note about Reaping here is that Reaping is actually buffed by Fortified, but not by bolstering. Reaping means that the mobs are going to be 50% HP, the souls are going to be 50% HP of the initial mobs, and the Fortified buff is actually going to be into account, but not the bolstering. So if you bolster a mob really high and then you kill it, then the Reaping mob is not going to have the bolstering buffs on him, but only the Fortified buff.
Yeah, so certainly, but I mean, even with Fortified Reaping,
yeah,
it's kind of a non-affix. Teams just wanted to look good on the damage meter with, and it's certainly enough for those Starfalls on the coveted Boomkins, as you love them very much. But 22% here on Kragmaw right now should be the last Tantrum coming out of Buff War before they can commit fully to the boss. Even if the next Tantrum goes off, they'll likely ignore the remaining ticks. I'm not sure if they're going to choose to. I believe they're playing Alliance by the looks of it, indeed, question mark. So they might have to. They might, if they are, I can't tell from here.
So, yeah.
They're just going to shadow meld those 2 Bloodstormers off and not deal with them because we know just how dangerous they are. Full screen holding their own right now, looking to proc their third Reaping Wave in a moment as their Bloodlust should be coming up in about 40 seconds.
Yeah, Fullscreen still 5% away from their Reaping, while that 4 Rogue already done with the boss here, so Fullscreen definitely pretty far behind at this point. Fullscreen are pulling those skeleton packs here as Jing just charges in here, also pulling the horror. I hope you have your... I can see it right now on the desk, the different names for those horrors. We will hear them later, but buff 4 Rogue just finishing this horror off now. One thing to note here is that this horror has lesser, or needs to be focused rather, over the skeleton. So if you do a pull like that, then those Guardians, they're going to be bolstered really high if you decide to kill the horror fast, but the horror constantly needs to be interrupted, so it requires a lot of attention, so keeping it alive for a long time is not very good for the team.
You're absolutely right, Nagura. The Pasta Factory is open for business as this menacing macaroni does finally get killed. But, the Guardians being bolstered, not really too dangerous for the tank in terms of damage input outside of the Death Speaker buffing them with Wicked Frenzy. So if both of those are eliminated, the Guardians will just take a while, but you are absolutely correct because of the Bone Shield that they have as well, and I don't believe they're running Horde, as we mentioned earlier. They're not going to have any access to Arcane Torrents for dispelling those Guardian shields, the Bone Shields, so the players will have to individually interrupt them. Pretty aggressive pull coming in here from Buffware Nerf Rogue with double Defiler, meaning they're going to have to commit all 4 of their rotational interrupts to these 2 Defilers for their cast of Shadow Bolt, Volley, and of course the Withering Curse. Right now they're going to have to avoid the totem, which means, Nagura, that the Guardians are going to get their Bone Shield cast off.
Yeah, so you have the Guardians with the Bone Shield cast. We actually see a Shadow Ball volley going through here, I believe, on everybody. We see also the totem spawning. This is why everyone is moving away from it. The totem does explode around in a very small area, though, so as long as you move away, it doesn't really do anything else. We see Ching actually dropping pretty low as well, just because he has to tank all those Guardians, all those Skeletons, and the Defilers. And slowly but surely, they're also going to bolster. That's why Ching starts kiting. And actually, one of the Wicked Francis went through, as we saw the debuff on Ching there.
Indeed, yeah, you can spell Reflect them, and afterwards, afterwards you soothe them with Loda can help soothe them. But the problem is you only have that spell reflector in 25 seconds. Ching procs his cheat death trinket and is just running around desperately right now, trying not to get anywhere near those bolstered guardians. Wicked Frenzy still going off from the guardian. The Death Speaker, who has finally dropped now. So they have 4 guardians left over, each individually marked, to make sure that they get interrupted for their Bone Shield cast as much as possible. Ching evading death, quite literally evading death there, as the trinket did proc. I think they'll get their 4th Reaping Wave here in just a moment, that they will likely drag into Sporecaller Zansha, the 3rd boss.
Yeah, so those skeletons were actually bolstered quite a bit there at the very end. This is why it took them so long to finish things off. So bolstering is not only dangerous because the mobs will increase in damage and do more damage to the tank and to anyone else if there's some sort of AoE cast from the mob, but it also just costs you more time to kill them off, of course, because they also buff their HP. So the earlier you buff them, the longer it's going to take you and the more damage waste it's going to be. So it's very important for those teams to min-max the bolstering as much as possible. But Buff Winner Broke are on a boss now on Sporecaller with their 80% Reaping Wave. And again, it's a 45 setting, so they should be down with this boss pretty soon, and it should not be a big problem for them.
Yeah, no problem for them as they clear out these mushrooms quite well. They do have the backup of Lazarus's Dispel every 8 seconds, we mentioned earlier, just in case some of these mushrooms get out of hand or any are left over after the upheavals / shockwave, and if they don't use those to well clear. Festering Harvest finally being cast right now. He does melee at the end of it and during it, so the tank has to be just a bit wary, but not too much trouble here in this fortified setting for Ching BB as they deal well with the first round of Festering Harvest. Fullscreened indeed has finally downed Kragmon, has moved over to their own set of guardians on the side there.
Yeah, Fullscreened, one thing to note for them is, of course, they're slower than Buff Warner Broke, but they do have 0 deaths, so they're having a very clean run. They're playing this strategy perfectly. They're not having any mistakes, so they're doing what they're practice, right? They're having no mistakes so far, so well done by them. Buff Warner Broke, of course, is doing everything a little bit faster. Their strategy is just doing bigger pulls, faster pulls, more efficient pulls. So Buff Warner Broke are on their way to kill a Sporecaller Zansha. Then there's only 20% trash left between them and the last boss and their first one here.
Certainly a fair bit more aggression coming out of Buff Warrior Rogue's side as Sporecaller Zansha drops to 20%, getting the next round of Festering Harvest at the same time as the Quaking goes out. Fortunately for them, we are not in that tyrannical setting, so not too much damage on the group going out as the boss is once again repositioned near the middle, so Ching BB could aim it at the correct mushrooms on the sides. But with 10%, now 9% for Sporecaller Zansha, I don't think they'll really be hitting their next Festering Harvest cast anyway, so the team is not really going to make a huge effort to clear those mushrooms. Boss is about to fall here as Fullscreened is cleaning up some of the trash prior to the boss.
Yeah, so Buff Warrior Rogue is going to pull the Skeleton Pack most likely right after this. Now, the only other teams that we have seen playing this map is Abrakeydabra yesterday, and they've actually had a pretty fast time at 17:53. And by the looks of it, Buff Warrior Rogue can definitely be close to that time or even beat the time of Abrakeydabra. So we'll see how that goes. But they actually just pulled one of the horrors on accident.
No, the Raging Rigatoni on the side there does finally get blinded, but it costs Moritos his life. He does get the battle res up. There is a blind on the side. That was definitely a mistake as they were trying to grab that Defiler there. We can hear them talking in the background. There's a bit of alarm in their voice right now. 80% still on the board, and they have committed their bloodlust to this as well. One of the Corruptors has been pulled on the side that has a substantial amount of health, and it was pulled when all the other mobs are already about 30-40% HP, so they're really going to have to focus it down.
Yeah, this is a very weird pull. I'm not sure if they wanted to pull the Corruptor at all, because, I mean, the Defiler pull, of course, was intended because they do commit their bloodlust here. The Horror pull definitely was not intended, but now we also have a Corruptor. Now, one thing to note is that this Horror here on the side, as long as the mobs are far enough away, it will not get bolstered. But if you drag the mobs closer, the mob will be bolstered even though it's blinded. So the only way to get rid of it is to Shadow Melt afterwards, which they're probably going to do either way because they don't really want to kill overcount, which they have to do otherwise. And they have 93% at this point. So killing the two Corruptors is not going to be enough. So we saw the Shadow Melt come out here. We see the Shroud come through. But they have to kill more than just those two Corruptors.
I'm kind of surprised that they even bothered because I'm pretty sure you can outrange those Death Bolts by a substantial amount. And they're way out of range of that one. And they already killed the Corruptor that was kind of going back and forth with the patrol there. So they could have gotten rid of it. But then again, what else is the Shadow Meld for here? Might as well just use it. So they have grabbed both Corruptors here and will likely be getting them a bit lower before moving over to the last Hazard Spaghetti on the side there, making sure they spread out properly for their Quaking. Half health here on the two Corruptors, but you're absolutely right, Nigro. They will need one more mob on top of this.
Yeah, and we actually they need to be careful here in these maps because we've also seen a death come out here for one of the Residents, and we see full screen F. The Resident die as
Speaking of the
well.
Resident.
Poor Resident, so much pressure on them. There's no battle rest for them, but they're actually out of combat here, so they can get the rest up on the Resident for full screen side. So it's not a huge disaster for them. Unfortunately, they got a quaking, so the rest had to be interrupted. So very unfortunate. Quaking actually happens out of combat.
It does happen out of combat, indeed, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah,
So you're just going to have to deal with it. But the wipe did come before Spore Caller Zoncha, so they're going to have to pull once again here for full screen side as they get started on that third boss. Chingy doing well to kite these Corruptors away from all the tentacles on the ground. Don't want to get smacked in the face by them. Tremendous amount of shadow damage should you get clipped by any of those, especially in this fortified setting. Could actually pretty close to one-shot one of the DPS or the healer, any non-tank down there. 2 deaths on the board as Buff Warrior warps into little balls of light and heads downstairs with the 5th Reaping Wave and wastes no time getting started on the Unbound A-Bomb.
Yeah, I think I actually kind of like that Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue did not save their Bloodlust all the way to the end here, because it is a fortified setting, and even though you do pull the Reaping on top of the boss here, I don't think it's that difficult to deal with it. So using the Bloodlust for a trash pull is actually something I really like coming out of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here. But they still, need to kill his last boss. And I talked about Abracadabra's time, so Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is definitely going to be a little bit slower than them. Again, Abracadabra had 1758, but they're going to be very close to their time because it's a fortified boss, so it's not going to take them too long.
God, I was just watching Run's health go down on full screen, just absolutely yo-yoing, Rulo's health going down, yo-yoing sub 20% there because he did get hit by one of the mushrooms before the Vestering Harvest, likely on purpose, so the rest of the group didn't, but quite a hassle to heal him there from Kegru. Fortunately, they do manage to cover him from that, as Unbound A-Bomb has dealt with its first round of transition, essentially, where the 2 Blood Visages spawn and chunk the boss for 1/6 of its HP every time one of those dies. They're working towards their second one right now.
Yeah, so on this boss, other than that, really not that much happening. Of course, you want to dodge the frontal breath. This is why you see them positioned like that, because of course one of the members is getting targeted by it. And then the other thing, you see this magic debuff on everybody, which is debuff that stacks up over time. It does AoE damage, it does ticking damage to them, and the only way to get rid of it is to either dispel it, which of course can't be dispelled from everyone because it does have a cooldown on the healer's dispel. But the other way is to use this circle, as you can see right now on Loda. If everyone walks into it, then it will be removed.
It will be removed, and you certainly need it, allowing the healer not only a breath of relief, but just some time to damage the boss as well. We can see that 9k sustained DPS there for Loda on the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, as the Unbound A-Bomb, as always, has moved in this nice circular fashion to avoid and having the breaths baited in the direction opposite of which you're kiting, just to make sure that the spores are spawning in somewhat of a localized manner. But the final Blood Visages have spawned here for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, and we'll have, of course, Titan Keeper helping kill those off and allowing them to seal their first game 1-0 against Full Screen on this first boss. So certainly the Sand Queen can pack quite the punch, especially on the tank.
No mages this time around, though.
Unlucky.
At least we have battle rests this time. For both those teams, no one has no battle rest at all. We see the shot come out from both of those teams, just running straight to the Sand Queen here. Now we've seen some teams pull some trash on top of this. Some teams don't do that much, except the parasites that are through this cage here that you want to get rid of before you kill the Sand Queen. And we see Full Screen actually popping the Bloodlust while Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is holding on to it a little bit longer.
Yeah, they're going to hold on to it for the post-first upheaval. That comes about 20 seconds into the fight, so it's really inefficient unless you're kind of dealing with a lot of trash to pop your Bloodlust that early. You waste so much time while the Sand Queen is underground, and indeed that is what they do. Perfect heroic lead there from Ching BB. Managed to get out of dodge for that upheaval, not only getting away from the melee, but the huge nature hit as well, and they indeed pop their Bloodlust right as the Sand Queen comes up for full efficacy of the duration.
One thing to note, though, is that, as I said, the best time of Method E was actually 11 minutes. So if you hold on to your Bloodlust at the very start of the dungeon, then you might not actually get it on the pool of the last boss. So that's something to note. But I assume Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just are not expected to do this dungeon in 11 minutes. But the Sand Queen is going lower and lower for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Their Bloodlust definitely made them catch up on the HP a lot, and they're about to kill the boss earlier than Full Screen here. And
perfectly as the next upheaval comes up, their Bloodlust falls off. That is why the teams usually time it after that first upheaval. Loda getting a bit of a smack there from the upheaval from the Sand Queen. No problem though, as Ching BB starts getting chunked down and manages to stabilize as the group rebuilds their little group stack along the boss, making sure that they kite the boss near the sand trap so they can pick up the drones very easily and cleave them down effectively on top of the Sand Queen, which is now at 5% for buff warrior nerf rogue. Fullscreen already a fair bit behind by 20%.
Yeah, interesting that both teams here choose to not pull any trash at all. Both of them are on 0% here as the cage goes down and buff warrior nerf rogue is on their way to the next hole. Now, what we're going to see here is most likely some skips. Either one of them just pulls them to the side, everyone else walks past, or they just go through everything and then shadow melt when they're on the top.
It's actually, I think, exactly what they're going to do. We're going to get the double true CC here for those two near the cages right now. Double sap indeed goes up from buff warrior nerf rogue. The cage goes up, and we're going to see a sneaky shadow meld just around the corner. We saw Ching BB pause for a second there as that happened. Straight into the mass stealth from the rogues as they go past the C speaker pack and straight into just houses room. Very typical strategy that we see from a lot of teams, but also typically we usually see about 6% on the board for trash right now. So it looks like they're probably going to commit to all the trash on the floor here, and looks like they're rearing up for what could be a pretty substantial pull.
Yeah, we see them charge in. We also saw the rogue go past the corner, pulling some of the arsonists here. So just a pretty huge pull coming in from buff warrior nerf rogue here. And we have seen tanks that we've seen a lot of things go wrong just because there's so much tank damage, there's so much other damage here as well. And it is fortified this time around. So the mobs are definitely buffed and doing more damage than on a tyrannical setting. Now we see the debuffs on Ching from the arsonist here going through, but the interrupts are coming out from the team, and they're doing really well to prevent a lot of damage here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was distracted by the fact that the tank was actually on top of the DPS battery for the entirety of that pull, only now being barely passed by Tomboy over there on the side of buff warrior nerf rogue. They're managed to kill the last of the trash here in just a moment as they get their first few percentages worth of trash, something that Fullscreened as well has done. I'm not sure if they got 1% on the board, but nonetheless they have 1% on the board, and they too are headed up the kind of the jail, the first few floors of the jail before they get up to well, actually they've now just arrived on just Hallis's floor.
Yeah, one more thing to note here is that there's some cages on the side that the rogues can open, and it gives you a buff. The buffs can be RNG, there's 4 different ones, and the one that you really want for your team is attack power. Now, it's RNG which cage has which buff, and most of the time, teams choose to only open one side and not open all 4 of them because it takes too much time to open the ones on the other ones. So this is why it's a little bit RNG if they get the attack power or not, but we see buff warrior rogue actually getting one of the casts through, and everyone has a watery dome here.
Yeah, that's a bit of an oopsie daisy spaghetti-o moment right there, because that's a huge amount of absorb on each of the mobs that cast or that are within range of that watery drum from the C speaker. So somebody certainly missed their interrupt there and screwed up their rotation. So just I don't want to say a huge amount of time lost, but certainly some time lost on the side of buff warrior nerf rogue, allowing Fullscreen, which has already been moving slower in the dungeon, to kind of make a bit of headway. But they're still only at 8% now trash on the board, about to be about 12% before they, well, probably have to engage the rest of the hall to get that first reaping before the first boss.
Yeah, we see buff warrior nerf rogue proc the reaping right now. They're most likely going to pull just halves, as we can see it happening right now. Now, all they have to do is deal with the reaping before they put just howls to 70%. Now, this is a fortified setting, so the boss has a lot less HP. So they definitely want to make sure that they don't put all their damage into a single target, because if the boss stuns them on 70%, and then there's still a lot of debuffs on the tank, and there's cast going out from the reaping souls, then it can be a disaster. But we see Fullscreen actually having 2 deaths going.
Yeah, 2 devs going in, and everything's kind of starting to go wrong for them here as the arsonist is finishing off Rulo, and it looks like he's not moving really right now. So we'll see if there's an issue on their side, but okay, so it did seem like we have a bit of a disconnect right now. So the teams will have an opportunity here to restart the dungeon, Nagura. But, you know, dungeons yet again, Jack. But going out the gate here straight to, I mean, we've already seen a kind of a snippet here, a preview, if you will, Nagura. We do know that's a pretty minimal trash being pulled here, very unlike a lot of the other teams that we saw.
But what if they just change up their strategy from now? We will see. Maybe they pull trash on top of it. No, they won't. So
Get out of here.
The Bloodlust is being popped from Fullscreen, as we know, on the pull, while buff warrior nerf rogue is saving the Bloodlust for the first upheaval. They wait until Sand Queen comes back up, popping their upheaval then, which, again, we think is more efficient, especially if you don't pull trash on top. Most of the time we've seen the Bloodlust popped at the pull if you actually pull trash on top, because of course the trash will not borrow, so you can still damage the trash while the Bloodlust is running. Well, if you don't pull any trash on top, then the Sand Queen is buried, then you just kind of waste a lot of Bloodlust uptime.
Not just that, but it can be quite dangerous for the tank as well, and even for the remaining members of the party, because you could have the crabs just pincering you into one location into a sand trap. You have, of course, those crocolisks debuffing you with max HP debuffs, stacking 5%. 5% per. So it can get pretty out of hand, but that's a reality that we live in here. The two teams have 0% trash on the board right now, and Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has indeed committed that Bloodlust, as they did the first time with 10 seconds left on the board for that. Sand Queen is now at 38%. And I gotta say, you know, this time around, Fullscreened is keeping it a fair bit closer in terms of percentage. They lost by about 22% in the previous go.
Yeah, so the roles worked out a lot better this time around for the Outlaw Rogues, most likely for Fullscreened, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue does have the last upheaval here, and the Sand Queen is on 25% now as she unburrows. Now, one more thing to note here is that, of course, the Fullscreen got 1%, while the other one got 0% after this, so maybe that will actually win them the game at the very end.
I am on the edge of my seat here as XingBB dips quite low right now on the Sand Queen, and they enter the single digits of percent as well, trying to finish her off before she goes down for another upheaval phase. Sand Queen 15% on Fullscreen, certainly, as we mentioned, keeping a fair bit closer now. Last time it was about a 22% spread, now we're looking at a 12% spread, so much better done here as we see the Ursula's Vortex go down along with a Shockwave from XingBB. Nerf Warrior Buff Rogue rushing up and getting ready to skip all of this trash with the double True CC sap on the throwers right before the gate.
Yeah, we see, of course, both of the teams are playing Alliance this time around, and all of them are playing Night Elves, even the Rogues. Sometimes the Rogues will pick Dwarf for different racials and for different for more damage, but this time they actually choose to have the Night Elf, so they have the Vanish plus the Shadow Melt because of the cages that they need to open, which does put them in combat, so they need the Vanish and they need the Shadow Melt, and then also later on when they do any sort of skips or they use the cannons, having double reset, basically double Vanish plus Shadow Melt to get out of combat really works out for them. See, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is already in the Just Howlers room and is doing this big pull as we've seen before.
As an absolute terrifying pull as we saw from that neutral mob, well seen there by our observers on the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. Same big pull here as Tomboy Uwu goes to the side, grabs a lot of the trash, tricks at the trades it over to XingBB, and they get started here for the first percentage of the half. Ching dipping quite low though. 6 stacks from the Arsonist. Flaming needs to get dispelled here, finally gets what he needs from Loda as he backs up, but then charges back in and rejoins the action on the trash, making sure to stomp out any explosives that may have spawned from his trip, leading the mobs down the alley and making sure that he stayed nice and healthy and didn't dip too low. Fullscreen following suit. They're already upstairs as well. Tree of Life popped here from Kegru.
Yeah, one problem here in this dungeon specifically is that the mobs actually run away when they're low HP. Now, you can keep them in place for a little while if you have a Vortex, for example, or an AoE stun, but since it's 45, the mobs just have a lot of HP, so you're not going to be able to kill them off within this window of time, and therefore the mobs will run away, and because it is explosive, when they're spread out and they're running away, you can have explosive spawn in every kind of corner, and because it is a full melee setup, it's a little bit more difficult for the melee to deal with them if they're spawning so spread out. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue doing a really good job so far killing the explosives.
And they're doing the exact same, obviously, the exact same pull pattern that we saw just in the previous go at it, Nagura. And, you know, it was really worrisome because what had happened and what we commented on during the cup play, I think it was actually from them, when they pulled the first Reaping Wave on top of Just Howless. The scare is that if you don't deal with the Reaping Wave before the stun at 70% on Just Howless, you will get stunned, and then you'll get a huge amount of Reaping stacks on the tank to the point that the tank could actually die during that period. So it's going to be really a bit scary there from Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, which is just on the cusp of proccing their first Reaping, is Fullscreen still chewing through a lot of the trash, the pack that Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just finished up here.
Yeah, so they are engaging Just Howlers here, just like we saw before, with the Reaping Wave on top. And as we mentioned, they have to deal with the Reaping Wave first. Now, they could also, if they still have Reaping mobs up at the same time as the boss goes to 70%, they can still survive it as long as the tank does get a Dispel before the 70% comes through the stun, and maybe also pop some sort of cooldown, a tank cooldown to survive it. But of course, it will be way more beneficial to just deal with the trash with the Reaping mobs beforehand, as we can see them do right now. They are done with the Reaping, and we actually see Rulo on Fullscreen side die.
Yeah, this is looking not so good here for Fullscreen right now, as Cox goes down low, procs his cheat death as well, and will go down. Slav following suit right now, proccing the cheat death. Spider goes down as well, and it looks like a full team wipe as Kegru does well to run out of dodge, Shadow Melt, and res his teammates on the side, avoiding the full team wipe and saving them a lot of precious time that they will need. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue has already entered the second phase of Just Howless right now, demoralizing shout coming out of XingBB right now, and making sure to get the proper interrupts on Just Howless, which will be starting his motivating howl at the end of the hallway. Need to make sure you get interrupts on that, and of course on those Howling Fears.
That's very, very good for full screen that the Resolute actually got the Shadow Melt off, did manage to get out of combat and get the full rest up. Of course, it's still going to cost them a lot of time, not only 25 seconds on the board, but also all the mobs just reset their HP. And we see Rawl just die again. They do not have a Balrus available to them, and they probably can't finish up this trash bag. So this time around, he probably does not have Shadow Melt available, and they're going to have a full team wipe.
Full team wipe, explosives going off left and right in full screen, having not the time of their lives right now as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just Howless at 5%, doing well to dodge all of those flashing Tol Dagors over on the side, finishing off the second boss and getting headed up, starting to head upstairs to round up as much as they can for the big cannon moment here. Full screen now, of course, with the full wipe. Kegro has had to release and run back, but the entire team needs to run back, Nigura, because they left so much trash in their stead.
Yeah, it's definitely all eyes on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue at this point because they're the ones who are very far ahead. They have 0 deaths, a very clean run so far. Now they are on the way to the cannon part here. They do have enough trash percentage. 20% is more than enough. They can do everything else with the cannons. We will see the tank pull a lot of trash here from this room that we just saw, pull it up to the cannon part and deal with it here. Now the one thing to note here is of course explosive. Explosive will spawn from these mobs. The one thing that everyone else can do is line of sight, but the player that is in the cannon of course can't do that. So the player in the cannon needs to be out healed from the explosive damage with the Resolute and the off heals from the Windwalker, or they have to use defensive, like go out of the cannon, use cloak and go back in.
Yeah, and there are a lot of explosives going on in the hallway, and don't be fooled, even though the cannon's doing the work for the numbers on the screen, almost reaching 1 million DPS for Morito right now with all the trash coming up. Outside of that, you also have to be careful because the rest of the group needs to help with crowd control and kind of keeping all of the mobs together so that the cannon can do that work. So a good combination of Merciless Vortex, Typhoons, Shockwaves, taunts, of course, from the tank wherever they can get it off is absolutely crucial to pulling off this good strat and dealing with any explosives that may come up in their stead. 1 or 2 did go off there and clip the members just earlier, but they seem to have recovered quite well as the third round of Reaping has procced here. Full screen now back in action and starting clearing more trash in Jess Hallis's floor.
Yeah, we see Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue did have a huge pull from 20% trash to 66% trash. Now, one thing to note, though, is that they're playing it a little bit safer. So, okay, we have Tomboy actually...
Tomboy, oh no!
They will have a battle rest available for him to get him back up if they choose to do so. Because Tomboy, what he wanted to do was to go to the other cannon, of course, and jump in there. But it didn't work out because he just had aggro.
Yeah, but Ching BB heroically leaps, and now they're hitting it from the front and from the back right now, hitting all of the mobs in their stead and making sure to nuke everything down. Ashvane Marine finally goes down, and they are getting Tomboy Uwu back up on their side.
Yeah, so full screen, of course, on the other hand, is just trying to get back to the boss. All this trash that they skipped earlier, they have to deal with it somehow. And maybe this pull that they tried to do, with what they died to twice, maybe they just have to do something else or have to get some CC because it's not working out for them. They're still in the game, right? There's still things that can happen to Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, but they're so far behind. They have to play clean and just have no wipes anymore, as they have 10 deaths versus just 1.
Yeah, I mean, things certainly happening for the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue as well, as they proc their 4th Reaping right now, but not at the... but with the cost of Morito's cheat death, because 2-3 explosives did go off as they were pulling this last round of trash before Knight Captain Valeri, the 3rd boss of the dungeon. So 88% on the board for them. That's exactly the amount of trash they need before they approach the 3rd boss here. So everything perfectly done, but a bit of sloppiness. They did have the 1 death, and neither rogue has their cheat death available going into these next encounters. Now, fortunately, these encounters aren't exactly the most DPS intensive in terms of damage intake in the world. Perhaps if you get too many doubles on Korgus, as I'm sure we'll talk about that upstairs, Nagura.
Yeah, that's really the only thing that can really cause some problems here, or if you get hit by the cannons on the last boss. We did see that happen before. Now, Knight Captain Valeri, not a very difficult boss on 45 setting. The only thing you have to deal with is those barrels that you have to drag around the room, making sure that Valeri does not ignite them and fill the whole room up with explosions with the Cinder Flame, as you can see it happen right now. But as long as you drag the boss around properly and you drag the barrels around, it really shouldn't be a problem here at all.
Yeah, I'm loving this positioning right now from Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. We always comment on the positioning and pre-moving Knight Captain Valeri in this room because she's so stubborn with her movement. She constantly casts a variety of spells, whether it be Cinder Flame, of course, or cast on one of the members for the damage over time from her fire effect. Sometimes she even just pauses between casts and doesn't move, as she did right there before her ignition cast. So really important to pre-move her, because in this all melee comp, you want to have full access to her damage and not get blotted out by the AoE from the barrels once they explode.
Yeah, we also see, of course, Loda just doing as much damage as he can, and also Ching doing a lot of damage. Just that's all you can do really. You want to speed up this fight as much as possible. There's no more efficiency that you can gain. You can't pull any trash on top here as all of the doors or the gates are closed. So all you have to do is damage Valyria and make sure you kill her as fast as possible without, of course, losing too much time doing useless movement or having Valyria stand in one of the explosions, as you mentioned before. But we can see Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue doing a really good job having perfect uptime on the boss and doing a lot of damage as well.
Yep, everything's going great for them as they reach single digits of percent for a Knight Captain. Valyria Fullscreened here has finally finished off their Bloodlust, but Spider Monkey going down on their side right now. Jess Howell's just about to be finished off, so fortunately no wipe from them, but just one insult to injury death there at the very end. Another 5 seconds on the board, and they'll have to get out of combat before they're able to release, before Spider Monkey's able to release at the new checkpoint after killing the boss. Up he comes, and they're ready to move on to the cannons themselves as Buff Warrior is actually dealing with their last cannon of the area, trying to get their 100%, at which point, now we've seen two kind of strats of this. Either they do the 100% and then Shadow Meld it at the top of the stairs, or they leave, Method you did that, they leave one of the Wardens alive, CC it on the side, and then finish it off after Corgus.
Yeah, that's most likely what Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is going to do here. As we see, of course, Marito jumped into the cannon dealing with this trash here. The Wardens, they walk really slowly, as you can see. They're not really slow, they just walk this slowly by default. We actually see them proc the Reaping, which is something we have not seen this tournament yet, but you can Shadow Meld off a lot of the Reaping since you're very far away here, so you only really have to deal with the Reaping that spawns very close to this cannon here because of the mobs that died very closely. But other than that, there's not much else to do, and they can play a little bit safer as they're ahead. Now, they don't really know that though. They don't know that they're ahead.
Oof.
And
Tomboy Uwu, no!
No!
Another death coming in for Tomboy Uwu on the side there. Not just that, but Marito getting hit by 2 of the green swirlies as well, which he does cloak off, so he managed to get rid of that 20% penalty on his damage output. And we actually did see one of the teams do that yesterday in Agora. However, they pulled it off cleanly, and they did not have any of the residual mobs from that 5th Reaping, whereas Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, a bit of sloppiness coming in from them there. We do know kind of coveted times of that 11 to 12 minute range in a lot of the teams for Tol Dagor in their practice runs, so Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue well over that right now, only engaging the final boss at around the 13-minute mark.
Yeah, so 13 minutes into the dungeon here, they do have their 100% trash. They also have their Bloodlust available again. We see the Deadeye go onto Loda, and the one thing we want to watch out for is, of course, those explosive rounds, as you can see them go out right now. Now, those explosive rounds are always going to be 3, and they will always favor ranged targets, so Loda will always get the explosive round on him. But since there's no more ranged targets, the other 2 go on random targets, so you can be lucky or unlucky. You can have the same people get it all the time, or you can have it switch up a little bit, especially if you do get those doubles, as we can see right now. Then it is kind of dangerous because Loda doesn't have a lot of time to heal up the initial damage, and then the second explosive round is already going to come in, and they're getting a lot of doubles right now.
One more cross ignition fresh out the kitchen here for the team as they do well to dodge it right now. But even in this, the doubles are quite scary, Nagura, but we're in a fortified environment. I mean, you're going to have a lot of them back to back. You have to be really unlucky on this fight for it to get out of hand like it would in a tyrannical environment. The team down now to 30%, looking to close this out.
They actually get so many doubles. This is very unlucky for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, but Loda is doing a very good job healing through the double damage. Unfortunately, he's doing less DPS because of all the doubles now. As you said, it's not as dangerous as on a tyrannical setting, so Loda does have an easy time healing it away, but of course he's doing less damage because of it, so it still costs them a little bit and is bad RNG, and another double. I think they're just like the unluckiest team I've ever seen in my life. Thankfully, it's not tyrannical. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, they are about to kill a boss here. Only 2 deaths on the board and just a very clean run, a very clean 2 maps by them, and a very deserved win here.
Double trouble for them, but in Nagura, you say clean map.
Yeah, and I think this is also the first time we've seen the dungeon this tournament, too. And, the volcanic affix really isn't that dangerous, but the bursting is probably one of the more nasty affixes in this dungeon because you can actually end up chaining it around that second boss if you aren't pulling, very safely. But we already see right off the bat both teams doing something similar, pulling multiple trash packs and snapping them in this sort of lantern sort of cauldron circular thing.
This is a very big pull from both of the teams. We see none of the Bloodlust being popped, and this bursting, keep in mind, Long actually dropping very low. He almost died there, but we see both of the teams handling this trash pack really good so far. We saw the snapping come in from both of the teams, both doing the snapping very well, and we see the tank just kite back up, making sure that the casters are just following him around, making sure that they need less interrupts, and that's why the tank is just going back up the stairs, both Rentari and Long for Team D as well.
Yeah, of course, part of the reason we don't see teams really doing too much much trash in this section of the dungeon has to be those spiritualists, right? The main thing they need to look out for are those Mending Rapids cast by the spiritualists. If they're able to make sure they get those interrupts off, there's going to be a lot of damage going on in the group from the washaways, and you can see the danger from bursting there. They had a 4 or 5 second bursting on the side of Fourty K, and they almost went down there.
Yeah, Team D so fast. They were so fast in this pull. They had those very last 5 stacks of bursting at them, but App managed to heal it away. None of the cheat deaths has been procced, so very well done by them. And they're on their way to the next pull here, as this is most likely going to proc the 20% reaping. Then they will use their Shadow Mail, trying to get rid of as much as the reaping wave as possible, and then pull it on top of the trash. Now, one thing to note here is that this boss actually has a small RP event before he spawns, so you want to make sure that you go close enough, making sure you trigger the event so the boss is there when you actually want to pull him.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, that's the main thing that teams are going to be looking forward to. The strategies are pretty much exactly the same so far. Big pull into Shroud Skip into probably proccing the first Reaping Wave and pulling it on top of the boss. But Team D has been a little bit more efficient with their pull strategies so far. But I do like what 40K is doing. They're just pulling this trash right on top of the boss, so they get that, that extra damage on the boss while they're cleaving the rest of the trash down.
Yeah, so 40K actually has been behind up until this point, but because of this strategy, just like cutting it closer and closer with interrupts, and then having the Typhoon come in from Igloo to make sure they're on top of the boss, it is a very risky strategy, but if they can pull this off, they should be ahead at this point, because it's just so efficient to kill anything on top of high HP bosses. So we see it's a 45 setting, of course, and we see Wolfscreened drop so low as he got hit by the anchors, and Rentari is going down. They do have one battle rest, so they can get him back up, but Wolfscreened is dead now, and they're in boss combat. That means Wolfscreened cannot be rest. So either fight the rest of the boss fight with 4 people, or they're resetting the boss.
Yeah, I mean, the boss is at 98%. You would think that they'd want to reset the boss at this point, and it's it's pretty simple to. Actually, I don't think you can reset this boss. You have to get him to charge outside of the ring, right? Something like that. But they haven't committed their Bloodlust yet. I'm not really sure what the thought process is here. Team D did commit their Bloodlust right at the start of the fight, so they did actually end up using it for boss damage. They didn't really have to cleave too much trash down, although they did pull those 2 apprentices off to the side while they had Bloodlust alive, so they did deal with both of those just now. And I mean, this is a fortified setting, so it's kind of interesting to see them use their Bloodlust on the boss.
Yeah, I think this must have been a mistake. I feel like 40K should have used their Bloodlust here, because that was a very risky pull, having those casters on top of the boss. And now the thing that Wolf Disco actually died to was the anchors, and the anchors are actually being casted by the spiritualists on the ranged target, and Igloo is the only ranged target. Now, Igloo of course wants to do damage, and he has to be in cat form and in melee range to do so. So what probably happened was Igloo was in melee range doing damage, and then the anchors got casted on him, and Wolf Disco just didn't see it, and he got hit by it. So I feel like Igloo maybe should have played it safer and just go outside, making sure the anchors spawn out and not all the way in melee range, because there were so many things going on. Just having a boss, having all those casters that need to be interrupted, having those huge anchors spawn in melee is just such a big area of denial as well.
Yeah, and this is probably one of the worst situations outside of a full team wipe that you could hope for any team, because they kind of have to do the entire boss 1 DPS down. I mean, when you only have 3 DPS players and one of them dies, you're doing a third less damage than you normally would be. Maybe a little less than that, because you do have the tank and the healer committing a little bit as well, but it's not nearly as much as one whole DPS is doing. So you see them almost half of the boss behind. Team D has pretty much already gone through their first intermission phase, and they're just dealing with the last of the boss right now.
Yeah, I still believe it has to be a mistake that they just did not commit their Bloodlust here. Maybe if they would have used their Bloodlust, maybe things would have worked out better for them. Maybe, the mobs would have been that or something like that. Or the interrupts got out faster and Igloo went out faster. I definitely do have to talk to them about this, why they're just like not using it here. And even now, when you see that one of your DPS is dead, and you see, you know what, we didn't use Bloodlust when we wanted to, but let's just still use it because we need to catch up, right? So either there's something in their mind they actually want to save it for something later on, or it really was just a mistake. Well, Team D is already on their next trash pull. 40K is still going to take quite a while to finish up this boss here.
Yeah, I mean, I probably would have liked to see them use their Bloodlust on this intermission phase just for a little bit of safety, right? There's a lot of damage going out in this phase, and because they only have 4 targets available for any of the abilities that the Aqualings do, one person could get targeted by 2 or 3 of them at the same time and just go down. So not using the Bloodlust is definitely a questionable call. They are going to get through the phase just fine. I mean, they're doing very well so far, but it's just that much slower. We can't keep going on about it. Team D has already pulled ahead. They're already pulling all the trash inside of this sort of mini boss area here.
Yeah, Team D is going to get 40% trash once they finish off these last apprentices here, and then they proc their 40% Reaping Wave. They are going to go through, skip a bunch of trash, and then Shadow Melt off the Reaping Wave plus the trash. We'll see Long go ahead here as he will pull the mini buffs off of the bridge here, making sure everyone of the rest of the team is going past. We see the Typhoon come out as well, and now once everyone's passed, Long is going around the corner using his Shadow Melt, making sure everything is de-aggroed. Very well done by Team D here.
Yeah, beautiful. No nerves about the Shadow Meld skip there, even though we saw them mess it up in MOTHERLOAD there. And I'd say both of those are probably about equal difficulty in terms of Shadow Meld skips. You have to make sure you're pulling as many mobs as possible, pulling aggro on the mobs, and then also dropping aggro all together at the same time, and they're able to pull it off just fine going through there. Actually, I don't think we only had one Reaping Mob going, only a couple Reaping Mobs going through, which you're going to get from residual Reaping Mobs from the bridge because they do have that kind of increased aggro radius. But still, you know, that's kind of that's the best thing that can happen to you in that skip, probably.
Yeah, most definitely. I think Team D is doing a very good job so far. We've talked about Shrine just being such a difficult dungeon in general, and it's very important to not make any mistakes, especially when you do those kind of Shadow Melt skips. So very well done by Team D, especially since, as you mentioned before, we've seen them struggle with skips, we've seen them struggle with other things that they really shouldn't struggle to. So maybe they finally just got their nerves in check, maybe they have their head in the game now, and they're just playing their game like they did in the Cups.
This is probably the most dangerous part of the dungeon in this Bursting Affix. They've pulled 2 packs of the Initiates, that's 8 mobs. If all 8 of those die at the same time, that's 8 stacks of Bursting on the group, which is more than lethal for this group, even through cooldown, so they have to be very careful. We do see on the side of 40 K, Attack goes down, and they commit their Bloodlust to this trash pull, which is very, very weird. I don't think I've ever seen that strategy come out from a team before.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever seen this Bloodlust here, and Ada dying, meaning that they lose a whole DPS with a Bloodlust as well, because they don't have any battle refs ready. They did use it on Rentari at the very start of the first boss, so they have to finish this whole trash pull with 4 people as well. Just so many problems for 40 K here, as Team D has dropped very, very low, and we see that the bursting just keep rolling here. It finally went off, so not a problem here to finish off this rest of the trash, and they only have a couple of initiates left. Now, one thing to note is that we've seen a really good strategy from Method EU. When there was bursting in Shrine in the Cup, they actually used their Shroud to skip a bunch of those initiates, just because of bursting makes it so annoying and it costs you so much time, because you can't just pull them all and kill them all at the same time. As we can see them just drop so low from the bursting here.
Both cheat deaths from the Rogue's proc there, and we could actually hear them in the background. We can hear the teams talking to each other, especially Team D. They're being very loud with their communications. You could hear them yell "stop." They were yelling "stop" or some equivalent of "stop," and they did. There was a mob on like 1% HP, and they just didn't kill it. Of course, afterwards they killed the remaining 5 or 6 mobs, which do a lot of percentage health if you have a 5 or 6 stack of bursting, and so that's why we saw the Rogues both proc their cheat death there going into this boss.
Yeah, and this is why Method you probably chose to skip this with a Shroud or something, and the rest of the Western region kind of adapted to this Method use strategy and just chose to not play these initiates and get the percentage somewhere else, because let's be honest, these initiates don't really give a lot of percentage in general, and it is of course worth it to kill them if you can just pull them all together and just kind of AoE them down, because they don't have a lot of HP. But as soon as there's something like bursting, then you just lose so much time because it's so inefficient to kill them one by one. And we see Team D now are fighting Brother Ironhall and Gale Caller Frey. Now this boss also can cause some trouble, but we see them deal really well with it, not interrupting Gale Caller Frey once she has the buff up to not spawn any of those tornadoes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting strategy. Team D kind of has always had these really interesting boss strategies. Like the thing that comes to mind to me is King's Rest. They always had that vanish strategy for max DPS on the tank boss, the one that knocks you back and does the line of sight. I forget what his name is, honestly, sorry, but they had that vanish strategy in King's Rest, and they also let a lot of these slicing blast casts through while they had that debuff clearing shield aura from Brother Ironhole. Because whenever you stand in that, it removes all the debuffs from you, so those slicing blasts only do their base damage. They don't actually do increased damage to you from your debuffs there. It's a pretty interesting strategy from them.
Yeah, very well done. We see not a single tornado here in this whole room. So, okay, now we actually saw the tornado spawn because they had to interrupt, because they were actually pretty low HP. So they're probably just playing this strategy where they don't interrupt unless they have to. So if App, the healer, calls, look, I can't heal anymore, you have to interrupt the next cast, then they're going for it. But if they don't have to interrupt, they're not doing it just so they avoid those tornadoes, because not only are those tornadoes very annoying to avoid if you're a melee, but it also just does so much damage if you get hit by it, and it just costs you damage too, because you have to avoid them, you have to go around, you have to dodge them. So if there's no tornadoes, you just gain a lot of damage too, especially with a full melee team.
And of course, once Gale Caller Frey goes down, Brother Ironhole's just take damage. That's all it really is. There's not much going on, so they're able to kill all 4 of those initiates and stand inside this damage reduction rune just so that bursting doesn't do too much damage to them. Just really interesting strategies from them. Of course, afterwards, they're going to have to kill 1 or 2 mobs to get their 3rd Reaping Wave, and we'll probably see them pull off another Shadow Meld Scup after that.
Yeah, I think Abyss actually went over and just pulled some of the Enforcer. Yeah, we see the Enforcer coming right here. So this Enforcer, I'm not completely sure if it's going to be enough to proc the 60%, but if it's not, they can just pull one of the, like some of those very small skeletons, just get rid of the buff and just kill them to get the last percentage that they need. And then they will run through, skip the rest of this trash here, go to the bridge, and then use their Shadow Meld just to avoid the Reaping plus the rest of the trash.
All right, Shadow Meld skip number 2. We'll see if Team D has none of those jitters left from Motherlode when they messed it up. On the side of Fourty K, we see Abrakeydabra going down once again. This might be one of those things where, you know, he might not have that much practice in these dungeons playing Monk for 40K. It's just kind of one of those things where he might not be comfortable yet. We'll have to, you know, ask him about that afterwards. But Team D pulled off their skip perfectly.
Yeah, Team D doing a very good job so far. They have 0 deaths, a very clean run. We see them actually do the tentacle pull here, which is not as difficult if you don't have Necrotic. Now, Necrotic makes this a little bit more difficult because those tentacles are not moving. You can't move them anywhere. And if the tank is not in range to them, they will actually cast an AoE. So the tank always has to stay in range. But this time around, Bursting and Volcanic doesn't make it as difficult. Now, of course, the other mobs also have a frontal cleave, which stuns you if you stand in it. So you definitely want to make sure you avoid that too.
I definitely don't want to get your mind assaulted. That'll leave you stunned for, I think, about 5 seconds. It's pretty bad. And also on this fortified setting, will probably come close to one-shotting you. So don't want to get hit by that at all. But like you mentioned, this Tentacle Pack, we don't really see teams pull this too much on live because it's a lot of damage. It's kind of something that one of those things you can avoid. But they need the mob count at this point. They have to actually kill pretty much everything left in the dungeon to get their mob count.
Yeah, we see actually they pulled both of those packs together. Now, we've seen Team D do this exact pull before, but they did have a DK when they pulled this off the last time around. So this is a very difficult pull because these bridge packs here have a lot of dangerous caster mobs. You can see a lot of rip mines going through, a lot of frontals that need to be dodged, and then there's a lot of other things that need to be interrupted. And we can see the Vortex Typhoon come in from the Rastery just because they ran out of AoE stuns and out of interrupts. And we can see the bursting stars rolling in a team now.
Yeah, and I think going back to one of the questions we asked Team D, and actually we asked every team, is what their best and worst dungeons were. Shrine of the Storm was always a really good dungeon for them, as they're dropping incredibly little bursting there, but I think he did end up proccing his cheat death trinket there, but honestly, you know, proccing your cheat death trinket is a little better than going down. Just a little bit of mismanagement of bursting there, but not too bad from them, just the trinket going on. But as I was saying, Shrine of the Storm was always a really good dungeon for Team D. I believe they had one of the fastest times in any of our cup plays. I think it was the first sub-20-minute time we saw from any team. So I'm not really surprised that they're doing well in this dungeon. It just might have been a little bit of stage nerves from their first couple matches here.
I agree. I think they just recovered here from the nerves and from just not being warmed up here in the very first day, where they did make a couple of mistakes. But now they're playing well. They're playing as expected from coming out of the cup play, just being the number 2 seed from the Eastern region. They're just showing that they are a very, very good team, that they can pull out those fast strategies, and they are proccing their 80% Reaping Wave here. They will Shadow Melt away most of the Reaping Souls. Some of them did snap to one of the players here, so they will have to deal with that. But they can also just pull it on top of the boss if they want to. They do have their Bloodlust available, but they're very likely going to save it for the last fight.
Yeah, and we've seen how they do this boss really several times actually from them. They have a really good strategy for the first boss. So, of course, the main mechanic for Lord Stormsong is that he will mind control one of the players with the Ancient Mindbender cast. Now, you do have a little bit of a chance to immune it. If both of the rogues cloak it off, you'll become magic immune and not be able to be targeted by the Mindbender. But if it does go off onto one of the players, we see the cast here, that player usually kind of runs into the pool, actually, instead of soaking the orbs, because you have to take damage down to about 50% of your health in order to get broken out of the mind control, and we see Mog doing that right here.
Okay, we see, actually, I just noticed that Baby Pig is not playing Outlaw, is playing Azeroth, which is something we've only really seen in Shrine so far, and is working out for them really well. Well, 40K does have 2 of the Outlaw rogues, which is the most common spec we've seen in Plus so far, but the Azeroth doing very well here on the single target damage, as you can see on Lord Stormsong here. And Team D, of course, does have enough percentage. With the 81%, they can get all of the rest that they need in the very last boss room from the middle pack and the eels that are on the side. Now, one thing to note though is that the eel packs can be dangerous, especially with bursting, and the healer just having this debuff on him, which decreases his max HP.
And not to mention the fortified setting, that's also pretty dangerous too. Now, of course, the thing about that Ancient Mindbender thing is why it's so cool is it leaves enough orbs up for this second mind control to instantly run through all the orbs and get broken out without any damage from anyone. So that's kind of one of the cool things of their strategy. Team D always seems to have these really innovative strategies just for bosses that other teams kind of pick up on and steal. We've heard that in Waycrest Manor. I think Shrine is also really good for them, and we're seeing them pull it off here.
Yeah, not sure what kind of strategy that was by Long, just walking into the orb, just being stunned for a very long time. But maybe it was the actually planned, and maybe they just didn't want to have any of the orbs running around here because it's distracting. But it didn't cost them anything. Long survived very well. Of course, this boss doesn't do a lot of damage. With melee attacks, most of the damage is coming from the cast that need to be interrupted. We see one more Ancient Mindbender coming out onto Ab, so it's not going to be a big deal as the boss dies and the debuff is going to go away soon. They did jump into the water a little bit early. Usually you want to wait a little bit until the RP is over because the water is damaging you during the boss fight, and it takes a couple of seconds until the damage gets removed, but not a problem for them as they're on their way to the last boss.
And they are going through the underwater river filled with jellyfish. If somebody does get hit by one of those stuns, Sours is going to have a clip to look at later on, even if they win this map, and it is going to be in the post-roll credits. Fortunately, none of them seem to get hit by any of them, so they're going to be going through here just fine. But we need to look at 40K. I mean, they're just not quite performing up to the standards we saw them performing in their earlier dungeons of the tournament. I mean, like I was saying earlier, the only really point of comparison we have was the Waycrest Manor, where 40K was, a full 2 minutes faster than Team D's strategy, and it kind of looks like they're not really that prepared in this dungeon. We're going to have to see if they're prepared in the other two dungeons after this.
Yeah, maybe it's just 40K, yesterday they really only had 2 or 3 hours to practice with Ada, the monk player in their team, and maybe they just said, you know what, we're going to play a little bit of a safer strategy, and it worked out for them, and they just won. And now they figured, you know what, we have more time to practice, let's actually play a little bit riskier and do those kind of things. And maybe that's why it's not working out for them, and maybe that's why they're having those staffs and everything is just struggling in their team.
What is Team D doing? This is a massive pull from them. And actually, I think something we both forgot actually for a second there is that the eels actually don't give bursting.
Oh, yeah, true.
They removed a lot of the affixes from those eels, so the bursting they don't have to worry about. But there still is a massive amount of tank damage. Those residual shadow debuffs that they put on players, there's a lot of damage here, but they're able to pull it off. And it's a pretty interesting thing that we don't see from most teams. Usually they'll just pull that with the healer damage buff.
We've actually seen Team D do this exact same thing before, and we were wondering about it because, as you said, most teams do pull the buffs first, wait for the damage buff, and then just pull this pack afterwards. And then we saw Team D do this, and it was like, why are they not waiting? Why don't they do the buffs first? We were speculating it might be because of damage cooldowns being ready for different timings, but one thing I noted was maybe it's just better, or it's riskier to do such a huge pull if you're in boss combat, and the buff actually doesn't benefit you that much if you do such a huge pull, because the healer can't really DPS when there's eels inside this pull, because a healer gets aggro immediately if you go in to swipe the eels, and then you're just gonna die. So if you can't benefit from the healer buff anyway, you might as well just do it without being in boss combat and risking that.
Yeah, of course, and they did finish the first phase pretty clean here. 25% of the boss HP on Fortified is about what I'd expect from these teams here. It is in a Fortified setting, so they are more than likely going to be able to one-phase this boss because they do have the Bloodlust available. But in this bottom phase, there's 3 mobs that are similar to the mobs we saw them pull in that mass AoE. There's 2 mobs that need to be interrupted, otherwise they'll do massive amount of damage to everyone in the group, probably killing their healer with that debuff, as well as 1 tank mob that needs to be kited around by the tank and DPS down by the tank and the healer.
Yeah, this tank mob actually does a lot of damage to the tank. That's why we saw Long actually drop really low. But prod warriors are very good to tank them. We've seen before, if you don't really have a prod warrior, then the tank kind of needs to get the aggro and then make sure they kite it so they don't get melee hits. But prod warriors usually can just go in and take the damage. But now they're out of the intermission phase. They are popping their Bloodlust here. They need to one-phase this boss, because if they do get another intermission phase, then they're just going to lose so much time. This is why we see all of those teams usually save their Bloodlust up until this very, very last moment, and then they use all their cooldowns, make sure Ab gets as much damage as possible into the tank. You can see Ab, the Resto Druid, topping the DPS and getting the Bloodlust damage up onto the boss.
This Resto Druid is actually topping the damage meters by a solid 4 or 5k here. Must be getting some insane trinket procs. This is really impressive from him. But yeah, all Team D really needs to do here is finish off the boss before the intermission, which it looks like they're going to be able to do, and then finish off one of the ill packs, and then they're home free. This isn't quite going to be that sub 20-minute Shrine of the Storm we were talking about, but it's still a very clean, very impressive run. No Shadow Meld skip jitters from them at all. This was a very clean run from Team D.
Yeah, very well done by Team D, and this is what we want to see from them. This is expected from them, and this is what we want to see if they want to advance further into this whole tournament here. As they finish off this shrine with 0 deaths, very clean run by Team D. Very well done.
And the yields go down there.
Indeed, and Team D playing like their life is on the line, taking game 1 in Shrine of the Storm.
We've seen this dungeon from Team D, this tournament, but we haven't seen it from Fourty K. Now, we've seen Fourty K play this dungeon in the Cup, and they did this very interesting strategy where they would pull the Colossi. So let's see what Fourty K is going to do right here.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of the similar thing that we see from every team, but no, like you mentioned it right away, they're pulling it with the Colossus. Now, we have to talk about this Colossus really quick. The main mechanic of the Colossus is if you kill anything else other than the Colossus, it will do 2 things. 1, it will heal the Colossus. 2, it'll give it an increasing damage buff. So they really need to make sure they're focusing that Colossus down, which it looks like they're doing here.
Yeah, so this is very good for rogues. They have a lot of single target damage, of course. They have a lot of all damage and a lot of everything because they're rogues. But 40K here doing pretty well so far. Nothing's happening. We've seen them wipe to this exact same pull in the Cups before, but it was 45 in the Cups for the Western region. And now we actually have Tyrannical, so it's going to be a little bit easier to pull this off. And as we've mentioned before, if you go to this side of the area, as we've seen also Method EU do, you just have better reaping timing, and it just works out very well. So we'll see what 40K is going to do here as they proc their first reaping wave.
Yeah, and they're doing the pretty substantial skip that we see most teams do. When they proc their first reaping wave, they're going to be shadow melting off both the reaping wave and all the trash they pulled. But on the side of Team D, we do see almost a full team wipe going down. 4 deaths it looks like there's swords. Did they mess up a snap there? We'll have to look at that again, but that's pretty catastrophic from them. And 40K has popped their Bloodlust and got onto this massive AoE pull in Priestess's room.
Yeah, this is a disaster for Team D. They did mess up a snap pull. They did maybe have someone fall off. Unfortunately, I was watching 40K because they were doing the Colossi pull here. We'll have to see what happened later on. But this is going to cost them so much time as they have the 4 deaths coming in. Fortunately, they did spawn at the entrance and didn't have a long walk back, but 40K is already in Priestess room. They're doing this huge pull that we have seen before with Priestess and all the other Rentari dropping very low, but he does have the Somebody's Bargain Trinket ready for him. Long does not have it ready as he procced it on this wipe earlier that they had. They're doing a really good job on 40K's side to deal with all the trash and the buff at the same time.
Yeah, it looks like that 1 tick of that healing buff from the transfusion there, Atakyu just barely was able to pull off and roll out to get that blood pool, just to make sure the rest of the transfusion channel got damage into the boss. But yeah, we've seen this AoE pull from Method EU, and 40K did a pretty substantially good job as well, making sure that they didn't have any of those blood ticks from transfusion get missed. Just 1 tick went off, so pretty good from them there.
Yeah, we've also seen the 40% reaping wave proc for 40K now. So not only did they have all the trash they had to deal with on top of Priestess, but they also have the reaping wave here. We see all those grave bolts actually not getting interrupted. So a lot of damage for Eagle to heal away, especially because the transfusion also does quite a bit of damage to the whole group on a tyrannical setting. So you have the transfusion, you have Grievous as well in this dungeon, and then you have all those grave bolts going through. So a very difficult job for Eagle to heal all this damage. As you can see, 45K HPS coming out of the rest of it here.
And of course, this final transfusion cast that will go off when Priestess Atal'Dazar reaches 100 energy should finish off the boss as long as all 5 members are able to get those blood pool debuffs. They did just miss 1 tick there on Lophis, I'm pretty sure, but it should be able to finish the boss off. Well, just not quite, just 3% left, but not too bad. If they got that last tick, it should have finished the boss off. But still a pretty efficient strategy from 40K, pretty similar to what Method EU did, but I don't think Method EU got their second reaping wave before Atal'Dazar, if I'm right.
Actually, just saw Team D, the Resolute Ab buffed himself Innervate and then went into cat form to DPS. I'm not sure if Ab didn't get the memo, but the Innervate actually does not give you infinite energy regen anymore in cat form, so it's not actually a damage increase. We'll see what he was doing right there. But we see some the Reaping Wave also being proc for Team D, the 20% one though. Well, 40K already proc the 40% one. Now, of course, Rasan does have a lot more HP compared to Priestess Atal'Dazar, because Priestess Atal'Dazar does kill herself with the transfusion cast, and Rasan doesn't really have any of those mechanics that increase the damage down on the boss. So you'll have to keep that in mind when you look at the difference between those 2 teams.
Yeah, this is a pretty massive snap pull coming from 40K here. I believe they've got 4 Skyscreamers in there, plus the 4 mobs at the bottom of the stairs, plus both sword packs. So they really need to make sure their interrupts are completely coordinated on all of those Skyscreamers there. But they're able to go through it very clean once again and proc through 3rd Reaping Wave with Razan here. I'm really enjoying the efficiency of their strategy here.
Yeah, this is very well done by 40K here as they jump down, of course, snap some of the Reaping mobs on top of Rasan here. The rest of the Reaping mobs is going to arrive soon as well. Now, Rasan it actually got feared. So 2 of the members getting feared here, Ada and I believe it was Lofus who also got feared. So they didn't hide properly. Unfortunately, this is going to cost them a little bit of DPS, but nothing further is going to happen. Now, one more thing to note is that Rasan really doesn't have many difficult abilities or mechanics that you have to deal with. The only thing that you really want to avoid is the fear, of course, where you land offside, and the other thing is the fixate, which most of those teams just avoid by using Shadow Meld or using Vanish and then getting rid of it.
Yeah, we see on the side of Team D they're doing a similar pull to what Fourty K did, just a lot smaller, abusing those snap points, making sure that none of the swords can jump around. They're just stuck to the tank the entire time. So that's kind of one of the strategies we see most teams going with in this dungeon. It makes a lot of the pulls, a lot safer, especially with those swords. But they're just so far behind Fourty K right now. Not only did they get their first boss kill almost a minute and a half behind, but they're 2 reaping waves behind in trash percentage, almost 30% trash percentage behind right now.
Yeah, I just really like the strategy that Fourty K is doing, and Method you also showed earlier. Now, if you kill the Colossi or not, it doesn't really matter. I just like going left. It just seems to be really good timing for the Reaping Wave as well. And having this huge pool with Priestess, Alunsa, and the whole room, just having the Bloodlust there just seems so good. Because if you do this other route, as most of the other teams have been doing, and also Team D is showing right now, then you have to use your Bloodlust on Rasan, because until you're at Priestess, it takes so long, and you can't save your Bloodlust for this huge amount of time. So going left and just being at Priestess first, making sure you have your Bloodlust for this huge pull, and getting the efficiency out of the Bloodlust usage is just so good. So 40k just showing off a good strategy here, while Team D just proc their 40% Reaping Wave now, and they're on their way to Vol'Cal, but this time around they have to make sure they're not going to get incumbent here.
Yeah, they did mess up this exact skip earlier in this tournament in their first match against Abrakeydabra. We'll have to see if they're able to pull it off cleanly here. And it looks like they are. They have those little jitters worked out at this point. They did have that one wipe earlier where their tank fell, unfortunately, putting them pretty far behind in this dungeon. But they're able to pull off the skip here. They do have the reaping with them, but that's kind of, they didn't wipe. They're just going to have to AoE that down on top of the totem, so it's not really disastrous at all for them. 40k is about to get their second boss down, and they're going to be able to move on to Vol'Cal, but they're going to be able to do it through the center, which is what that left strategy lets you do. You don't have to really kind of skirt past any of the honor guards. You can just go through the center, which is a lot easier to do.
Yeah, one more thing that we'll have to see is if they actually are going to pull the middle trash that we have seen Method U do as well. So they were just kind of pulling the middle, making sure they snap it on top of this latch here on the side. We'll see if 40k chooses to do that as well, or if they do something else. Now first we'll see some of the snapping here, the sword packs and Sky Screamers as well, that are being pulled here on top of Rentari, with tricks of the trade from the rogues coming out as well. Now, you gotta be a little bit careful with raging here, of course, because if those mobs drop low into raging at the very same time, it's gonna be a lot of tank damage, but Rentari doing a very good job surviving here.
Yeah, and we'll have to see, like you mentioned, if they're going to pull off the same strategy that Method EU did, where they go into the middle and pull that middle trash pack, but it looks like they're doing... What is Rentari doing standing there? This is a... Okay, they're waiting for Shroud, it looks like. That was really confusing. I was wondering exactly what they're doing. It looks like they're going to skip actually everything here. And this is... No, they're just shrouding to do a really big pack here, which is kind of confusing. I'm not sure what that Shroud was really supposed to accomplish. Maybe it was to stack everything up a little bit easier there.
Okay, so Lofus actually got aggro here at the very start of the pull, did not proc the cheat death though, so he's going to be fine. Now, one thing to mention here is that usually the teams that do this pull here on the right side of the instance, they usually just see the honor guards and make sure they don't have them in the pack. But 40k only skipped one honor guard, and the other one is actually inside of this pack. So they did kill the totem off, and they have the honor guard enabled as well. This is why you see Iglu use the Tree of Life, sorry. And he's doing 60k HP, as you can see just how much damage his honor guard is doing to the tank and everyone else, on top of having Raging Blast Grievous. 62k HPS coming out of Iglu here.
Yeah, and they're going to have to pull off just the exact same skip that Team D just did with their Shadow Meld skip in this Vol'Cal boss room, but they have to do it without a Shroud, which is a little bit more difficult. They're going to have to pretty much get around the corner in Shadow Meld, but they pull it off perfectly, just one Risen Soul getting through. Oh, no, they mess it up completely. That's actually pretty disastrous. The best thing to do here would be for Adeku to go down and to get the Battle Res off on Adeku, but it doesn't look like they got it off on him there.
Yeah, this is actually going to be a huge disaster for 40k. Not only do they have a full team wipe, which costs them 25 seconds in total, but they also have to do the whole run back. And I'm not completely sure why everyone released, because it could have just been Iglu released by himself. And now he also got in combat with the Stalker, because the Stalker is actually invisible, and they stealthed past the Stalker with the Shroud earlier. So Iglu just completely forgot about it. He could have stealthed past the Stalker, but he didn't see it, so he forgot that it's even there, and he just kind of ran into it and pulled it. Now, this is a huge mistake by 40K. They were doing so well up until this point. Actually, yeah, they have the Reaping Wave as well that they Shadow Melted earlier. So they had to release all of them. They have to deal with this Reaping Wave. They can't just Shadow Melt past it anymore because the Reaping mobs, they do have True Side. So this is just going to cost them so much time.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, okay, the Colossus was cool, right? That's definitely an innovation that we haven't seen from any other team. But part of the strength of going left is you open up that center pass so you don't have to deal with any of the skip stuff over here where things can go so wrong for your team. It's just so unnecessarily dangerous. I would much rather see them do that middle pull like Method EU did. It was just such a much better strategy, but it might have just been something that they hadn't practiced yet. And that puts Team D back into this game. I mean, they're still one full Reaping Wave behind, but 40K has to wait for their Shroud or their Shadow Melts to come off cooldown because they're not going to be able to make the skip without it.
Yeah, I think Team D's ahead at this point because 40K is going to, as you can see, they're just waiting around. They can't do anything. They have to wait either for their Shadow Melt or a Shroud to come back up because what else are they going to do? There's no more track that they need because they have their route planned, right? There's nothing else they can do except waiting around here. Well, the one thing they could do is go actually around through the middle and actually no, the door is closed, so they can't do that either. So yeah, they're waiting for the Shroud is coming back up, now they're going back to Vol'Cal, but all this time while 40K is just kind of cleaning up their vibe, Team D is doing trash. They're in 79%, they're on their way to Priestess room, and we all know Priestess has a lot less HP, or just a lot of a faster boss fight than any of the other boss fights.
Yeah, and Priestess goes down a lot faster than Vol'Cal. Vol'Cal is kind of, both Priestess and Vol'Cal kind of hurt themselves a little bit, but Priestess definitely hurts themselves more. And we see Team D doing the same pull. All of the trash with Priestess here, if they can pull this off, I think they're very firmly ahead of 40K and they'll take this series 2-0. They just have to pull this off cleanly.
Yeah, most definitely. So they also don't have Bloodlust available here. I'm not sure if they're faster than they usually are. They have 20 seconds left on their Bloodlust, and this is a very dangerous pull. So this is why I said earlier that I like when teams go left first, because you just have your Bloodlust safely for this huge pull, and it's such a dangerous pull too. You see Long actually dropping very low from all this damage. All the mobs are raging, and then you have the Grievous on top of Long as well. You can see just he's not able to recover here. As App is just trying to heal up the tank, and he's just trying to cut around as they also proc their Reaping Wave here. And now he's also the Reaping section. He dies. Long goes down. They do have one Battle Rest available to them. They do have their Bloodlust ready as well. So maybe they just should proc their Bloodlust to make sure they can recover here, as all of the Grave Balls from the souls are coming through.
They should be completely fine here, actually. With two tricks of the trade, the tank shouldn't have any problem getting any aggro left on those last Risen Souls there. All they got to do is make sure they get this transfusion out cleanly, and they should be just fine and ahead. But I mean, the thing here to remember is Team D has their trash percentage pretty much done. They have to deal with that one trash mob they have left on the side next to the stairs, and one Sky Screamer with the final boss to proc that last Reaping Wave as the boss goes down. They're very firmly ahead of 40K now. They both have their Bloodlust left for the final boss as well.
Yeah, so they got the Augur here from the right side, they did this CC at the very start when they pulled the whole room. You don't want to have this Augur on top of that pull through because it's just so difficult to handle on top of everything else. So it was the CC at the start. They did bring it back in now to get the last percentage, as you mentioned. They will, of course, need a Sky Screamer as well. But this transfusion is going to kill off Priestess. That's why everyone is already running ahead. And now the only thing left between Team D and winning this whole game, best of 3, is the last boss. And they also have Bloodlust available to them, so they should be really fast at killing Yasma.
It is a tyrannical boss. It is going to take a long time. Yasma can get dangerous over time if you don't kill it quickly. Those spiders can get out of control. But because they're running the double rogue comp like pretty much every other team in the tournament, they do have both of those Cloak of Shadows clears available to them should they choose to play it completely safe. So I don't really see them wiping to Yasma at all. We're just going to have to see if they actually end up having any problems like other teams have had proccing their Reaping Wave a little bit too early. We do see on the side of 40K, Atakyu going down once again in this trash back. This is a massive trash pull that 40K is trying to pull off to try to get themselves back in this dungeon, but it just looks like it's going to be too little too late. Yasma's already pulled for Team D.
Yeah, I think Ada either got aggro here at the very start, or he got hit by the Stalker. Something happened here to Ada that he just died immediately as soon as they pulled. Thankfully, they did have a Battle Rest available, so they did get him back up. But again, Team D is on Yasma already. They popped their Bloodlust, and 40K has to deal with this trash first before they can go there. Now, 40K also has their Bloodlust available, and when you look at the deaths, they're only 5 seconds behind death-wise. So if anything happens to Team D here, and it can happen because Yasma on Tyrannical just takes a long time, even with with Bloodlust, it takes a long time. And there's things that can happen. We've seen it happen before. We've also seen things happen with the Sky Screamer, which is most likely being CC'd somewhere in the corner. If you break the CC too early, you forget to re-CC, a fear is going through, things can happen here for sure.
They did. They are able to run up to the top to Yasma's room and shadow meld off of that 5th Reaping Wave plus the trash they pulled. They did actually let a Sky Screamer get through, which is not ideal. They didn't want to have that, but they're just going to have it for the rest of the fight here. They're going to have to paralyze it off. But some of the Reaping did also get through. Somebody didn't get their shadow meld off on everything at the same time, and they're just going to have to deal with this before pulling Yasma. This is another, too many small mistakes in this dungeon from Fourty K on top of that huge mistake from them is going to cost them this series and unfortunately the tournament for them.
Yeah, it was such a clean run from them at the start. We were admiring the strategy, and unfortunately, you can see that if you're missing practice with a team and you just have a player coming out of nowhere, just not used to the strategy, maybe not used to what he has to kick, what he has to stun, when he has to use his defensives, and all of a sudden things just fall apart, and you make mistakes, and mistakes happen for everybody, especially with this little practice. And they're still doing so well. They're on the last boss here. They did proc the Bloodlust now. They did finish off the rest of the mobs that they unfortunately did not manage to reset with their Shadow Melt, but the Team D just doing a better job. They are in Yasma, they're on 27%. Now one thing to note here is that neither of those teams actually know if they're ahead or behind, because they are in land setting here. They don't have a monitor to watch where the other team is. So both of those teams are under such high pressure, especially Team D. They don't know they're ahead. They have 5 dabs. They might have 40k be on their heels, so it's a very high pressure point for Team D here.
Yeah, we are definitely going to see Team D finish off this last pack of those shadows, but they might actually just choose to kite the boss across the room because it is at 10% here. All they have to do is cleave down this final Sky Screamer with Yasma, and this is going to be Team D. Oh, they did let a shadow debuff. 2 shadow debuffs go off on the entire group. The rogues can cloak them off if they have cloak available to them, but Abs should be able to heal through this. It's going to be so close. 2% on the boss, and it does go down. Team D moving their way into the top 4 of this tournament.
Through about 80 to 90% of the trash before even the first boss, finish up most of the rest of the trash before Azeroth, and then after that it's 3 bosses in a row. But Abrakeydabra right out the get-go, same with buff 4, mass stealthing right to the center of this first boss trash area and grabbing as much as they can. We'll have to see who commits their bloodlust first.
It's going to be the same thing as we saw earlier today in this map. MOTHERLOAD, you really need to make sure you're pulling as many of these Peacekeepers as possible. We've seen as many as up to 4 or 5 Peacekeepers in this first pull. And like you mentioned, buff 4 Nerf Rogue committing their Bloodlust right away in this first pull. Abrakeydabra hasn't popped theirs yet.
Hasn't popped theirs yet, but now they have, as this, those 2 menacing Peacekeepers come in. 4 Peacekeepers here. Huge pull coming in for Abrakeydabra. A lot of dank damage coming in, a lot of splash damage on the group. They're going to need to rifle through this quickly and especially rotate a lot of their crown control on these mobs when they get low with that raging. Tank is going to get absolutely destroyed when those Peacekeepers reach sub 30. There you go, Divine Field already getting chunked down. 50% says nope, and Heroic leaps right out of there, makes sure to stay safe and not get killed by the 4 Peacekeepers that are now dealing 100% increased damage.
Yeah, we're already seeing some pretty significant changes in what these teams are pulling. Buff 4 Nerf Rogue went for a slightly smaller pull, I believe only 3 or 4 Peacekeepers, whereas Abrakeydabra actually pulled 5 Peacekeepers for the first pull with Bloodlust here as it just now runs out. All 5 of those Peacekeepers are raging, so you're not going to see Divine Field get anywhere near those. He's going to be completely gone from them this entire time.
No, and the problem is when you're doing what he's doing right now, you're kind of running around somewhat inefficiently just trying to get rid of them. But Ching BB going down, let's put that on hold for a sec, goes down. His trinket has, of course, been consumed. Battle Res immediately coming up. Not going to have that available for about 8 minutes now as they try to stabilize the rest of this pull, but the problem is threat is all over the place. Tanks just don't have AoE taunt in their arsenal these days anymore. You get 2 taunts off with that Heroic Leap reset for the Prot Warrior, and that is all she wrote for 8 seconds. So Ching BB scrambling to grab everything they can as the rest of the group helps kite things around with these Enraged Thugs from their Vape Nation Hail Vapors as well, but they do manage to finally stabilize Zyro.
Yeah, and Abrakeydabra, you can see they actually had 5% more trash percentage just from their first pull here, and they're able to pull that first Reaping Wave on top of some more trash, whereas Buff 4 Nerf Rogue didn't really get to clean up that Reaping Wave with very much, purely because of that tank death. They're just going for a lot safer strategy, and as I say that, they do another massive pull right away. Another
massive pull, and a well-placed Ring of Peace, if you noticed on the left side of the screen there for Buff 4 Nerf Rogue on the left side of their screen, of course, just making sure to separate those mech jockeys so they go to their appropriate peacekeepers so that they get maximum percentage for their trash. What I want to mention earlier, you know, the 5 peacekeepers is quite nice to see, but the problem is when the tank has to play so defensively and kite them around in circles, you have such a wide spread of these peacekeepers, and the melee just cannot get very effective cleave. You don't have multi-dot cleave class in your like Shadow Priest and what have you, so the melee are losing out a fair bit of damage between some of those targets unless you can keep them nice and grouped. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue here, 30% on the board for trash versus Abrakeydabra 35%, already 1 death on the board though.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra not slowing down at all. Another 4 Peacekeeper pull coming in from them. This is definitely going to proc their second Reaping Wave, and they're going to be able to chain that second Reaping Wave into another trash pack to proc even their third Reaping Wave. So they have a lot of efficient pulls coming up here on the side of Abrakeydabra. As long as they're able to do it clean, they should be massively ahead in this dungeon. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just now procking their second Reaping Wave, however.
Once again, Divine Field just getting the heck out of there, making sure he doesn't get gibbed by those Peacekeepers as they approach that dangerous raging, and he dips below 20% health there real quick, but he has reset his necrotic stacks, and they are having that's excellent sync on those Peacekeepers right now. Quadruple energy shield going out. That's what you want to see so the melee can take advantage of the nice cleave. Elstrad, unfortunately, getting a charge from one of the enraged Inhaled Vapor thugs on the side. Fortunately, does not finish him off as they kite the rest of these 10% of his extremely dangerous mobs down. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, 45% on the board, and is dealing with the rest of their second Reaping Wave.
Yeah, it's really important here for Abrakeydabra to kill all of these as close to each other as possible so they can all get into this second Reaping Wave. If they're able to get all 4 off, this is incredibly efficient. All 4 of them are lost souls now, so they don't have to worry about any extra Reaping Wave coming in later. That's just so good from them. And like I mentioned, this second Reaping Wave is going to be pulled into extra trash, and when that trash goes down, they're going to proc their third Reaping Wave.
Speaking of procking, Dr. J procced his cheat death there on this pull. Tranquility, of course, canceled just a bit early from Elstrad there, needing to target some of the healing onto Divine Field that now has 15-20 stacks of necrotic, starts backing away from some of this trash and cleaving down the remainder of the raw souls. Lots of damage coming in for Elstrad and Divine Field. Defensive ROP coming out of Swagfist just to make sure Divine Field can get away, and nothing refreshes those necrotic stacks as he tosses out some weapon throws for quite minimal damage from the side just to make sure he can contribute as much as possible. But Zaire, you see how much percentage you get from those peacekeepers with the mech jockeys double dipping. I mean, they just went from 38 to 55 there in one blow.
Yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game in this dungeon. We talk about it all the time. You just get so much trash percentage. You can just kind of vault ahead of the other team if your pulls are more efficient. And that's all Abrakeydabra is doing here. They just have more efficient pulls. As long as you can pull off your more efficient pulls, you're going to be ahead of the other team. And they're being even more efficient again, like we mentioned. That third Reaping Wave, pulling it into the next pack, abusing the Unholy DK's exponential AoE damage, just doing it so well.
So well, but unfortunately they let Flechettes go off, not to mention they let a Toxic Blade cast go off on top of it, so Poison parading down on the team right now, including a bit of damage, making it just a bit more difficult for Elsarat to heal the rest of the group up. Dr. J dipping quite low, he doesn't have cheat death available, Divine Field leaping all over the place, Jay goes down right now, and Divine Field's trying to get rid of his necrotic stacks as quickly as he can. Elsarat chasing him around, but he's quite low on mana. Swagfist goes down as well, splash damage left and right. Battle Res has been used on Swagfist as Dr. J is stealth and run back to the rest of the team. Elsarat almost tapped on mana right now and getting his own damage on the side. Proc from Divine Field's cheat death trinket now as they scramble to try and finish the rest of this pack before they're wiped out fully.
Toxic Blade cast did go off on the Hired Assassin, so we'll have to see if they get any of those Hail of Fletcher casts off. It is gouged, so they don't have to worry about any of that. That could have been really disastrous for them if that did go off, but it looks like they're just barely pulling this pull together. Dr. J did make it back to the group. They did have to commit their battle res, but that's just making the best of a bad scenario for them.
And that's a smart call, too. Let Jay release. He can stealth back through the trash. And if Swagfist goes down, which he did there, they have to get him up right away to finish off the rest of this trash because they were completely out of gas. Elsarat, no mana. Divine Field had already used most of his defensives and most of his cooldowns to stay alive. They were just desperately kiting in circles at that point, hoping that the trash would just get finished off, which it finally did. Not the cleanest of pulls, but they managed to pull it off. 2 deaths on the board and 73% trash. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue capitalized on this. Now 71% trash as they're already working on the next pull.
Yeah, they were able, just because of those two quick spot deaths, they were able to make their way back into the dungeon because Divine Field kind of had to kite around because Elsarat couldn't commit to doing any damage. They were able to get back into the dungeon. Just small things like that are what make the difference in this dungeon, especially this late in the tournament when these teams are so closely matched.
So closely matched indeed, and Raging coming out on Abracadabra's side with the pull that just did. Defensive Ring of Peace once again, along overlapping with an Ursul's Vortex to make sure none of the charges from the thugs that indeed have an inhaled vapor as well. So they have 100% increase from the Raging plus plus another 50% from the Inhale Vapors. Easy one-shot on somebody they would charge. So excellent play there for them as they proc their 4th Reaping and pull it directly into the coin-operated crowd pummeler.
And we're seeing both teams do pretty much the exact same team. Buff or Nerf Rogue maybe about 10 to 15 seconds behind Abrakeydabra, but the same strategy. 4th Reaping Wave into coin-operated crowd pummeler. They're going to try to get as much of this Unholy DK damage onto the boss once that damage buff is applied, and the Unholy DK is pretty much going to ascend in single target damage here.
So yeah, we do have 80% trash pulled, 80% trash, and of course the 4th Reaping pulled on top of the pummeler as well on Buffware and Nerf Rogue's side. Both teams getting their Bloodlust available in about 2 minutes here. Tomboy going down, unfortunately. Some of the struggles we saw from Tol Dagor earlier, and they don't have that battle res available for about 2 minutes. They're going to need to 4-man the rest of the boss, and I think they decided to just go ahead and reset the boss instead by running it out of the arena, finishing the 5th wave of Reaping, and letting Tomboy catch up to the group. But I don't know how he's going to get there.
He released, he's going to have to use an Invis Pod or maybe mount up, run past, and a Shadow Meld. That's just, I don't like that.
He died on the way.
He also died on the way back. This is so bad for them. They're going to have to go pick him up. Their heal's going to have to run back and battle res him. That was just, that must have been just like I don't know, like more of a nervous play. Like, I'll just release, I can make it back, guys. But he just made it worse.
Tomboy, oh no. Another tragic death for them. Now they're a bit confused. They're recollecting themselves here, making sure how do they want to approach this. Somebody's going to have to go res him. The healer's likely going to have to stealth somewhere, get him in rage, which they managed to do, but so much time lost. Fortunately, they did not commit a Bloodlust this, as it was on cooldown from earlier in the dungeon. Abrakeydabra smooth and steady now at 46% on the first boss.
Yeah, and of course we saw the main strategy for this boss that most teams use here. The first 2 bombs go immediately into the boss right away, just to kind of instantly get that 100% damage taken buff on the boss. And then once the debuff is just about to run out, you toss the 3rd bomb into the boss for the refresh and the extra damage increase up to 150% increased damage taken. So making sure you're managing that damage taken increase buff on the boss is definitely one of the things you're looking at for these teams.
Yeah, and saving up resources and of course cooldowns for that burst up to 150% damage is key. Getting that last foot bomb in to refresh the 2-stack right before it runs out for maximum uptime on net damage on the boss. Very important, as you can see. Atal'Dazar waiting, or Divinefield just at the last second shooting that foot bomb in to refresh to a 3-stack for the coin-operated crowd pummeler, moving out of those coins. Don't want those extra stacking 10% damage increase throughout the rest of the fight permanently. 8% now left on the boss. Of course, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is back in action at 68% on the boss.
Yeah, but that's 60% behind Abrakeydabra, and they do have the extra death on the board, and 60% of a boss in Tyrannical is nothing to look at. That's more than a minute behind for sure.
Yeah, that's a lot of health to chew through, and fortunately, Abrakeydabra finally managed to kill the boss. Atal'Dazar is going to need to have a drink here. He has absolutely no mana left.
Yeah, and they're kind of gearing up for this big pull that we've seen a lot of teams do here. We've seen a couple different variations. We've seen some teams do all 16% to get to 98%, of course. Here, they've done all of the trash at once just to make sure, they get all of the AoE down for that Unholy DK, and they're doing the big pull. We've seen some teams do a little bit, safer pulls with 2 pulls, but they're just going for the big AoE pull.
But also the problem here for Divinefield, he does not have his trinket available either. So once he's in rage, if they don't get kicks on some of the rock lances that go out, it could be quite detrimental for the group. Swagfizz dipping quite low. Ashine dropping his own CDs to make sure he stays alive as he dips quite low. Huge amounts of raging mobs running left and right now as Divinefield backpedals just a bit to get away from not only the explosions on the ground, but to try and buy himself some time before connecting with the raging. Excellent here from Abrakeydabra as they clean up the rest of the pull. They have 3% remaining on trash and will stealth right up to Azeroth and likely clean up that 3% towards the end of the boss or maybe right after in the R&D wing. Lots of variations they could do it here, but their focus is on the next boss.
Yeah, absolutely no errant rock lances going through for them. That's the main name of the game for that pull. If any of those raging rock lances go through on your tank is in for a bad time. But they pull it off perfectly. Similar to what we saw Method and A do the other day. However, they are on to Azeroth. They have committed their second Bloodlust to this because we have talked about how dangerous this boss is in a full melee group scenario.
Extremely front-loaded in terms of difficulty indeed, as these Earth Ragers will fixate one of the targets. And of course, being melee, you want to stay in and DPS the boss. But should they reach this increasingly stack a bleed on you, damage over time effect, not to mention the necrotic from the innate affixes present in the dungeon here. So you want to make sure to localize them as much as possible on top of Azeroth, because we see the Ursul's Vortex kiting around in a nice circle as a group so that you can cleave them efficiently and effectively on top of the boss.
Yeah, and something to look at for them is that they do have a little bit less percentage than we normally see from the team here. Most teams get to about 98% 80%, and then they'll only have to pull one of the Stone Furies, Abrakeydabra is going to have to probably pull 2 to get to that 100% trash percentage.
Yeah, and not just that, but over on Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue side, they actually committed their Bloodlust to the massive pull post the first boss, and not just that, but they didn't even pull everything they needed with it. So the Bloodlust is gone. They killed most of the trash needed, and then they went on and pulled actually more. So they did a Bloodlust, but still 2-part pull on top of it, 94% on the board. I think they might actually have enough trash in there to complete the 100% for reaping, because they pulled some extra ones on the side. But Jhin getting so low here, he does not have his Cheat Death Trinket available either. It procced while you were talking there, Zyro, and he's just struggling to get some healing in his Dr. J as well, taking a lot of damage. 4 stacks of the dot right now, procs his Cheat Death, and finally gets a Dispel on the Necrotic, not a Dispel, but finally wears off both the Necrotic and, of course, the Bleed. Fades from Dr. J after proccing that Cheat Death. So once again, another defensive use not going to have that available, and I believe Ching just went down on the side of Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue as well.
He did end up going down at the end of that pull, and I think that's really dangerous, because if I'm not mistaken, that Sapper is going to give them the rest of their 2 percentage that they need, and they're going to have to Shadow Meld. Hold that. Wrong. 99%. They're fine. They're going to get the rest of their percentage after the boss, just like we normally see most teams do. A little false flag there. We do see on the side of Abrakeydabra, though, where they're going to get the rest of their percentage from. As they pulled both of the Stone Furies, they're just going to have to pull one more after this to get to their final 100%. But they do actually end up
they actually did it right now
early. Probably for the Unholy DK on the boss. That could be another thing we see teams do.
Perhaps so. Perhaps a bit of a question mark here. Perhaps a bit premeditated from them. I'm going to go with premeditated. You don't exactly accidentally pull one of those Earth Furies from 60 yards away. So it was probably planned to help buff Ashine's damage once his cooldowns have come up on this very long tyrannical boss in the form of Azeroth here, which is now at 15%. So we should see some damage coming out of the blood. I wish. The Unholy DK in just a moment from Abrakeydabra, while we do have a Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue with just a bit of difficulty as Lazarus goes down. We were talking about how dangerous it is at the start of this boss with the bleeds from those Earth Ragers, and that's exactly what happens. They have to commit their only remaining battle res to him. Not going to have one available again for about 6 minutes, so they're really kind of walking on thin ice here.
Yeah, and the thing was, he was getting hit there, which is something you definitely don't want to get done. You have to make your healer heal through that. But not only that, the healer also had to fix it on him, so he had to be running around as well. Couldn't get any heals off onto Lazarus there. Just kind of lazy play from them there. But Abrakeydabra, I think they were the team that we first saw do the strategy we keep talking about, where they proc the 5th Reaping Wave, they mash their mount button just between the little out of combat before the Reaping Wave spawns, and then they do this Shadow Meld skip. I'm kind of curious why they changed their strategy here, because we first saw that innovation from them.
I'm just going to go ahead and assume it is because of the Unholy DK and trying to get some of that extra damage in on the last part of Azeroth, the last 20% that they had. Perfect skip coming in from them here through the R&D wing, just in front of Rixa Fluxflame, the 3rd boss of the dungeon, and they pull it right up to her. So the only 2 bosses left in the dungeon for Abrakeydabra. They've already dealt with the trash. They've dealt with the 5th Reaping Wave and straight dealt with it. They killed it. They didn't even try to skip it, and will now have to just chew through some rather large amounts of health for this tyrannical boss. A lot of chunking damage on the tank here, and the pure fire damage going out. You can't really block that. So Azeroth here, 25% HP left for Nerf War.
Yeah, we saw how low Divine Field was chunked there from that debuff. He got down to 13% there, just barely not proccing his Cheat Death Trinket, which he does have available to him, of course. But yeah, like you mentioned, this is one of those bosses where you can kind of see some of that healer cap. All of the DPS have their own individual ways to deal with that magic debuff. Rogue Cloak of Shadows, Unholy DK AMS, and the Monk can both diffuse and karma it. So they don't really have to, the healer doesn't really have to worry about the DPS that much. They do, however, have to hot the tank up like crazy. But because they only have really one target to heal, they are able to get some single target damage out. We've seen some healers like Zalia manage to pull off about 8k DPS on this boss.
It actually even goes beyond that, because you can spell reflect the chemical burn as well, so you have that available every 25 seconds. Not to mention it's a magic effect that you can dispel. So of the 2 that go out, plus all the immunities, you probably actually don't really have to do that much work, which is why we see Elsterad in cat form present so often, just trying to get that extra damage in, sitting at 5.5k DPS on the meter right now. Buff Warrior, of course, has dealt and killed Azeroth here, but still have 99% on the board. They will be finishing up their last remaining percentage needed for their 5th Reaping Wave, and then running over to Rixa themselves. They're a fair bit behind, not to mention the extra 5 deaths right now, though, Zyro.
Yeah, and I don't really think that's the most efficient thing you can pull there, a Mastermind, but they're just going to Shadow Meld it off anyways. They were just pulling that pack for the rats that they had to finish off, and they will be running through, pulling off the Shadow Meld skip, just like every other team that does this dungeon. But we have to make sure they actually pull it off. We have seen teams mess this skip up even earlier today, so it's one of those things, it's a question mark for some teams, but they do pull it off just fine.
Question mark, question mark, question mark. But no question marks here for Abrakeydabra as they get Rixa down to 20%. Only 2 deaths on the board, where that almost scary situation before the first boss leading up to the 4th Reaping Wave when they had Dr. J and Swagfist go down, but since then everything has been going just rainbows and daisies. 8% for Rixa, and they'll soon enough mount up mass stealth right up to the final boss.
Yeah, and I'd like to compare this to some of the other times these teams did. This seems like it's an incredibly fast Motherload. If I remember properly, Method and A's first boss kill, they popped their Bloodlust at about 8 minutes into the dungeon, so this should be pretty much on par with where Method and A was in their Motherload. This is an incredibly fast dungeon. Barely any mistakes outside of that one kind of hiccup like you mentioned before the first boss. This is definitely a huge confidence booster for Abrakeydabra going into their matches tomorrow if they do finish off this series.
Yeah, and coming in and just breaking the ice with their first match of the day here, looking like this is looking really nice for them. They just run right up. They make sure to go to the sides of the platform here and pop their Shadow Melds there as to not attract the unwanted attention of the lingering trash that they just ran past. Successfully doing so, they are now ready to pull the boss as Divine Field charges into action against Mogul Razdunk and prepares to get the boss as quickly as possible to that 50%. And Zyro, you and I, my friend, find ourselves in the, will Bloodlust be available for Phase 2 again? That's a 3-minute timer this time. I don't know.
Nah, 3 minutes. Nah, I'm going to go with no way. And I think every single time we've said no, we've been wrong. But I don't think there's any way we're wrong this time. There's no way Bloodlust comes up for this boss.
Usually it takes about 2 minutes on the first phase plus intermission for the good teams to get to Phase 2. So I'm going to agree with that one. And perhaps we'll see a snippet of that Bloodlust in the second phase here for Abrakeydabra once they're done with their transition. When Mogul Razdunk reaches around that 50% mark, of course, usually plus or minus 5%. Sometimes it waits a bit, sometimes it does it a bit early. Rixa Fluxflame here, 25% for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. They're now moving through everything smoothly, but there is no way they are going to beat Abrakeydabra in this dungeon. Anything short of a wipe will make sure they secure the win.
Yeah, I mean, Abrakeydabra is in a commanding position in this dungeon right now. This is kind of one of those bosses where the only way you wipe to it is if you just decide to just stand in every single mechanic and die. So they shouldn't throw this dungeon in the slightest. The only real danger is going to be in that intermission phase where they have to make sure they're soaking the shots from each of the 2 adds that spawn. And if they manage to die there, it'll be pretty impressive. This team looks so practiced in this dungeon so far.
Very practiced indeed as Divine Field pops that Spell Reflect there. Thought he was going to get hit by one of the swirlies from the Boomba bots on the side, but managed to get away from that just before it hit him. A fair bit of damage as well in this Tyrannical setting that those would deal to. Actually pretty close to a one-shot on a non-tank player there. But Mogul Razdunk finally getting ready for the phase transition here, where we will see 2 mobs pop out from the sides. Of course, these Sky Scorchers. You want to make sure to DPS them as quickly as possible so that they do not spill over into Phase 2 as the players get the drill down on these oil barrels.
Yeah, but that's the main name of the game in this phase here. You want to make sure that whenever you get targeted by the boss's smash ability, you move on to each one of the oil barrels. There are 3 of them that you have to deal with to get out of the phase. Now, of course, we mentioned the Sky Scorchers earlier. They're pretty dangerous. They do that sort of laser beam charge where if anyone stands in it, they help you split the damage going on Divine Field right there. You see, as long as people help soak, you shouldn't go down.
The old Azerite Heartseeker, indeed. Anybody hit by it will chunk in damage and also decrease healing taken by 35%. But there's no direct tank damage here, so the tank can certainly run around soaking some of them. And it looks like a bit of disaster here, unfortunately, for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue yet again as a full team wipe, almost a full team wipe. It will be a full team wipe, but they did salvage it with the battle res that have just come off cooldown, but another extremely sloppy skip on their part to get to Mogul.
Yeah, they are able to get the kind of save that you talked about there. They got the battle res onto the monk, so the monk will be able to take the res the healer, and the healer will be able to mass res the group. And, should Abrakeydabra actually have a full team wipe here, they could come back into the dungeon, but, once they got through that intermission phase, there's really no chance of them wiping to this boss.
Yeah, I mean, that's not even magic they can pull out of their hat to wipe on this boss, but you never know. And we were right, Zyro, 28 seconds still on the Bloodlust, and they're already over halfway through the second phase here, as Mogul Razdunk rapidly declining in HP here, 17% left as he starts one last Gatling gun. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue finally getting back on their feet, but they're really going to have to regroup for this next map.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have to, take this loss pretty well. They played decently well, just too many mistakes overall. Outside of those mistakes, the strategy was fine. I don't think they, were necessarily doing anything wrong. And unfortunately, the Bloodlust did come off cooldown. We were wrong once again.
No, we weren't wrong. We said that Bloodlust would not be available for the start of Phase 2, and it was not. It was available in the last 3%. And a smile of relief there from Abrakeydabra, and Jay looking happy as always.
Where Buff War, Nerf Rogue, Rogue is facing elimination here on the Freehold.
So right past the trash at the start, we see Abrakeydabra go. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue aggressively pulling the 9-pack at the start here. Keep in mind, we are in Sanguine, so you're going to see a fair bit of backpedaling and a manipulation of the mobs when they're reaching low HP in the form of Ring of Peace, Typhoon, what have you, to make sure the mobs aren't sitting in the Sanguini Panini and getting a lot of that healing off is just super inefficient.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if any of these teams are able to adapt the strategy from Method and A that we saw the other day, where their healer was actually standing on top of a close object so that their tank didn't get thrown anywhere at all. It doesn't look like Abrakeydabra is doing that here, but they're still getting the pull down pretty efficiently. They have to make sure that they're making sure not to kill everything too quickly, because they do have both Bursting and Sanguine here.
Bursting and Sanguine, and it was just a bit too much for Dr. J, as he did actually proc his cheat death right there, and finally Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue just finishes off the rest of that pack at 14% right now. But a big, bold pull here from Abrakeydabra will see them actually getting their first Reaping Wave, as we typically see from a lot of the Western teams with their first pull here, and they will grab that first Reaping Wave straight into Sky Captain Craig, the first boss. Now, sorry, Sky Captain Craig and of course Eudora, which we know is not present in the dungeon, are very, very perilous, usually on Tyrannical, but not so much in this fortified setting.
Yeah, the fortified setting is definitely something that takes a lot of the danger out of this dungeon. None of the trash is really too dangerous in terms of mob mechanics. When you think of Freehold, like you mentioned, the shots from Sky Captain Craig, the shots from Eudora, those are the things you look at in this dungeon and think, well, that's the dangerous part. We even saw Elsarat committing his Tree of Life to that first pull just to heal through those bursting stacks. They didn't really have to stop too many times there in that first pull. Just playing to the affixes of the dungeon, not only the mechanics of the dungeon, but playing the affixes perfectly is what you need to do to go far in this tournament.
Far in the tournament indeed. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue now about to grab their Reaping Wave and join Abrakeydabra on top of Sky Captain Craig, who has entered his second phase, does so at 75%, dismounts the Parrot, which will then rain Guano down on the rest of the group, and of course charge across the middle of the arena. Should you get bumped out of the arena when you're too close to the edge, it will actually reset the boss. So the tanks and the melee have to make sure to not only position themselves in a very well to avoid that charge, but also to not get clipped by that fire frontal.
Yeah, and you can see this the sort of like strategy coming out here. Abrakeydabra got all their trash done on one pull. They were able to get it down cleanly, and that put them a full 40% ahead on this fortified boss here. So they're definitely, I mean, almost a minute ahead this early on in the dungeon. I think, you know, if we're comparing them to some other teams, I believe the fastest time we've seen so far in Freehold to get Sky Captain Craig down was 3 minutes flat from Method and A in one of their dungeons. So we'll have to kind of see going forward how they compare to Method and A.
Pretty competitive here. If that is the case, they have 20 seconds to match that time. Sky Captain Craig at 23%, so they're going to be just shy of that probably. I don't see them doing more than 1% damage per second on this fortified boss, but dropping rapidly indeed, as Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue not too far behind. Sky Captain Craig here at 55%, but we see in this, I don't want to say issue, but certainly pace a lot that has been causing issues for these teams in this dungeon, Zyro. And I remember commenting with you just a few series ago, you know, we keep saying, oh yeah, they're certainly going to do these two pulls together, and then they don't. They seem to be splitting what should be these obvious one big pull together. They keep splitting into two, and it's just so slow for some of the teams.
Yeah, one of the things I really want to point out here that we haven't really talked about at all is that Tomboy is back on the Rogue here, which is you know, when I was talking about this earlier, when Jack asked the question about what they're planning on doing in this dungeon, playing the Rogue instead of the Unholy DK in this fortified dungeon here, where you're planning on pulling Reaping Packs on top of bosses here, abusing the Unholy DK damage, you're kind of just hoping the other team messes up with our Unholy DK AoE, hoping they mess up their bursting stacks, because the Rogue is just inferior in terms of overall damage to the Unholy DK.
Inferior, but fortunately did save them a death there, as Tomboy, as you were just speaking, proc the cheat death there with an unfortunate combo of poo-poo on top of the fire frontal, which can easily give a player, even in this fortified environment. So we won't have that available for those 6 minutes. Abrakeydabra Elsarat has already run over to the Ring of Booty, making sure to start the Squeeze the Hog event nice and early so that it'll be ready for them when they get there, likely after the Council of Captains. In the meantime, of course, Divine Field and the 3 fellow DPS are getting some of the trash down while Elsarat gets back. Nothing too crazy though. I mean, there's no healer there and it's bursting, so they only dealt with the neutral packs on the side of the Council of Captains.
Yeah, actually, we saw that once again. We saw that earlier this tournament. Same thing from JB, where JB went and started the trash pack, but they're doing a massive AoE pull right away. Same thing that Method and A did. Huge triple pull. This will proc their second Reaping Wave if they're able to pull it off, and hopefully I'd like to see them pull it into the boss.
Excellent CC there on the Buccaneer on the side that was doing his whirlwind, making sure to interrupt that and then grip him into the group. A lot of damage coming in on Divine Field right now as he starts backpedaling, making sure Ring of Peace was a bit early there because I guess a couple of the Sanguine drop, but Ring of Peace does bump them out of the Sanguine, moment as we see the backpedaling coming in from Divine Field, making sure that none of the mobs are just bathing in any of that panini on the ground. Of course, they have to as well make sure that they don't DPS Brain Zyre. We don't want too many of those bursting stacks rolling over.
Yeah, and they're doing a really good job of it right now. Just a 2-stack just fell off just now. They're playing incredibly safe with the bursting stacks. And I think this goes back to the last MDI we had last year. Divine Field has always been a master of just kind of manipulating these mobs, kiting around. I remember watching last year's MDI. I'm pretty sure he was the best tank, the blood DK tank we had last year, at just being very methodical and slow with the way he backpedaled around, making sure he's kiting the mobs perfectly.
Yeah, certainly excellent movement from him there, and they're not even waiting for the bursting to drop right now as they take the second reaping right on top of the Council of Captains. We have Rawl and Jolly active here for both teams. Eudora, the most dangerous one, not going to be a presence, so it's really going to be about not only getting out of those barrel smashes and, of course, reabsorbing the saber from Jolly, but all about the play with the brews that come down from the side, making sure you, not the bosses, are the ones getting the haste and the crit, and, of course, popping the bosses as much as possible into those bad brews that provide a damage over time nature effect.
And you can see, once again, we talk about it every single time it's featured in these dungeons, the power of the Unholy DK when you pull Reaping Trash on top of bosses or on top of trash. Instantly, 25% of both bosses' health deleted. 250k burst from the Unholy DK. This class is just so strong when you're able to manipulate trash mobs like that.
And another bad brew going down right on top of Jolly, so Divine Field's life made very easy there, not needing to position the bosses too much. Of course, Rawl very immobile, largely immobile through a lot of the fight just because he sits there barrel smashing, so you can't really control every single time to get him in a bad barrel or get him out of a good not barrel. So, but they're doing what they can, and they're at 44% trash right now, and about 2/3 of the boss has been killed for Abrakeydabra. Buffware and Nerf Rogue has pulled the boss as well, has 38% trash on the board. I think they still have a bit more trash in there. We'll just see in a moment as the camera turns. Indeed, there is. So they'll be proccing their second reaping during the boss fight.
Yeah, there's definitely room for them to catch up here. As long there's a little bit of RNG to this boss, right? If they get a lot of those bad brews and they're able to kite both of the captains into the bad brews, they can make up a lot of ground here. But it's down kind of to RNG. They have just now procced their second reaping wave, so we're going to have to see how they're able to deal that with the boss here.
That was also really scary because the last two mobs that died dropped Sanguine, and they just barely got the bosses out. No barrel smash and Sanguine, so that could actually have been really disastrous for Buffware and Nerf Rogue, but well done by them to make sure that doesn't happen. The barrel smash, unfortunately, popping Loda out to the side of the map there, and they does get the blade spawn out there, so it'll be a fair bit before it is reabsorbed into Captain Jolly. They're really not that far behind. Abrakeydabra, though, because they had spawned the piggy earlier, were able to just stack up on that hog and make sure that they grab it right away.
Yeah, I don't know where Divine was taking that hog. That's not where it's supposed to go at all. But we see this same pull again right here. This is going to proc their third reaping wave. This is a massive double pull. But the thing about the Unholy DK, it makes these big AoE pulls that much more safe because you have such a massive amount of burst early on that takes all of the mobs low. Once you get to that point, you're able to kind of pick and choose which mobs you want to kill, and that lets you control your bursting.
Divine Field already gets out of there before the mobs die. They will slowly trail him and drop the rest of that Sanguine on the way. So well moved by him yet again. 47% on the board for Abrakeydabra. Not far behind though. Buffware and Nerf Rogue actually killed that boss extremely fast. The Council of Captains, really well done by them, doing their own large, substantial pull here, trying to get that 60% going. Ring of Peace bumping the mobs out in every which direction. Not really the best Ring of Peace in the world. It popped the mobs in a 360 degree direction. So they were all over the place. The melee don't have access to them when you do that kind of thing, so you lose a fair bit of damage on the mobs. You want to bump them in a unified direction. Nonetheless, 45% for Buffware, Nerf Rogue, and Abrakeydabra about to proc their third reaping wave.
Yeah, once this one last mob goes down, they will proc the third reaping wave, I do believe, so we'll have to see what they plan on doing that. Probably pull that into Ludwig von Tortolan and AoE it down with Unholy DK. Once again, just making sure they're abusing the Unholy DK mechanics. But like you mentioned, Buffware, Nerf Rogue, they made up some ground from the first boss. You can see there on the meters, on the timers there, rather. They were 1 minute behind on the boss kill, and they improved to about 30-35 seconds behind on the second boss kill.
It's looking good, and of course, Lightning the Piggy is in here again, and they're grabbing it. Excellent done by them. They did mass stealth in, grab it right away. 53%. They're going to have to wait for that RP or role-playing event to happen for Ludwig von Tortolan to come down. Takes about 15-20 seconds. Doing a bit of a pull on the side. They want to combine their third reaping with Ludwig, as Abrakeydabra is still at 58% right now. We thought they needed net and else with that Etten there, but apparently they that's all she wrote. They're not going to combine the reaping wave with Ludwig. They're actually going to proc it on top of Ludwig because he has a substantially large amount of health over the rest of the mobs coming in. So they're going to proc their third Reaping with their surrounding trash and then use it to cleave on top of Ludwig, probably playing once again around Outshine CDs.
Yeah, this is kind of a double dipping on the Unholy DK, right? They're going to get the initial AoE from this trash, and then they'll also get the Reaping AoE from this trash. And it wouldn't even surprise me if they go on afterwards to pull even more trash to proc their 80% Reaping wave on top of Trothak even afterwards. So once again, we can mention so many times, when you have an Unholy DK in your group, playing around the Unholy DK's strengths is what you're planning on doing, and they're doing it to a T right now.
Excellent ROP there to get out of that Sanguini once again for Buffalo and Nerf Rogue. They proc their third Reaping as well, and Ludwig is actually at half health, the same health as Abrakeydabra. This is really close, actually, between the two teams right now, Zara. They're very neck and neck here as the third Reaping wave rains down on Buffalo and Nerf Rogue, but Ching BB getting down to 8%, barely hangs on as Loda pumps a bit of healing into him, and here comes the Reaping wave. Has to get make sure to get those dispels off every 8 seconds as often as possible before too much damage crowds over. With the amount of damage that comes out of Ludwig von Tortolan in this fortified affix, the tank can actually drop very quickly, as we just saw.
Yeah, a little bit of weird miscommunication there. They had Ursul's Vortex down on the mob, and Ashen tried to grip it in, but, got gripped right back into the Vortex there. But, I mean, I hope they don't have any of that planned to be used later on, but that was just kind of like miscommunication. They might not quite be on the same page there. It's a little weird to see from them.
Buffalo and Nerf Rogue finishes Ludwig first, actually, and they start their RP for Trothak, the Shark Puncher. First, here they are. They're not stopping, though. They're getting ready for a double pull on the side here. 8-mob pull with some of the neutrals on the side. Neutrals will die early and get some of those bursting stacks out of the way nice and quick. Ching BB, when he dipped that low, we did not see, but actually did proc his cheat death trinket.
Yeah, and Abrakeydabra is just sitting here waiting for the pat to come. They're just wasting time waiting for this patrol. They could have gone and pulled it. It would have been less efficient in terms of, like, grouping all the mobs up, but sitting there doing nothing is kind of weird. Then not only do they pull the two trash packs, though, they actually pull stuff from the top as well. So it kind of makes sense that they were waiting. They had to make sure they got everything stacked up there.
And you can see how dangerous Ludwig von Tortolan is for the two tanks. Neither of them have their cheat death trinket available. It had procced in that previous bout of trash along with Ludwig. A lot of bursting damage coming down over on Buff Warside, as they kite around, making sure none of the Sanguine is in the middle of the arena, so they have maximum area to kite when they start with Trothak for those sharks in the middle area. Abrakeydabra finishes off the rest of it, and Elsrat is dealing with his Tree of Life. Finally procs the fourth Reaping wave. Everything dies nice and quick here. Bloodlust still has not been popped as they combine their fourth Reaping wave on top of Trothak, once again grabbing the lead over Buffware and Nerf Rogue, who again is just doing something that should have been done in one pull in two, and it's just so slow.
And not only was it slow, it was inefficient as well. They had a really bad Ring of Peace, once again knocking one of those scrappers into the Sanguine pool, and it sat there recasting Blind Rage over and over again. It healed about 40%, and you can't be single targeting a mob in these speedrun dungeons. That's just so bad from them. It can't have these misplaced Ring of Pieces.
You just can't. You just can't do that. Abrakeydabra did commit indeed their Bloodlust to Trothak here halfway through that. So 20 seconds left on the Bloodlust for Abrakeydabra, 64% on Trothak, and 82% on Trash is their current status, as Buffware and Nerf Rogue has started on Trothak as well, freshly so, 95% on the boss and 79% on Trash. Has not yet procced their fourth Reaping Wave. I expect they're going to pull something in during this boss in order to tip themselves over the 80% threshold and start cleaving down on top of the boss. But once again, inefficiency with Trash is spelled a disaster here for Buffware and Nerf Rogue, as it allowed Abrakeydabra to once again pull ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really impressive with how many little inefficiencies they've had in this dungeon that they're still this close behind Abrakeydabra. They might actually have had a better strategy if they were able to pull off some bigger pulls, just judging by how close they are behind. But Abrakeedabra's execution has just been purely better the entire dungeon. It has indeed, as another Shark Tornado comes in from Trothak right now, runs over, grabs one of the Shark, and heads back over to smack Divine Field in the face. And the Lost Soul of Ludwig still chasing the group around. You can see those Shadow Smashes still going down. So a bit of area denial popping every once in a while, a bit of irritation, but nothing that the team can handle right now. And they've just passed the 50% mark here for Buffware and Nerf Rogue. Still no pull on any of the Trash to proc the fourth Reaping Wave, which leads me to believe that they're going to combine it either with Harlan Sweet somehow, or just Shadow Meld it off in some flurry of AoE damage later. We'll have to see what they do, but they're running out of time to effectively cleave it on top of Trothak. There's just, they have to make up the time left in the dungeon. I just don't think there's enough dungeon left for them to make up the time they're behind. They have so much left to do. This fourth Reaping Wave, they're going to have to find a way to Shadow Meld it off, like you mentioned, before they get to Harlan Sweet. And even if they manage to pull that off, Abrakeedabra's already on their way. They're already off. They're about to start Harlan Sweet probably 30, 40 seconds before them.
Yeah, I mean, this is quite detrimental, and if they have a good strategy with the Cannonball Barrage that comes down on Harlan's Suite, then it's going to be all she wrote for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. But they're not done just yet, as Abrakeydabra runs over to the bridge, pops a Shadow Meld with the trash that they skipped that was guarding the entrance of the bridge to Harlan's Suite, the final boss of the dungeon, and they make their way up, getting ready with Dr. J's AoE stealth. Here it is, and they move right past that sapped Stormcaller to move right up to Harlan's Suite's platform.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of different strategies from teams in Freehold on what they do for their final trash percentage. Usually they'll use some form of the Cannonball Barrage from Harlan's Suite to finish off this trash, and they're just going off and doing it right on the pole here with Ashine. The really important thing to look out for here is that Sanguine dropping. They really want to make sure that they actually kill the mobs whenever Harlan's Suite is not casting any of his abilities, because if the Harlan Suite is casting when the Sanguine goes down, he will not move, he will be in the Sanguine, and he'll heal to full probably.
That would be an absolute nightmare, the scariest horror movie you can imagine on top of this boss right now. Here comes the Cannonball Barrage right now. Divine Field, of course, getting tossed left and right from those shattering throws from the Enforcers. Gets pumped backwards from that slicing wind, but they do manage to kill a bunch of the trash and then get right back in the corner. Everybody's staying nice and close. Elster at 2% right now, manages to hang on in tree form and heal himself up. There's brutal fist going out from the Enforcers in every which direction. Everybody's trying to stay nice and stacked up to make sure that Divine Field does not get thrown too far. Sanguine finally going down on the ground again, and the two Enforcers will be finished off, kind of compiling the last of the area denial before they keep working on Harlan.
Yeah, now they have the entire platform available to them, minus the entrance of the room due to that patrol that goes by, the officer patrol. They're probably planning at some point here, maybe after 60%, whenever Harlan starts targeting everyone with all of his abilities, to once again Cannonball Barrage some of these mobs down. Of course, they might not want to proc their 5th Reaping Wave during the boss. It's definitely a little bit dangerous, and they don't need to deal with that 5th Reaping Wave here at all. They can just kill Harlan Suite first. So we're just going to have to see what they plan on doing for their final trash count.
What they plan, indeed. And I mean, Elster had a couple of close calls there. Not only the 2%, but afterwards an 18% dip as well. But everything should be quite stable here for them until they decide to use the Quadruple Cannon Barrage for that trash, if they decide to do that. But once again, they don't know where the other team is, so they're going to have to play it quick. Buff Warrior and Nerf Rogue just about to hit phase 2 on their Harlan Suite pull.
They do also have both the Ravager packs available to them. That's probably the safer play in terms of reaping. So we're going to have, I mean, I feel like in this tournament, if you're planning on playing safe, that's not the call. They are only 20% behind on Harlan Suite. It's actually a little bit more than that because the last 30% they do double damage to the boss. But Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue is close, and they have the Bloodlust popped.
Yeah, they just popped their Bloodlust right now, but I don't think it's going to be enough. Here comes the dangerous pull that we just saw Abrakeydabra do. Chingbibi immediately popping Shield Wall as soon as they go in, having that benefit of 40% damage reduction as they make sure to rain down the cannonballs on top of the ads right now. But some of them are stationary. You want to make sure that the Sanguine is not healing Harlan Suite at all. Lazarus goes down, immediate battle res comes up right on, and 13 seconds left on Bloodlust as a lot of the mobs are low, and Ching is doing his best to back up and get out of the Sanguine, but he gets tossed by a shattering throw, proccing his cheat death trinket and goes down to the damage. Battle res comes up immediately. Lazarus goes down, no battle res available, and this is an absolute disaster for Buff Warrior right now as Abrakeydabra finishes the dungeon and claims victory 2-0. A bunch of them have struggled before, but we're actually not in the Motherlode, Jack. You have debated us. We are in the Shrine of the Storm right now, and now immediately running down the stairs as we see teams typically do mass pull coming in here, and they will try to group up and snap all of these casters together on top of these Brazier. Excellent done here by Method EU. Bloodlust has been popped here from both sides. Exactly mirror strategy starting out for both.
Yeah, we've actually seen this exact same thing from Team D before and from Fourty K, and both those teams pulled this strategy off perfectly. Now we see Method U and Method NA both tanks just kiting backwards. You see now and Nerf just going back up the stairs to make sure the casters are outranging them, so they have to follow them so they don't actually keep casting all the time, because these water blasts just do so much damage, and at some point you run out of interest.
You're going to run out of interest, but you can see both tanks, what they do is they dip in bit by bit once in a while. By doing so, they actually get the mobs to recast again, and before that Water Blast cast finishes, they back off, and the mob cancels its cast because their current target is out of range. A lot of bursting damage coming in here for Method EU. No problem for Zaylia, though. Group nice and healthy, back above 70%. Method NA already done here as they mass stealth yet again downwards, getting ready. Actually, I thought they were ready to go to the boss, but they're grabbing a couple more. They're actually in combat with a critter on the side. Okay, so they decide to off a critter and make sure that doesn't bother them later. MOTHERLOAD looking like they're trying to proc their first reaping pole upstairs here with the casters, Nagura.
Yeah, interesting strategy here for MOTHERLOAD. They're actually doing two different kind of pulls here. They did not get 15% from the first pull like MOTHERLOAD did. They only got 13, and now they're doing a second pull where they don't not only pull the Spiritualist from the top, but they also pull some more trash from the bottom. Now, what this will make happen for them is later on they can do some trash, or they can skip some trash that MOTHERLOAD has to play later on. So we'll see how the strategy turns out for MOTHERLOAD later on, but MOTHERLOAD already procced their 20% Reaping Wave. They did shadow melt as much as possible off, and the rest of the mobs are getting dragged on top of this first boss here.
Yoda dipping to 5% here for MOTHERLOAD as they get started with that first Reaping Wave on Accuseer, arguably the best designed dungeon boss in the entirety of the BFA dungeons. Accuseer are now down to 90% as MOTHERLOAD rushes down into action and gets ready to shadow meld off, I believe, the entirety of the Reaping Wave as well, so they don't want to deal with that on top of the boss, but MOTHERLOAD looking really strong here already.
Yeah, so MOTHERLOAD did get the Reaping Wave on top, and then they walked down, and now they have this additional trash that MOTHERLOAD already killed or is killing right now while they're fighting the first boss, and now MOTHERLOAD will pull it on top of the boss as well. Now, both of those teams used to let us earlier, so this kind of pull where they pull the trash on top of the boss is very dangerous, and we've seen Fourty K struggle to this exact same thing earlier, where we saw the tank go down, and then the battle rest came back up, but some a damage dealer died while this whole thing was happening, so definitely a very difficult pull because there's just so many casters, so much damage on the tank, and then of course it's 45 too, so if there's any cast going through, it's just so much damage.
This is super duper scary indeed for both sides. I mean, even those Mending Rapids getting off, I mean, you're just a huge amount of trouble. Everything just gets healed up immensely, so every single kick has to be absolutely on point, every defensive play for not only the tanks, but the melee included as well. MOTHERLOAD down to 73% on Accuseer here, as MOTHERLOAD has already transitioned into the transition phase itself, where the three Aqualinks have split into the equilateral triangle across the circular platform, making sure that they cast the exact same abilities as the boss. Surge Rush is of course the most dangerous ability. Team does very well to avoid it and not get knocked off the platform Nagura style here.
Wow, I've never fallen off this platform before in my life. So MOTHERLOAD actually are in the second phase already. Actually, no, they have to kill the last Aqualink to get into the second phase, while MOTHERLOAD is still in the first phase. So MOTHERLOAD slightly behind when it comes to boss HP, but if you look at the trash percentage, they are ahead in trash, and they also still have more apprentices that they're fighting currently. So once those will go down, they will be quite significantly ahead in trash percentage. So that's the difference in boss HP that you can see between those two teams here.
Yeah, certainly MOTHERLOAD will have to make up some of this percentage elsewhere, but they as well have some initiatives that they've down here, getting that 30%, and Accuseer now down in the single digits of percent, 8% left to go there. MOTHERLOAD chewing through the rest of these Aqualings, making sure to dodge the Surging Rush, and a most fortunate rush there. They actually have them within cleave range, the remaining two of each other, so nice efficiency there for MOTHERLOAD, and a bit of luck on their side as well, as MOTHERLOAD has finished the boss first, understandably so, because they have done a bit less of the trash and are skipping past the Heldis, of course, the mini boss.
Yeah, so MOTHERLOAD, since they only have 29% trash at this point, they will have to do all of the trash here that is available to them in this area before the mini boss. And once they kill all of this pull off that they have gathered here, then they will proc their 40% Reaping Wave, and they can do the Shadow Meld skip. But we actually saw them all drop very low because of the bursting. So you definitely want to be very careful when it comes to bursting, especially in Shrine, because Shrine has a lot of low HP mobs that apply bursting to you. So you want to be careful to not roll the bursting and not make the job of the healer very difficult.
Yeah, it's going to be quite scary as well before the second boss, the council boss, where there's about 20 of those initiates too, so they're going to have to very well control the bursting there. Now, Volcanic in this dungeon, really a non-factor, but you can get clipped by it if you're not paying attention or in a tight camera spot like this hallway. Excellent view from the observers here from the top of the hallway, so we can see all of the action and understand exactly how the players are moving and where they are moving to. MOTHERLOAD about to proc their second Reaping Wave in just a moment. I expect by doing so, they will actually run and use it to skip the bridge as well and do the coveted but very dangerous skip. Quite the chokehold and bottleneck on some team strategies. Here they go, now runs in and pulls the elemental to the side. Defensive Ring of Peace goes down to make sure that the mobs on either side cannot get in. Now immediately leaps in. Everybody shadow melds off. A perfect skip from the team right now as they hide in the corner.
Yeah, so Method U actually caught up quite a bit here because they didn't have to do as much trash on this pull as Method NA because they just had more percentage from the pulls earlier. So Method U were faster with the 40% Reaping Wave proc. They walked through, they pulled the whole area here with all the apprentices. And now this is actually a very difficult pull because there's lots of cast that needs to be interrupted. There's lots of tank damage, as you can see now, drop very low here. And then there's also those tornadoes that you can see spawn that do so much damage if you get hit by them.
Yeah, the Tempests are certainly very dangerous, and you have a really limited amount of kicks here. You have 4 kicks across the group. Of course, Zayla can't contribute to that. He's already busy healing. You have some form of crowd control, of course. Shockwaves, leg sweeps. You see one go down on Method EU side right there as they finish up the rest of the trash, well controlling their bursting stacks here. A 6-stack, but should be no problem for Zayla to heal up the rest of that as they prepare to pull this mass amount of initiates, probably bit by bit, but they don't actually. They have debated me, and they're indeed mass stealthing right up to Galecaller Faye and, of course, Brother Ironhull.
Yeah, this is exactly what I've been talking about earlier when we saw the other shrine being played by 40K and Team D, that this is what Method U does whenever there's a bursting affix, is they just use their shroud, get just shroud past initiates, because the initiates, yeah, they give count and they have low HP, but when it's bursting, you can't pull them all and kill them at the same time. You have to kill them one by one, or you have to stop DPS and wait until the bursting disappeared and then keep going. So it's just very inefficient to pull them. So Method U just chooses to have the shroud, go past them and just pull something else later on. And I really like the strategy out of both of those teams here.
Yeah, completely mirrored play here from both sides, from both EU and NA counterpart alike, pulling 8 of those initiates on top of the boss here. Brother Ironhull 77% and Galecaller Faye 40% for Method EU. They're trying as best as they can to constantly stay in the swiftness rune from Galecaller Faye. That increases movement speed, but haste as well by 25% increase, which just gives a tremendous DPS boost, as you can see, on purpose letting some of these slicing blasts go through so that they don't spawn too many tornadoes on the platform once Galecaller Faye, we do know, is buffed, and you interrupt her with that buff up, she will spawn tornadoes around the platform, so it should be no problem for them. They can dip into the rune from Brother Ironhull and get rid of that debuff.
Yeah, so the only difference between those two teams right now is the 1% trash difference. Method NA 54%, while Method U is on 55%. So this might not look like a lot of difference, but it might mean a lot later, because if you have to pull a whole extra pack or you have to do one extra mob, it's going to cost you a lot of time. It depends what Method NA has to pull to make up for this missing percentage here. But both of those teams, once Galecaller Faye is dead, like it is soon for both teams, then they can pull one extra Enforcer on top, which we've seen from other teams before, where the healer just runs off, pulls the patrolling Enforcer, and just kills it with Brother Ironhull, because it doesn't really do anything anymore.
We actually see some apprentices pulled here from Method NA as well, the ones that patrol up the bridge, and they're also pulling some initiates extra on top of it, so that should answer your question, Nagura, of where they're getting the extra trash percent. Scary indeed, but once Brother Ironhull is the only one alive, the boss really isn't too dangerous.
Bursting.
They just have to be careful of the bursting. There should be a 4-stack immediately from the initiates, which should fall off, and then easily they can deal with the rest of the pull here.
Yeah, it's 16.
I was talking about Method
okay.
NA on this side. Method EU deals well with their stacks and downs the rest of the initiates as well. 57% on the board for Method EU. Here comes the rest of the pull for Method NA right now. Nerf Clap taking a fair bit of damage, and they're going to deal with their round of big bursting.
Okay, so once they get the bursting, they need to make it into the zone very quickly, as you can see Nerf just leaping into there, because without this zone, they're definitely going to die if they don't have an immunity. So anyone who's not a rogue will die to those stacks. So very well done by both those teams, making use of the boss mechanic. Yoda actually proccing his cheat death here, but thankfully he is a rogue and he did not die. Nerf Club also dropping very low. They have to be careful here once they finish off this this boss fight here. But they've managed to survive, everyone. Now Method EU proc to 60% Reaping, and Method NA still has to deal with this last Enforcer because it got pulled a little bit late.
Yeah, they're doing quite mirror strategies here, but indeed the Enforcer is taking just way too long for Method NA to go down. Finally it does so. They pop their swiftness potions, and they're going to hurry along to the bridge as quickly as possible, shadow melding not only all the trash they pull on the way, but of course the third round of Reaping as well. Nerf Clap getting that intimidating shout at the very end there, making sure none of the mobs follow them. There's the shadow meld that we were expecting as they mount up and get ready for the bridge. Pretty substantial pull coming in here for Method EU as well. One Tormented Soul leaked on the side there. Should be no big deal for them, as somebody will hopefully get an interrupt on it soon so that they can bring it into the pack and effectively cleave it down. Mental assaults going off left and right as the group makes sure not to get hit by that 5-second stun frontal.
Yeah, Method U actually pulled one of the bridge packs on top of the tentacles, and it's just it was very efficient by them. They just got to 60% right after the boss was dying. So they just mounted up. They did just skip straight away with the Shadow Melt. And we actually have one death on Method and ASAP because Yoda just did not have the cheat death available anymore because it procced in the boss fight before. So there's one death. Is actually, I mean, they do have a battle rest to get him back up, but this match is so close between those two teams. So the 5 seconds might actually matter.
Yeah, it will matter a lot between them right now. Nerf Clap getting a ton of damage and Rip Mines going off, decreasing his max HP by 10% as well, including a huge amount of shadow damage as well. JB taking a huge hit as well. Nerf Clap has dipped and lost his trinket. JB goes down and Nerf Clap follows suit. They're trying to finish off the rest of the trash without the tank and healer alive, but Shakib cannot hang on long enough. Yoda goes down. Shakib has procced his cheat death, and it looks like it's going to be a full team wipe here for Method and A. Absolutely disastrous. They don't have their checkpoint available either, so they will have to start from the beginning of the dungeon and get back up, while Method EU has already finished the bridge trash and is going on to the next room, proccing the RP on the third boss, Lord Stormsong.
This is such a disaster for Method and A. We've talked about this over and over and over. Shrine is one dungeon where you just cannot make a mistake like that. If you have a team wipe coming in, if you have your healer down and no rest available, then you need to have your whole team released. You have to re-kill all this reaping that you skip, because there's not a single reaping wave that the teams actually kill. They all skip them with Shadow Melt. So all those reaping waves that the Shadow Melt, they have to re-kill them just because this is going to take them so long to come back. Method EU, it's all eyes on them at this point. They have 81% trash. They are in Lord Stormsong, so the only thing left between them and winning this first map is going to be the 2 bosses and the trash percentage that they're going to get in the last boss room.
Yeah, I mean, there's frankly no way Method and A is catching up short of a wipe on Method EU. And even if Method EU wipes after Lord Stormsong, once Lord Stormsong dies, and there's no way they're going to wipe on it, it's a fortified boss right now, it will get the checkpoint at that point, so they're not going to be warped all the way to the beginning of the dungeon and have the issue that Nagura mentioned of needing to deal with all the backlogged trash from the reaping. Lighty goes down again on Method and A, and this is just absolutely disaster from them. They're trying to claw back up right now, but aren't able to do so. Azalea actually dips quite low from one of the rip mines from Lord Stormsong, but manages to stabilize and dispel himself, getting as much damage in and just letting his healing over time get him back to max HP.
It actually could have been a disaster for Method EU too, because again, if Zalia dies, they cannot rest him. There's no battle rest available to them because Druid, of course, the only class in their composition that can use that battle rest. So Zalia definitely needs to be careful to not go down here. We all know Zalia is one of those players who wants to min-max DPS as much as possible, but of course, if he just stays alive, they're gonna win. And if they don't have any wipes anymore, no matter how fast they are going to win. But that's something they don't know. They don't know that Method and A wiped, right? So they're just going to play as always. They're not going to adapt anything. And it's also something they told us, that even when they were playing on online tournaments, when they had the ability to watch other teams play, they wouldn't do so. They would not adjust their strategies depending if they were ahead or behind. They would just always play their strategy no matter what.
Yeah, Method EU is just always playing their own game. They don't care what anybody else is doing. They just want to make sure they're doing it best. They actually jump in the water there a bit too early. Lord Stormsong's water is actually incredibly dangerous, dealing a huge amount of damage. Zalia, unfortunately, embarrassingly so, getting hit by one of the jellyfish that stuns you for 8 seconds. No immunity will get you out of that. So a bit of time lost there, but fortunately makes up for it by the fact that he has that horribly ugly aquatic form for the Druid, and he still gets ahead of the group there too. But what I was mentioning is that the water is actually quite dangerous. You need to wait a few seconds after you kill Lord Stormsong to go in the water, else you will pulse a lot of damage, which just completely unnecessarily procced Fragnance's cheat death there.
Yeah, so no cheat death available for Fragment. We see now actually pull some of those mobs. I'm not sure if it was intentional, because Zalia actually did use the stealth to make sure he goes past there. But now that's an aggro from those eels. And as we talked about this earlier, those eels actually do not proc bursting. So bursting is not going to be a big deal here. They're still fortified though, and the debuff that they apply to the tank, the stacking bleed debuff, does do a lot of damage. So you definitely want to be careful with those eels as well.
Yeah, should be no big eel for them indeed, as Method EU rears up and grabs the last boss, Vol'zith, the Whisperer here. Now, we know the common strat here, of course. Just go through the motions really quickly. They will get to the phase transition where they will abuse the healer, the mass healer damage buff, 90% increased damage for the rest of the fight by leaving the boss in the transition state casting as they go and clean up most of the rest of the trash in the room before returning and popping Bloodlust on the boss to finish it in one phase.
Yeah, that's why all of those teams are saving their Bloodlust, right? I think teams just do not have enough damage to pull this damage up without the Bloodlust, or it's just too risky. Because if you do get the second transition phase, if you don't have enough damage, you just lose way too much time. So teams are just saving their Bloodlust, and you can see they are in the transition phase right now. The damage dealers, of course, are in a different realm than the healer and the tank, and you have to deal with different kind of mobs, but it really should not be a problem for those kind of teams. Actually, there we go. Mirror's actually going down. I think he got hit by a tentacle, because if it was a cast going through, then everyone else would have died too. So probably getting hit by a tentacle. They do have one battle rush to get him back up, though.
But, you know, we did talk earlier to Mirrors, and he's actually a huge fan of the Ayaya meme, so it makes sense that he would get hit by the tentacle. It's just in his desire to do so. He's certainly just doing it for show and not an accident by any means. Method EU here, 88% on the board, and Method NA is still trying to figure out right now exactly how they're going to get past all of the trash and third reaping wave that they skipped earlier. Not all of them are near the bridge yet. JB finally across the bridge, and they are getting ready again with 9 deaths on the board. But Method EU about to finish off the 3 pull of trash right in front of Vol'zith and getting ready to pop their Bloodlust in just a moment.
Yeah, I think at this point, Method NA just has to like focus on the next game, really, because there's no way they're going to come back. Even if Method EU wipes at this point, there's no way. Method EU has to wipe multiple times even for Method NA to have a chance at all. And I think since our host and our analyst just got back to the desk, they also saw that the game is about to be over. So maybe they're just like, you know what, guys, let's focus on the next game. As Method EU is about to down the boss and only have to do 7% trash left to do.
That's actually not true. I told them there was free pizza here, so they came rushing over right now to the disappointment that there is indeed no food at the desk. Vol'zith the Whisperer, 15% for Method EU right now with 4 seconds left on their Bloodlust. Easily one phaseable, making sure none of those manifestations reach the boss. After this, they will just mass pull the remainder of the eels on the side and get their 100%. They waste no time doing so as they parade in on top of the group.
So they actually managed to keep the debuff on Sally. As you can see, the damage debuff is still on Sally there because they did not drop combat. So very well done by Method EU to not finish, to pull the mobs, the eels, while they were still in boss combat, to just keep this extra damage buff on Sally. As you can see, him doing 100k DPS here.
And the cheers come in for Method EU right now with a hugely dominant performance on the first map. Method NA is definitely going to have to regroup to try and take this to a Game 3.
Game 2 between EU and NA's Method Orgs on the MOTHERLOAD.
Well, hopefully they were able to kind of shake off those the mental drought that they had on that last map. Method NA is really going to need to bring it here if they want to stay alive in that upper bracket. Method EU, Method NA busting out right away, getting ready for the big pull across. You can already see Yoda on the distance on Method NA's side, grabbing tricks of the trade.
So thankfully, when we talked to Method NA, they actually said MOTHERLOAD is one of their best dungeons. Now the problem with MOTHERLOAD, they said, is that there's still some RNG involved and things can happen in this dungeon, but it's still one of their best maps, and they already showed that they can do really well as they played this map already. They only had 1 or 2 deaths at the very start on this very first pull. I think it was Shakib and Yoda Shakib and Lighty that died at the very start here, but other than that, they had a very clean run and a very fast run. So we'll see what they do this time around.
We will indeed. And MOTHERLOAD is a dungeon we've seen twice already today in some of the previous series. So we know just the dangers of this trash, and especially when it hits that raging, not to mention necrotic, on the tank. There's just so much splash damage on the group, not to mention huge amounts of tank damage coming in. So trash, very front load in this dungeon, 80% or so if it will be done and pulled into that first boss, and it can be extremely, extremely volatile.
Yeah, one more thing to note, though, is that Method EU, of course, was able to watch Method NA play this MOTHERLOAD yesterday already. So in case Method EU's strategy was actually slower than Method NA's, they could be like, oh, you know what, guys? We have to change something. We have to be faster. We have to beat Method NA. They have a very fast strategy, so we need to change something. And they had yesterday, or half of the day yesterday, and today to practice for this exact matchup. So I think both of those teams are going to show some very risky and some very big strategies here.
Big strategies and big pulls here out of Method EU as they combine their first reaping wave with a huge pull. Peacekeepers coming in left and right as well. Now, I did see a double mech jockey on the side there. I'm not sure if they used both of them into one Peacekeeper or if they meant to separate them in the first place, but nonetheless, huge amounts of damage coming in for Method EU as now starts to back off and get rid of those necrotic stacks. Already at 25%, meaning he's 50% unhealable. Yoda getting a charge in and dipping low, but no proc there for that cheat death as Nerf clap accruing not only the necrotic stacks, but a bunch of the reaping ones too, getting the dispel from JB as they chisel down the rest of their first reaping wave and the thugs as well.
Yeah, the necrotic is actually a big problem, as you can see now, actually dropping very low here as well. Mirror's getting charged, now having so many necrotic stacks and very hard to heal, as he just now managed to get away from the mobs, starting to kite now and dropping the necrotic too. But Shakib actually going down for Method and A as he got charged by the Thug. He was probably raging from his own raging ability, plus raging from the affix too, and just did so much damage. He basically got one-shot by the spot here.
Now Heroic leaping out, making sure that he doesn't chunk down and proc his trinket. And, you know, I actually caught up with Shakib yesterday, and he was beating himself up over the fact that he died twice in this dungeon yesterday via a charge from the Thug into a Shadow Smash. So once again, just so unlucky, gets charged by the Thug and gets killed. They did not use the battle res there, though, so he's back up on his feet right now, and both battle reses are available for the teams, as now Trinket actually has proc. Not going to have that available again for 6 minutes on Method EU's side, combining their second round of Reaping with another mass trash pull, making sure to get interrupts on those Ice Spritzers.
You just have to be so careful, and it's the job of the healer, of the Raster Druids, to make sure that they use their Soothe, their Raging Dispel on the right targets, because those thugs needs to be dispelled constantly, but we also have Raging, right? So you need to make sure that you're also dispelling jockeys if there's any, because they do so much single target damage to people. You also need to dispel Assassins, for example, to remove the tank damage. And we see Nerf just drop so low, but he did manage to get rid of the necrotic stacks, and Yoda also dropped pretty low, but he did manage to get healed back up. And you can see those charges coming in on JB. You need to dispel those thugs as much as possible. Yeah,
JB certainly quite stressed here with the amount of chunking damage going on in the group. Now, Nerf Clap, I don't believe, has actually procced his Trinket, nor does Yoda have a proc on that Chi Death. We'll see exactly as those party frames update out of combat. Sometimes they do update just a bit slow, but Method EU here trying to finish off the rest of the trash to proc their 6th Reaping Wave. So it seems that what Method EU's strategy here is to basically pull enough trash to spawn their next Reaping Wave, grab that Reaping, and pull once again the next round of trash, which will then spawn the subsequent Reaping. So they just have a very good ebb and flow going on here, about to hit 60% and proc their 3rd Reaping. They're a fair bit ahead of Method and A right now.
Yeah, and one more thing to note that we didn't really talk about earlier is the Bloodlust usage. So Method EU actually used the Bloodlust on the very first pull, while Method NA is saving their Bloodlust. Now, we've seen this before by Method NA. They were actually saving it for approximately 8 minutes into the dungeon, where they would pull the boss and use the Bloodlust there for the DK damage to get more single target damage, and of course it's a tyrannical dungeon as well. But Method EU kind of had this similar strategy, if I remember correctly, from the cups, where they wouldn't use their Bloodlust straight away and save it for the boss. But now they changed up their strategy and actually used it at the start of the dungeon.
Use it indeed, and Method and A actually having a nice little catch-up here with huge amounts of damage coming out of not only Shakib, of course, but just crazy damage coming out of Nerf Clap, the Prot Warrior tank on Method and A, to try and get a bit of claw of hope near Method EU, who has proc their 3rd Reaping, and once again, typically has combined it with probably just enough trash to proc their 4th Reaping Wave, which we expect for them to grab into the coin-operated Crowd Pummler, the first boss of the dungeon. One more Peacekeeper joins the fray just around the corner of the house there for Method EU, as Method and A is 55% trash on the board and will soon be procking their 3rd round of Reaping. But as you mentioned, Agura, that Bloodlust could be a turning factor for the teams later on.
Definitely. It will totally depend when exactly they choose to use it. We see Sally actually going down for Method EU. They do have a battle rest because they do have a DK in the team, so they did manage to get him back up, but this could have been a disaster. If they would have played their usual setup, which is double Rogue Monk, then there was no battle rest available, but thankfully they do have the DK rest to get Celia back up, so now they have no more battle rests available to them. So if anything else happens, they need to either run back or do something else, and at this point, once this Peacekeeper is down, they will proc their 80% Reaping Wave already, and they're most likely going to pull the Reaping Wave into the boss.
Yeah, as long as Celia is healthy on mana, which he is right now, about 80% mana for him right now, getting a couple regrowths out as that last Peacekeeper dies. They'll have just a moment to get out of combat should he need to drink, but he doesn't care. They get right in there and get as much damage in on the Pummler as they can, as Method and A 69% on trash, looking to proc their 4th Reaping Wave as well. They still have the Peacekeeper, the triple pack, of course, in front of the boss too, but Method EU doesn't care. They get ready with the 4th Reaping Wave here and are getting ready to pop their cooldowns on the coin-operated Crowd Pummler that has a 150% increased damage taken from those foot bombs.
Yeah, it's just if you look at the final time currently, it's 7 minutes into the dungeon and they're already on 83% trash and they're pulling the boss right now. So incredible time by Method EU. Method A, on the other hand, as I remember correctly, they did pull the boss at around 8 minutes the last time they played this dungeon. So they're in their schedule when it comes to timing, but Method EU just doing the trash at the start so much faster compared to Method NA, just doing such a good job. But again, they're out of battle resist, so any sort of mistake that Method U is going to do right now, and we have seen them make mistakes before in MOTHERLOAD,
yes, the minefield.
it's going to cost them a lot without any battle resist available to them.
Yes, the minefield of destiny for Azalea during, I believe, Week 2 Cup was quite unfortunate, but Method U here sitting pretty on 83%, 83% trash, 43% now on the coin-operated crowd pummler, the first boss of the dungeon, as Method NA is now at 86% trash, slightly ahead of Method EU, and has pulled the first boss with their 4th Reaping Wave as well. Hopefully we're going to see that Bloodlust come out of them. There it is, just as I say that, it lights up on the screen on the right side there, and they're going to try to catch up here. This is where they need to try and turn it around and counter Method EU's Bloodlust at the beginning of the dungeon, which was quite efficient in my opinion.
Yeah, this Bloodlust might actually just boost them on buff DPS by quite a lot because of this DK, right? You have the Reaping Wave boosting the single target damage of the DK, and then you also have the Bloodlust on top of that. So we can see Shakib just doing an insane amount of damage. Of course, this damage is not single target only, it's of course damage to the Reaping Wave as well. Unfortunately, we can't really see how much damage he did on the buff, but I can guarantee you he did a lot of damage. And Method E, on the other hand, is on 30% on the first boss here. Afterwards, they're most likely going to do a big pull, and we've seen teams struggle to just trash pack right after this boss because it's so much damage on the tank, and if you don't interrupt all the casts, it's going to be even more damage. So definitely going to keep an eye on Method U's pull here.
Yeah, those Rock Lancers are very, very spicy, and now does, I believe, have his trinket back right now. We're at almost in the 9-minute mark, and he procced it pretty early on. I don't see the debuff present on his player frame, but there goes Gingy getting ready with his tricks of the trade and getting a sap on that Earthshaper in the back, not wanting to have too many of those Rock Lances go out, as now gets in and pulls, already rocketing up in count for the necrotic stack, so he'll have to kind of dip out of there soon enough. They're starting to get their CC chain ready as well.
Yeah, we saw the stun come out of Mirrors already, and now still has 45 stacks. Even with the stun, it's just so many stacks applying to now immediately if you do such a big pull. But now it's kiting now, so he's away. Hopefully the mobs die soon, because if they don't die soon, some random damage dealer is going to die. You can see Fragnance is already off because he knows he has aggro, so he's the one kiting now. This is actually very well done by them because they know now has to kite, and once now is not generating any aggro anymore, it's going to be Fragnance who has aggro. So he went with now as well and just outranged him as well, so no one died. Very well done by them, popping their Shroud now and getting up to the next boss.
Yeah, they get up to the next boss, and not just that, but they will Shadow Meld there to get rid of that last Earthshaper that was sapped on the side from Gingy, not wanting to deal with that at all. The remaining 3% will likely come from the Earth Ragers on the path up here, and they'll only pull that towards the end of Azeroth. Now, we know this boss is very difficult in terms of front-loaded damage with these Earth Ragers. We saw it earlier, just how dangerous they can be with a couple of deaths on the Buff War team. They have 13 seconds left on their Bloodlust, so we'll have to see if they want to commit it here, as Method NA has finally downed the first boss and will be doing their own large pull. Now, they had 3% trash advantage, not something too substantial, but it will allow them to not have to pull about 2 or 3 more mobs over what Method EU had to do.
Yeah, we see some more subs coming in here as well for Method NA's side because, as you said, it just has more percentage. And we'll see how they do. We can see Shakib also just popping off in damage, as you can see right now. This is the strength of the DK. This is why they can do those huge pulls, is because those DKs have the huge burst AoE cooldowns. You can see the mobs dying so quickly, but Nerf actually dropping very low, and he does have a huge amount of bursting stacks. This is why he's cutting back, but he should be able to survive here. While Method EU is fighting Azeroth, thankfully Elia was fixated by 2 of the rages at the very start, and of course if your healer is fixated, it's much better on the DPS because they can just continue hitting the boss without thinking about anything, while the healer is doing all the jobs as usual.
As usual, of course. Method NA getting right up in the gully of Azeroth, getting ready to pull as well. Method NA already halfway through Azeroth, 97% trash on the board versus Method NA's 98, but it looks like a bit of disaster here as Nerf Clap actually, I believe, accidentally pulled on the side, and Lighty had to go with him. Same with Shakib. JB safely out of combat, so he will be able to res the rest of his group, but that's an extra 15 seconds worth of deaths on the board, not to mention the amount of time taken here for the res and the quick rebuff before they get started on Azeroth. So the last thing they needed when they're already a fair bit behind on Method EU was this kind of slip up, but they get started nonetheless as Method EU gets the last 1/3 of health on Azeroth, reaching that 35%.
I think the few deaths that just happened to Method NA is not actually a huge problem because they were behind either way. So something has to happen for Method EU for Method NA to win, right? So, but it's bad for their mentality, because if they know it's such a close matchup, they're one game behind already. They don't know what's going on with Method EU. They don't have a screen to watch what Method EU is doing. They don't know if they're ahead, if they're behind. So for their mentality, this is so bad, because they know now Method EU probably has a clean run. They're probably doing really well, and we just lost 3 people, and we had to have a mass rest back up. So now the pressure is going to be on them even higher than before, and it might affect their mentality. Well, Method EU is already done with Azeroth and has to only kill those 2 Stone Furies to get the 100% trash.
Yeah, and they're going to skip the 5th Reaping Wave here in a moment as well. You can already see them getting ready to go near that minecart, and they're going to rush over right away. I believe they're actually just going to Shadow Meld it up here by the looks of it, and they're going to go around the side of the minefield, which of course we've seen some teams do before, rather than just go down the minecart in the middle. Headed by Xaylia here. They've procced their 100%, and they're getting ready to run through the rest of this trash, and then Shadow... Oh, no, of course they didn't Shadow Meld. They have to use Shadow Meld here for this trash right in front of Rixa Fluxflame. So now goes on ahead, charges through, leaps across the platform as the rest of the party goes off to the side to make sure that they don't have any residual aggro. Method NA trying to claw back into action, 44% here on Azeroth.
Now, Method EU does have their Bloodlust available back now, but I'm pretty sure they're only going to get 1 more Bloodlust, so they can either save it for the last boss or they use it on this boss, depending on what they want to do. Now, Rixa Fluxflame is a difficult boss, specifically in the tank damage, because it does do a lot of magic damage. The other difficult mechanic is the magic debuff that the boss applies to the 2 closest players, but because of the setup that they're running with the AMS and the cloak from the rogue, and also just the monk cooldowns, they can very well handle the debuff.
They can well handle it indeed. Now getting chunked there. Just a bit of damage, of course, as we mentioned, with the fire can only really use that ignore pain just to help stifle some of the damage, so Xaylia can sit in there in kitty form and just get as much damage as possible. We know Xaylia likes to min-max and play as offensive as he can throughout the dungeon. Certainly always adds up. A lot of different abilities, including Spell Reflect, as Nagura mentioned, that can be used for those chemical burns to make sure that furthermore, not only is the boss taking increased damage, but the players are not taking too much damage, so that once again, Xaylia can only dispel 1 and then get right back to DPS. Azeroth, 6% here for Method NA, 98% on the board, and they do have one of those Stone Furies, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, they do. That is going to proc their 100% trash, and therefore the 5th Reaping, which they will run down and skip. But they are... This is a fair bit behind. I mean, you pretty much nailed it, Nagura. If Method EU doesn't wipe, then the game's pretty much done.
Yeah, I think Method EU just having such a good time here, just their strategy so insanely fast. I think it was all about this very first trash before the first boss. The 80% trash that Method EU got was just a minute or 2 even faster than Method NA. It was such a good strategy that they pulled off here. I think it's even going to be a sub 20 minutes MOTHERLOAD here from Method EU, which we haven't seen before from any other team. So if Method EU does have a clean run, killing Rixa Fluxflame here and also killing the last boss without any more incidents, then it's just going to be an insane time by Method EU, and it's going to be a 2-0 for them. But again, it's still this boss left and the last boss left for Method EU. They didn't make a lot of mistakes so far, so it's unlikely, but it can happen.
Yeah, they're certainly in the zone right now, and they do have the safety net if one of the battle rests is available too, with 2 different characters that could do it. So even if the healer goes down, Fragments can get him up. If somebody else goes down, Xaylia or Fragments can get them up, if it's not Fragments himself. So a lot of options here just in case things start to get out of control for them. Method NA, once again, 80% on Rixa Fluxflame, so they're a good almost 75% behind, 70% now behind on the boss versus their EU counterpart, and the extra 3 deaths on the board. They certainly have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, it's so much, to be honest, it's just so much pressure for Method NA. They've played against Method EU, I believe, 8 times against them in the cups, and this is the 8th time for them to play against them, and they've lost every single time the whole series. Just so devastating, so much pressure on them to win these games against their most difficult competitor here, Method EU. And now, if they actually end up losing this map, then they have to play 3 maps tomorrow if they want to win the whole tournament, which is going to be so much more preparation they will have to do compared to Method EU. And it's also the BlizzCon spot on the line, as we talked about earlier. So just so much pressure on Method NA to win this whole thing. While Method EU just kind of, they're expected to win. They're there. Haven't lost a single map before, so Method EU just on the last boss here. They're comfortable. They have only 1 death so far. Very well done by Method EU here.
Well, indeed, and they commit their bloodlust here early on in phase 1 as Mogul Razling is already halfway through that first phase at 75%, while Rixa for Method NA is only still at 30%. Not to mention after that they need to mount up, do all the trash, skip up the hill, and then get started on Mogul as well. Method EU about to have their bloodlust fall off, and they will be transitioning the boss in about 15%.
Interesting that they choose to use the Bloodlust at the start. I think we've also seen a team before that used it on the pull instead of later in phase 2. It might have just been because of cooldowns being up, specifically DK cooldowns, which are very important for their single target damage. If they have their 10-minute army ready and other big cooldowns, then the Bloodlust actually boosts their damage by quite a bit, while other classes might not be so affected by them, like a Rogue who constantly does have cooldowns up, because we know Rogues just have everything all the time. And now Razdunk is about to actually sadly getting hit by the frontal here, by the cone, but he did manage to survive. Of course, also the missile is being targeting Xayah because he's the only ranged target, so he will get every single one of them.
You will indeed, and yeah, he cut it a bit close there. It took 2 ticks of that Gatling gun and dipped to 13%. But again, they do, as we mentioned, they have the safety net. Fragments can res them just in case. So they've gone over to transition here. The oil drums or oil barrels have dropped across the arena here as Amirs make sure to bait the first one over there in the corner, and they deal with the 2 Sky Scorchers that come up for them. Method and A has finally started on Mogul Razdunk. The rest of the run for Method and A has actually been like very clean. Everything's been great for them. Just that one hiccup with Shakib, and he just unluckily got charged again. But really, it was the 3 deaths on Azeroth that set them back a fair ways. And in my opinion, and I think you back me up on this, just probably not the best strategy for that first Bloodlust. I think Method EU certainly had a bit more efficient use out of it, and as they start phase 2 here.
Yeah, this is also something I've been talking about earlier, right? If Method EU was watching Method NA do the MOTHERLOAD yesterday, and they were like, you know what, we're approximately a minute slower than them. Let's fix our strategy. We need to be faster to beat Method NA because we're gonna play them in MOTHERLOAD tomorrow. So Method EU had like a whole day to figure out the MOTHERLOAD strategy to be faster than Method NA, and they definitely figured out a strategy, as we can see here. Having a sub 20-minute MOTHERLOAD just so incredibly fast here, very well done by Method EU. Just insane strategy and insane play efficiency coming out of Method EU here, as they're about to down Mogul Razdunk here with only 1 death in the whole dungeon.
Yeah, and 1 death, and it was really just an unlucky death. I believe Xayah got charged or clipped by something early on in the trash. They had to commit their battle rest to it, but was no problem for them, and certainly didn't hiccup them at all as Mogul Razdunk reaches single digits of percent here, 8% now, as Xayah baits out the last homing missile, and we should maybe get 1 more Gatling gun here. Method NA doing what they can, and they already start cheering in the background here, I believe, as Mogul Razdunk goes down to 2%. They can feel it. They don't know where the other team is, but they can feel it as Mogul Razdunk goes down here, and Method EU maintains their undefeated streak, cheering in the background, and they have secured a spot for BlizzCon.
Big sigh of relief, big cheers behind us as Method EU takes the series 2-0. They will be going to BlizzCon. They will be going to our grand finals tomorrow here, and you gotta